One day, on the eve of the distant future, the game suddenly turned into reality. Phenomena such as hordes of monsters and dangerous dungeons have become commonplace in the human world. Powerful and terrible creatures mercilessly exterminated people. It seemed to everyone that the world was on the verge of extinction. But unexpectedly, talents gifted with a sign from God came to the rescue. People who called themselves hunters actively awakened their strength, fighting back against the monsters. In the new world, the right of the strong became above the law, and therefore, many hunters began to improve themselves. The number of hunters grew. They descended into the dungeons more and more often, and destroyed the bosses there, which eventually caused the rise of the Age of Hunters. Following the narrative, events moved to one of the hunters' squares. Some people were panting and stepping over the steps. The guy was upset that he had missed such a good chance to find a good profession. He was not at all happy with the fact that, in the end, he could end up being just an ordinary warrior. The guy remembered that in their world, a warrior was the most common and also the most fatal profession. Suddenly, a group of bullies appeared behind the guy, who in every possible way belittled his awakened abilities. One of the bullies even hugged the boy reassuringly, complaining that awakening as a warrior meant condemning oneself to menial work. Suddenly, the guy clapped his hands with all his might. Turning around, the guy pretended that he hadn't noticed the bully, whose name was Faye, before. The guy hinted that magicians, which Faye was, were not very strong physically. Faye bared his teeth and was not averse to accepting the guy's challenge, while also giving his friends a chance to stretch their arms. But at that moment, the sycophants called out to Faye. The guy also noticed the place where everyone was now staring. Below, in the square, people were actively shouting. Meanwhile, a raiding team of spirit hunters was moving towards the characters. The guy couldn't believe his eyes that he was about to meet the strongest guild in the entire eastern city. At the front, pushing people aside in front of him, walked the guild leader, whose name was Roshan. At that very moment, without further ado, Faye rushed past the guy. Running up to Roshan, Faye began to ingratiatingly beg him to take him into another guild. The horned girl responsible for recruiting into the guild became interested in Faye's candidacy. Having tempted the raiders with words about Faye being a rare ice mog, they decided to give him a card. The boy could hardly comprehend why a person like Faye was able to receive an invitation card to such a powerful guild. Requests from Faye's friends immediately followed, telling the horned girl their specializations. But she did not want to waste time on insignificant thieves and archers. Out of the blue, deciding to try his luck, the guy's voice was heard, naming his specialization as a warrior. The horned girl's eyes flashed irritably, and she ordered the guy to wait. Afterwards, leaving some in bewilderment and others in disappointed feelings, the horned girl followed Roshan. But unlike everyone else, humility had long since overtaken the guy, because in their world, only strength mattered. The guy didn't expect any success at all, much less getting into the ranks of the elite guilds. The guy turned around and started to go down, when he heard a conversation between two of Faye's henchmen. They actively discussed the upcoming guild raid, the use of teleports, and also a certain black dragon. The information about the black dragon almost threw the guy off his stride. The hero knew that the black dragon was one of the powerful bosses that lived in the equally great S-class dungeon. It just so happened in the guy's world that any death was not the end of life, and only lowers the level to the rank of a human. Countless guilds failed trying to crush the black dragon, whose name was Athos. Afterwards, the guy's thoughts touched upon the spirit hunters guild he had just met. He believed that they clearly had a chance to defeat Athos. But all these thoughts did not distract the guy from thinking about his own fate, which consisted of impending hopeless poverty. And at that very moment, a secret voice informed the hero of an imminent connection. Swirls and streams of energy engulfed the hero. A panel appeared in front of the guy, informing him that an incomplete system had been linked. New panels, appearing one after another, hinted to the hero that he, obviously, should become the boss of one of the dungeons. Having analyzed this information, the guy expected that, having become a boss and killed the raider teams, he would instantly level up to the maximum level, and also take all the hunter's equipment for himself. On the other hand, the guy was afraid that in battle they would be able to defeat him too. At this point in time, due to the hero's long reflections, the system warned about the shutdown due to host inactivity. The countdown to shutdown began, and the guy, with a trembling hand, froze before a difficult choice. In the end, the hero decided that it was better to die as a dungeon boss than to spend his life as an insignificant worm. Literally 2 seconds before the connection was cut off, the guy clicked on the consent window. Afterwards, the guy furiously proclaimed that the download of his new life was about to begin. The ringing sound was heard again, and the system was activated. The hero mentally prayed for reincarnation into the strongest of the bosses, after which the teleportation process began. As soon as the glow died down, the guy heard the cracking of stones and the roar of monsters from the dungeon. Mentally wondering where he was, the guy opened his eyes. Before his eyes appeared a multitude of dragons, which the hero personified as somewhat larger in size. Suddenly, someone in a robe addressed the guy, calling him a king who had finally awakened. Unable to believe that the system had transformed the hero into a powerful being, the dragon awkwardly lowered his head. Looking at his body, the boy concluded that he had indeed become a level 99th boss. Beside him, kneeling, his loyal dragon warriors awaited orders. The guy was gradually recovering from the recent shock. Unknowingly, he triggered the system. A panel with a huge list of talents, skills, and other characteristics, like those of a dragon boss, immediately appeared. The hero found his power truly wondrous. At that very moment, the guy remembered how earlier, the dragon boss, due to its high percentage immunity to damage, easily dealt with the hunters. But in addition to his exclusive skills, the hero who was reborn as a dragon also possessed impressive physical strength. Feeling a previously unseen freedom, the hero let out a disconcerting roar. The guy was happy, because in fact, he could not have expected such a gift from fate. While enjoying his new role, the boy was interrupted by the voice of a mysterious creature in a robe, who called on his king to calm his anger. Deciding to play the role of the boss, the hero ordered his subjects to rise in a commanding voice. Shaking with fear, the creature in the robe began to deify the hero. The guy listened with interest to the words of the creature in the robe about how the dragon boss was still quite young, but would definitely be able to crush humanity. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, the boss dragon's vision caught on a cage hanging nearby. The beautiful elf in the cage was awakened by the dragon's roar. Breathing heavily, the nymph began to threaten the dragon that if he did not let the girl go, the entire race of elves would rise up against him. Knocking on the cage, the guy looked with interest at the elf, whose race played the role of an NPC in the new world. Suddenly, the entire space of the dungeon shook. The elf looked hopefully at the source of the noise, believing that the dragon's hours were numbered, because the players had arrived for the monster's soul. The elf looked around in fear and froze when she felt the intense and unnatural gaze of the dragon boss on her. Afterwards, the hero thought about who could have appeared in the dungeon, and it was probably the Guild of Spirit Hunters. Knowing the guild's successes, but also assessing his own strength, the guy did not expect an easy victory. Then, the hero decided to prepare. His dragon eye lifted the curtain on the area where the hunters were currently discussing. Following the sound, the hero soon discovered the leading team of the Spirit Hunter Guild. The hunters walked briskly and looked confident enough to crush the black dragon. Soon, the hunters met their first opponents, who turned out to be young wyverns. The leader of the group spoke up, ordering the main number of hunters to concentrate on the largest opponents, while the tanks would deal with the rest. By acting wisely, the hunters successfully made their way forward. Watching their progress and actively thinking about how to respond, something suddenly came to the dragon boss's mind. Having assessed the hunters as professionals, the hero decided to complicate their progress. In an instant, the joyful cries of most of them were interrupted. Unexpectedly, almost on the heads of the hunters, a huge monster with incredible characteristics descended. The elite dragon warrior, emitting a roar, frightened at least half of the participants of the campaign. But before the group leader could do anything, the elite monster teleported forward. Verbally threatening to end the lives of the insignificant humans, the warrior dragon launched a blow that was skillfully intercepted by a tank from the group. But at that moment, using the skill of his sword, Roshan's voice sounded, calming his party members and giving commands. Then, magic burst out from the sword, striking the dragon warrior with a pillar of flame. While the hero was remotely studying the habits of hunters, the elf in the cage was criticizing the dragon boss because he was sending his subordinates to certain death. After grabbing several dragon warriors by the scruff of the neck, the hero decided to raise the stakes. A minute later, 6 large monsters were thrown at the players at once. The hunters were terrified, as they were confronted by a greater number of elite opponents than ever before. Among them, even Roshan was not confident of victory, and therefore, he turned to his leader for clarification. Clenching his fists, the guild leader loudly proclaimed that the spirit hunters would stop at nothing. Then, a grueling battle began, where some classes of players defended others, who tried in every way to defeat elite opponents. Meanwhile, the hero found the players' resilience excessive. Ignoring all the elf's belittlement of himself, the hero hoped that the players, at the very least, would not be able to defeat him. The battle was soon over, and the hero could only wonder if the players still had any aces up their sleeves. Watching the players move, the hero suddenly realized that they were moving in the opposite direction from the boss. Running his claw over the magical reflection, the boy tried to find the goal of the players' route. Not long after, they found the tomb of the Dragon Slayer. As it turned out, there was a powerful artifact there that would allow one to ignore the dragon boss's talents. The hero became angry and flapped his wings, frightening his subjects. The boy realized that the hunters were following a strictly defined strategy in order to minimize the boss's abilities and easily defeat him. The hero's rage was so great that the cage with the elf attached to the chain almost fell into the abyss. The elf commented on the unusual behavior of the boss dragon. Apparently for the first time, he was going to leave his lair. Flapping its wings a few more times, the boss dragon rose into the air. The warrior dragons chanted the name of the king of Athos, who decided to personally confront the hunters. Having performed an aerial somersault, the hero intended to ruin the hunters' intentions. With another flap of its wings, the boss dragon flew across the sky. At the same time, Roshan began to doubt the correctness of his leader's intentions to continue the campaign, because their supplies were running low. Looking at Roshan, the guild leader slammed the book shut, which from his words, could not fail the group. Also, the guild leader reassured Roshan that the boss is a dragon, a primitive creature that does not go beyond its lair. Gritting his teeth, the guild leader intended to fully repay the debt to the black dragon, who had drunk a fair amount of blood. At that very moment, Roshan's satisfied voice was heard, who was counting on freeing the appetizing elf at the same time, who was supposed to fulfill any whims of her savior. A minute later, the other players on the expedition felt strange vibrations in the air coming from the high clouds above them. Staring at the sky, everyone saw wings, but no one suspected what kind of creature they were about to encounter. The next moment, one of the players on the expedition called out to the guild leader in a panic. Another, on the contrary, noted the indescribable dimensions of what he saw. There was a crash, and something landed in front of the players, almost reaching the tops of the mountains. Black wings spread out. The guild leader felt a sense of ecstasy. He never expected to meet the boss himself in such a place. At the same time, one of the players cursed that their guild had been brazenly deceived. Without the dragon's heart, panic gripped them. Frozen, everyone waited for at least some kind of command from the leader. Suddenly, the roar of the dragon boss was heard, turning into a rough voice and mocking the hunters. Next, the hero raised his head to the sky. The players began to back away, realizing that now the dragon boss would use his skills. But then, unexpectedly, a cast lightning bolt struck the dragon's head, causing only negative damage. With a spark of magic, the guild leader stepped forward, calling on the other hunters to unite and not give up. The guild leader motivated his fighters in every way to fight the dragon boss, be it the desired money, equipment, or even women. The hero watched as, in an instant, the hunters united, now intending to defeat the boss. With his health bar full, the hero looked with interest at the hunters next to him. As an experiment, the hero allowed the hunters to make the first move. The guild leader's commands immediately began to sound. The loyal fighters took up positions, activating their skills. As it turned out, the head of the guild intended to reach the artifact first, when suddenly Roshan called out to him. The boss dragon waved its tail, and all the hunters were ordered to duck immediately. There was an explosion, and the boss dragon's tail hit some rock. The hero had no intention of giving the players any respite. At that very moment, something flashed in the sky above the hero. A second later, streams of fire rained down on the dragon's head. Realizing that it was time to act, the other players also went on the attack. At the same time, despite the damage the group had suffered, the voice of the guild leader was heard, calling on all the surviving players to continue fighting. Then, on command, all the players' boosters were directed at Roshan and the guild leader. The hero himself found the guild's attacks to be quite insignificant. However, deciding not to take unnecessary risks, the dragon boss went on the defensive. At the same time, the guild leader commanded the players to fire a volley. In one blow, arrows and various magic were fired into the body of the boss dragon. As the most powerful damage dealers, the attack was supported by Roshan and the guild leader. Ultimately, a giant pillar of fire formed at the site of the battle. The voice of the guild leader was heard again, preparing his people for a second attack on the dragon boss. Abruptly, his bravura speeches were interrupted. The smoke cleared, and the dragon boss looked at the players, having only suffered 10,000 damage out of 5 million health. However, the guild leader had no intention of giving up. He urged his people to continue their attacks, believing that the dragon boss would no longer use skills. At the same time, the hero felt incredible boredom, as if a horde of annoying midges were trying to overcome him. Meanwhile, the hero sincerely respected the hunters who, despite all the failures, still did not give up. On the other hand, the dragon boss knew that nothing could save the players. After which, with a roar, the boss dragon ascended into the sky. Streams of fire poured onto the ground, causing screams from the players caught in these waves. Another second, and the game of hunters was over. Having descended from the heavens, the hero noted with satisfaction that even such a powerful guild could not do anything against him. However, in the midst of the scorched earth, some movement was still detected. The charred guild leader knelt down and urged the other players to rush back into battle. Again and again, he tried to inspire those who had already died from the dragon boss's fire. At some point, the hero lowered his head to the guild leader. At some point, the guild leader began shouting and accusing the dragon boss of being unnaturally active. Even when the hero opened his mouth, languishing from the internal heat. The guild leader continued to assure only himself that the dragon boss had used up all of his skills. Immediately, a new wave of flames crawled across the ground. As he was engulfed in flames, the guild leader cursed the black dragon with his last words and swore that one day they would meet again. As soon as the last intruder in the dungeon was defeated, the system, ringing with notifications, began to reward the guy with multiple experience points. Before the hero's eyes, his level scale was constantly being replenished with new and new stripes. Ultimately, the hero whose name was Yang gained 20 levels of experience, as well as the rare transformation profession. Suddenly, Ian stopped enjoying the rising levels and the ringing of notifications. His dragon eye caught on the bright stripes of light that emanated from the player's equipment. Jan's eyes darted from object to object. Here and there lay diamond swords, sacred bows, and other blessed armor. The boss dragon, opening his mouth, couldn't believe his luck. Looking at the bow that Roshan had previously wielded, Yang imagined that he was probably grief-stricken by now. Next, Jan began to look through the huge number of potions that the hunters left behind. But among all the motley amount of equipment, something caught Jan's particular attention. The dragon boss froze, looking at the gem that could remove the level restrictions. Among other equipment, Ian also found a fire sword, which was hypothetically capable of killing anyone. Immediately, a notification bell rang from the system, which required confirmation of the equipment that Jan had selected. Without changing anything, the hero confirmed his choice. A glow appeared that engulfed the boss dragon. A beam formed and the world before Jan's eyes disappeared for a second or two. Afterwards, the hero discovered that, miraculously, the system had teleported him home. Having decided to double-check his skills, the hero called up the character window, after which he shouted with pleasure, because his stats corresponded to the 20th level. Afterwards, Jan began to scatter the skill points he had received. As soon as the hero confirmed his choice, a surge of unprecedented power engulfed him. As soon as the waves of power absorbed by the hero ceased, Jan discovered that his home had suffered considerable damage. Then, looking at the wall clock, Jan decided that it was too late to go anywhere, and therefore, the hero left completing the quests for the next day. Smiling contentedly and flexing his arms, Jan said that he needed to regain his strength. A new day has arrived, and the scene has moved to the building of the Spirit Hunters Guild. Back inside, covering her mouth, the horned girl couldn't believe that their guild leader had lost a level. The guild leader himself, named Lei, was angry that almost his entire squad had died despite following instructions. Gradually, the attention of those present turned to Roshan, who was in a very deplorable state, and also, somewhere, had lost his bow. At the same time, the sobbing of the magician was heard, who was grieving because he had not seen the palace of the elves. Clenching his fist until it cracked, Lei said that he wanted to have a serious conversation with the heavenly pavilion that sold the guild that failed tactic. Lei swore to his men that one way or another, he would get answers. The action changed again, moving to a place where some loading and unloading work was taking place. It turned out that all these goods were delivered to none other than Yan. Suddenly, the stacks of boxes that were being unloaded one after another began to shake. They tried to call out to the girl who was happily jumping towards the place where the boxes had collapsed. Hearing her name, she came to her senses. But at the same time, she saw piles of boxes that were falling on the little girl. It seemed as if tragedy was inevitable. But then, jumping up, Jan grabbed the boxes with one hand. Calling Jan brother, the local children immediately began to run to him. The old man was also glad to see the hero. Moreover, considering Jan to be a very successful young man. Coming closer, the old man hoped that Jan had not joined any guild, because not long ago, one of them was destroyed by a ferocious monster. The old man once again reminded the hero that if he was not overly careful, he would easily lose his experience and level. The hero promised not to get involved in trouble, but nevertheless, he was in a hurry to attend to other matters. Jan began to leave, leaving the old man in his thoughts, because he did not know that the boy had already managed to wake up. Next, the action moved to the temple, where the recent defeat of one of the guilds by the Black Dragon was being discussed in full swing. As he passed by, Jan discovered that the guild's failure had now become public property. From the rumors, the hero realized that the confidence of the guild's actions was based on the data that was purchased from the Heavenly Pavilion. Yin expected that the next opponents to appear in his dungeon would be the pavilion itself, as the highest-ranked guild. At that moment, a familiar voice, but accusatory towards him, was heard behind the hero. As he approached, Fei began to tease Yan again, complaining that he still couldn't find a guild for himself. Suddenly, Fei became filled with ice magic, deciding to teach Yan a lesson once and for all. Having started casting magic, Fei tried to scare Yan in advance, so that he would not be able to resist the guild member. But the next moment, a fist flew into Fei's smug face. With a thunderous sound, the bully flew away. Finally falling, Fei, to the horror of his friends, had only minimal health left. Immediately after this, Yang turned to Fei's friends, hinting that it was their turn. Apologizing to the hero in every possible way, they immediately began to run away. Suddenly, a couple of claps of hands were heard behind January. Wearing a charming dress with slits, the tower guide admired the hero's strength. The hero hastened to inform the one that he had come in order to pass through the portal. Leading Yan along, the guide began to think. Because even though the guy had a level 20 aura, he himself did not have the necessary appearance. The girl had no idea what a great secret was hidden beneath Jan's appearance. Soon, she led the hero to the Statue of Movement, which was supposed to help Yan in everything. Jan looked up, seeing a giant statue. From such quantities, the hero caught his breath for a second or two. As soon as Yan got even closer to the statue, the guide advised him to take 3-star quests instead of 4, as everyone else did. Smiling sweetly, the guide complained about Jan's profession as a weak warrior. The hero chuckled willfully in response and extended his hand. Afterwards, a panel appeared with a description of Jan's characteristics, and the transfer of the task began. Soon, a list of various tasks appeared in front of Jan. After reviewing the list, Yana was particularly interested in the 5-star task. The guide launched into a long explanation that such tasks, which appeared only once a year, were the most difficult, and therefore no one ever took them on. In this regard, the guide had not previously mentioned tasks of this level when talking to Jan. From a conversation with the guide, it became clear to Jan that tasks of this level involved not only hunting mobs, but also destroying the boss, and alone. The hero found such a mission suicidal without outside help. But on the other hand, completing it promised divine rewards. The wait dragged on, and the guide took the floor again, recommending that Jan accept the 3-star assignment. The hero thanked the girl for her help, and she smiled approvingly. The very next moment, Ian accepted the 5-star mission. The process of accepting the task began. The countdown started, to which the girl guide only had time to shudder and be surprised. Clenching his fist, the hero let her know that he had expected nothing less. Also, Jan urged the girl not to be afraid for herself, promising to return before the timer ended. After which, with a confident gait, the hero headed towards the exit. As soon as Yan disappeared from the guide's sight, the girl was overcome with confusion, because she had to urgently report something like this to the abbot. Next, the action moved to the teleportation center, where some technical problems were observed. Although with some displeasure, the hero took this information calmly. Many other players also found technical glitches in the teleport to be normal, especially if the teleport was located to a small town. But then, one of the players named Gu noticed Yan in the queue. Shu immediately jumped up to her, starting to find out all the details of Gu's acquaintance with Yang. Gu was truly scared when she realized that Yang, being a first-level warrior, was heading to a location where the enemies were 20 levels higher than him. The girl didn't even have time to say anything to Jan, as the hero was already entering the portal. A couple of seconds passed, and a teleportation beam of light struck somewhere in the middle of the lunar jungle location. Finding himself in a new place, Jan began to study the surrounding views. Not noticing anyone nearby, Jan decided that all the monsters were currently busy with other hunters. One more moment and the hero dodged the wolf's attacks. Looking back, Yang didn't expect to encounter opponents so quickly. In any other situation, John would have faced certain death. But the hero prepared himself by taking equipment with him. Having made a gesture, the sword in the hero's hand burst into flames. Afterwards, pleased with himself, Jan swung the sword that he had obtained with incredible difficulty. The hero was incredibly lucky, because thanks to the previously selected artifact, he could freely use items of any level. Although in reality, before achieving success, John spent a lot of precious stones on an unsuccessful combination. Suddenly, deciding to fix his financial problems, Jan called an auction and put Roshan's bow up for auction with a grin. At that moment, the wolves decided to launch a new attack, colliding with the shield that had protected John. Then, Yang swung his sword in front of him, releasing streams of flame from the blade. Fiery whirlwinds engulfed the wolves. Just one swing, and 15 of the 100 wolves were already defeated. Next, the hero used a special stone to attract even more wolves to himself. A couple of minutes passed, and now Yana was surrounded by new creatures. With a sly grin, the hero decided to use a combination of an elixir and a special scroll against the wolves to summon a firestorm. Then, using the items, Yang set the firestorm into action. But no matter how many wolves the hero burned, their number only increased. Taking out a new scroll, Yang intended to respond to the number of ever-increasing wolves with the number of items at his disposal. At the same time, nearby, some players were outraged that they were not encountering any monsters at all. As it turned out, the monsters that the players encountered simply ran away in the other direction, as if something was beckoning them. But then, it dawned on one of the players that such behavior of the monsters could only indicate the use of a summoning stone. The players decided to hurry up in order to teach a lesson to the impudent guy who decided that he was the only one with a mission in this location. They rushed together into the nearest forest until a great pillar of flame burst out from there, towards the sky. From the noise, the din, and the howling wind, the players were barely able to stand still. Realizing that they were about to face someone whose level was significantly higher than level 3, the players suddenly remembered their other business and hurried to disperse. At the same time, Jan was pleased to note that the first objective of his mission to clear out the monsters was completed. The hero was happy that he had done it so quickly, even though he had cheated. After a little while, Jan reached the habitat of the wolf boss of this location. At the same time, in anticipation of the upcoming fight with the boss, a group of 3 players were also looking at the cave. Quite quickly, the players discussed among themselves the tactics of the battle with the boss, where the defender should come to the fore. Suddenly, they all became silent as they heard someone's footsteps. Before their eyes appeared the figure of Jan, who, laughing, was walking towards the cave. Initially, players were upset by the appearance of Ian, but then decided to use the hero as bait for the boss. As soon as the hero disappeared from the players' field of vision, the ground beneath their feet shook violently. Without even moving, Jan met this artificially created shaking with the utmost calm. As it turned out, by mass exterminating the wolves, the hero angered the boss, thereby increasing his defensive stats. Seeing how the alpha wolf had changed, the players who had been secretly watching Jan were no longer so eager to get into battle. In the end, one of them, after cursing a lot, decided to leave the group. But as soon as he took a couple of steps, his face was distorted by fear. At the same time, Jan literally killed the boss with one swing of his sword. A notification window then popped up, informing the hero that all accepted tasks had been completed. A little later, Ian looked at the items that dropped from the boss. Having picked up just one single sphere of alpha wolf power, Ian finally decided to leave the location. Seeing the hero leaving the battle with the boss, one of the players, having gathered courage and politely, decided to ask Jan for permission to pick up other items. Baring his teeth menacingly and striking the ground with the tip of his sword, Jan remembered that the other players had planned to use the hero as bait. Afterwards, Jan deliberately squeezed the crystal core in his palm, making it clear that the player must obtain something similar for himself. Finally, Jan left the player to his own devices and went about his other business. The other 2 players couldn't get over the idea that someone completely nondescript had defeated the boss with literally one blow. After some time, Jan returned to the temple to hand in the task. There was a short pause, after which, at the top of her voice, the guide was surprised that the hero had completed the mega-complex task so quickly. In an instant, the guide rechecked the status of the task, hesitantly confirming Jan's words. The girl looked at Jan cautiously, not knowing what to think about him. Meanwhile, the hero himself wanted to learn about the privileges that would be available after completing a mega-complex quest. Coughing nervously, the guide asked Jan to follow her. Having taken the lead, the guide recalled that, fortunately, she had managed to tell her abbot about the talent that was hidden in the hero. Meanwhile, the girl actively assessed Jan from another point of view, hoping to get his phone number. A little later, the guide brought Jan to the statue. Taking a step forward, the hero immediately came under a strange influence. Jan himself felt that at that moment, he was being endowed with powerful energy. A second later, aura energy wrapped around his hand. Then another one, another and another, in a variety of colors, giving various bonuses to the hero. Eventually, the auras intertwined to form the highest form of orange hue. In an instant, Jan gained a new level and also improved his class, becoming a warrior mage. The hero did not have time to read the overlapping notifications, finally concluding that now the hero's level had risen from 20 to 34. But the main reward for completing such a difficult task was a book of spells that appeared in Jan's hands by itself. Ian immediately used the spell from the book, summoning a magical blade into his hands. The hero found it incredible that, through the spellbook, he could create absolutely any weapon, and also improve it along with the skill itself. Jan was so satisfied with the list of rewards that from now on he was going to take on tasks only of a similar level. However, the question of privileges remained open. But just as the girl guide wanted to tell Jan everything, she was interrupted by the clicking of someone else's heels. Lulling with her gentle voice, the woman in unusual clothes took this task upon herself. Introducing herself as Abbess Bai, the woman came to personally escort Jan. The girl guide, having bowed obligingly, handed Jan over to the abbess. But inside, she was grieving, because she had not been able to get to know the hero better. Bai extended her hand and suggested that Jan move to another room where the two of them would not be disturbed while they conversed. Having agreed, the hero took the abbess by the hand. Teleportation magic was immediately activated. There was a vibration in the air, and in an unknown room with a high ceiling, a chandelier swayed. Next, Jan and the abbess moved to a special room. The abbess folded her hands, as if having guessed Jan's thoughts, and did not consider herself powerful, but something similar. She saw the hero himself. As it turned out, Jan was the first in 10 years to complete a task of this level. After calling the system, Bai informed Jan that he was entitled to a significant discount in stores, as well as a monthly allowance of 10 million. Hearing such privileges addressed to him, sweat appeared on Jan's face. Bai informed the hero that he now had the right to join a guild of any level, as well as create his own. Jan seriously thought about whether he should continue his journey alone, or make friends, and a strong rear. Be that as it may, nothing that was proposed should have interfered with Jan's plans to become king of the entire region. A satisfied grimace of future accomplishments was imprinted on the hero's face. Afterwards, Jan decided to inquire about the list of guilds he could join. After analyzing the hero's stats, Bai suggested that Jan join the Spirit Hunters Guild. The hero nervously scratched the back of his head and asked the abbess for some other option. Sighing, another option Bai named was the Phantom Cloud Guild, which was the competitor of the previous guild. Jan immediately made up his mind and wished to join the ranks of Phantom Cloud. Nodding approvingly, Bai began to formalize Jan's membership in the guild. Having entered the hero's name into the list of guild players, the abbess informed Jan that Phantom Cloud was made up exclusively of women. After some time, the scene moved to the city where the Phantom Cloud Guild was located. There, swinging on a swing, a little girl suffered from boredom. Someone responded to Yu's comments about being the guild leader. The person sipping the drink found Yu's complaints unfounded, additionally calling her a parasite in someone else's guild. Lin, who was also the leader of Phantom Cloud, looked at Yu with disapproval. Their bickering was interrupted by the third maiden, who, forcibly opening the doors, asked the head of the guild to meet the newcomer. From behind Shu's curvaceous form, Gu peeked out and greeted everyone sweetly. Both guild leaders greeted Gu in different ways. At that very moment, something caused a mad panic in Lin's behavior. In order to find out everything, Yu jumped up to her. Scrolling through the guild chat, Lin watched in horror as everyone discussed the inclusion of a man into their female ranks. Clutching her head, Lin explained to the other girls that a certain guy had completed the task with flying colors, and therefore no one could object to his right to join. Everyone present was shocked by what happened. None of them understood why the mysterious guy did not choose another guild. Gu's body trembled as Lin announced Yang's name as the newest member of the guild. Gu's reaction was noticed by Lin, and the girl was forced to tell about her acquaintance with Yan. At that moment, the door to the guild headquarters swung open again, and Lin was informed of the news that the Spirit Hunters had been defeated. Rong entered the building and brought this news. A little later, the discussion of characters touched on the disastrous tactics of a rival guild, as Rong turned the conversation to a rare weapon that had appeared at auction. It turned out that Rong had bought and then resold at an exorbitant price a bow that belonged to one of the Spirit Hunters. At the same time, Roshan could barely contain his emotions. Shedding tears and whining, he cursed the Black Dragon for all the humiliations he had experienced. Lei also grabbed his head, because the price for Roshan's bow turned out to be almost unaffordable. Then, in order to bring Roshan out of his state of melancholy, the guild leader gave him an inspiring kick. Afterwards, Lei called on his men to get back to work, and they had now returned all their essential equipment. The action moved to the hall of the Heavenly Pavilion, where Lei was not really believed in the story about the tactics that did not work. The leader of the Heavenly Pavilion, named Thimble, informed Lei that his guild had cleared the Black Dragon dungeon 5 times. In response, Lei responded with insolence. He assured Thimble that everyone had acted strictly according to instructions, but still lost. After Lei said those words, a thrown blade whistled through the air. A shadow slayer named Lucius, juggling blades, called Lei a coward who blamed others for his troubles. Lei glared back and urged Lucius to keep his mouth shut, but the shadow killer merely pointed his finger at Lei, urging him to learn to accept defeat. At this moment, Thimble jumped up from his seat, calling everyone to order, while also declaring that the mistake was made by Lei himself, not the Heavenly Pavilion. In order to resolve the situation and divert suspicion, Thimble ordered a reconnaissance team to be sent to the Black Dragon's dungeon, which would include Lei. Immediately after this, a dark entity burst into the conference room. Not expecting an invasion, the players came into full combat readiness. Thimble called on everyone to calm down because Mr. Lu himself from the headquarters of the Heavenly Pavilion had come to the meeting. Lu, who looked more like a skeleton, shook his index finger disapprovingly, since Thimble should have warned him about such events. Thimble tried to correct himself, to give an explanation, but Lu did not need such a thing, since he himself was now going to join the scouts. Afterwards, the necromancer licked his lips greedily, anticipating that he would get the soul of the blackest dragon at his disposal. Listening to other people's conversations from the side, Lei was sure that with such a strong group, nothing could threaten him in the dungeon. On the other hand, Lei wasn't particularly against the group's failure, because in that case, those responsible for the failure of his guild's raid would pay what they deserved. Then hours passed and night fell. Lying in bed, Jan was surprised to find his company in the Women's Guild, where all the conversations now revolved around the hero. At this moment, a notification window urgently popped up that someone was interested in the item Jan had put up for auction. The hero almost went crazy, because a lot of players started to outbid each other just to buy the item. Finally, unable to bear it any longer and buying into the biggest offer, Jan approved the sale of the item. The hero grinned when he additionally discovered that, due to the privileges he had been given, he would be paid extra after each transaction at the auction. The feeling of power and wealth intoxicated Jan, and so he decided to take a nap. Hours passed. It was 7 in the morning and the alarm clock rang. The culprit for such an early awakening was the system, because 5 players invaded the dungeon that Jan was in charge of. Jumping out of bed, the hero hastily pulled on his slippers. After calling up the system window, Jan realized that a group of elite fighters had entered the dungeon, most of whom belonged to the legendary guild. After activating the connection, Jan didn't give a damn what the intruders' intentions were. The process of transformation, movement, and transition of the guy to the image of the dragon boss began. The hero found himself again in his lair, surrounded by loyal and already resurrected dragon warriors. At that very moment from the side, the familiar ringing of a suspended cage was heard. The elf, with a displeased expression on her face, tried to get the black dragon to reveal his evil intentions. Ian assessed it as a rather interesting dragon trophy, after which he called up a viewing portal. The magic opened a view of the group of players before the hero. As Ian had expected, every single one of them were 5-star professionals. Even though the hero appreciated their strength, he was not afraid of the players, because they had not yet reached the artifact that would allow them to defeat the black dragon. For his own peace of mind, Ian decided to first study the strengths and weaknesses of the invaders. Looking at the dragon warriors next to him, Yang gave them the order to attack the players. Everyone obeyed their king, but only one of them, Yan, asked to stay. Meanwhile, the players began clearing their path from the hordes of monsters that Yan sent at them. Their easy walk came to an abrupt end, as everyone saw a cloud of dust approaching the players. The next moment, hordes of monsters poured out of the cloud of dust. Thimble was somewhat surprised, because he had never seen such attacks on players in this dungeon, much less organized ones. Unexpectedly, Lucius jumped forward, deciding to take on the hordes of monsters himself and leave all other tasks to his partners. The areas of space began to be permeated with spells of shadow blades, fireballs, and stone barriers. The battle lasted no more than a couple of minutes before the players continued on their way. Seeing the death of his guard, Jan flapped his wings, deciding that it was time for the hero himself to join the fun. To the approving cries of the dragon warriors, the hero soared into the sky. Unlike everyone else, only the captive elf found the boss dragon's behavior extremely unnatural. Meanwhile, there was talk among the reconnaissance group that the Black Dragon dungeon had indeed changed somewhat. Of all of them, only Necromancer Lu didn't show his fear, enjoying the ever-increasing number of dragon corpses. However, by pointing out the obvious differences from the plan and the instructions from the Heavenly Pavilion, Lei dared to accuse Lu of telling a certain amount of lies. The Necromancer took Lei's words with hostility, asking him to say something similar again and then replenish the collection of souls. Lei stepped back in fear. Thimble intervened in their conversation, calming everyone down and asking Lu not to scare anyone. Lei himself didn't particularly like the company he found himself in. Now he dreamed of seeing the faces of the other players when they met the Black Dragon. A couple of seconds passed, and a powerful shadow formed around the players. Frightened, Lei fell to the ground and screamed, pointing at the Black Dragon. The boss dragon landed in front of the players, and Thimble quickly gave his party members instructions on what to do. A battle followed, during which the players tried to inflict significant damage on the dragon boss. With such paltry damage numbers, Ian laughed out loud at the players. However, the players were not going to give up, and after one attack, they almost immediately started a new one. But suddenly, unexpectedly first of all for the players themselves, Yan changed his attention to support characters, and not direct damage dealers. The next moment the hero used Dragon Charge, which however was repelled by the defender who arrived in time. At the same time, the Flying Dragon Warrior entered the battle and used shadow abilities. At the same time, Lucius also used his special attack, but it was not successful and received retaliatory actions from the dragon boss. Lucius's health dropped to critical levels, forcing players to retreat to their barely breathing partner. At that very moment, a roar was heard, which attracted the attention of some of the players. Planning to finish off the annoying intruders, Yang decided to use the Breath of Annihilation. A few more moments and streams of fire engulfed a certain part of the dungeon. Everything around was engulfed in flames, so Jan hoped that the fire would finish off those who survived. But the players, having created a barrier around themselves, were saved, at the given moment, reasoning that the boss dragon acted like a rational being. Unable to listen to other people's whining any longer, the necromancer decided to take matters into his own hands. Having risen up, he began to awaken the abyss of souls. The necromancer's words took on the features of poetry, and a call to which the bone dragon responded. Soon, the undead appeared in the dungeon, having made their way from the portal of the abyss. Looking at the bone dragon in front of him, the hero began to reason that the necromancer is a very rare profession with the most unique abilities. But before Yan could finish his thoughts, the necromancer ordered the summoned dragon to attack the boss. Right there, the two giants grappled with each other. Not one to give up, Yang struck the bone dragon head-on. The undead hissed and took a couple of steps back. Then, taking a deep breath, the bone dragon belched out a cloud of corpses from its mouth. Ian responded to the undead with fiery breath. The two forces collided, causing an explosive wave of chaotic magic. The other players watched with apprehension what was happening behind their shelter, unexpectedly finding the necromancer to be quite powerful. At the same time, not intending to give in, Yang increased his own fire breath. A new avalanche of flame engulfed the scene. As soon as the fire dispersed, the hero discovered only the scorched bones of the undead. Suddenly, something bony grabbed the black dragon by one of its paws. The hero jerked in fright and blinked his eyes. Looking down, Yang discovered that some remnants of the bone dragon were still continuing their resistance. Watching all this from the side, the necromancer chuckled contentedly. Next, the bone dragon performed a sweep, causing significant physical damage to Yan. This was immediately followed by magical attacks, which in total reduced the boss dragon's health to 70%. For the first time, Jan was worried that if things continued like this, he might even lose. Then, flapping its wings, the boss dragon retreated a little, rising into the sky. Looking at the undead's reaction, it dawned on Yan that the bone dragon couldn't fly at all. The necromancer also noted a similar flaw, immediately ordering the bone dragon to attack from a distance. Opening its mouth, the undead began to spit clots of necrotic magic towards the hero. Laughing out loud, rising and diving, Jan easily evaded the shelling. The hero looked smugly at the necromancer, who now had nothing to oppose to the boss. Sensing a threat, the necromancer urgently commanded his undead to return and protect their master. At the same time, through secret dragon connections, Yang attempted to contact the undead. After chatting the bone dragon for a second or two, the hero launched a surprise attack. At the same time, the dragon charge was activated, which also hit the necromancer. Another explosion sounded, and then was felt like a wave. Jan looked with displeasure at the fact that the annoying necromancer, unfortunately, survived. The other players intercepted the necromancer, creating an operational barrier and began to heal him. As soon as the necromancer felt better, the players started talking among themselves about Lucius. Hearing their conversation, John also remembered the killer who had mysteriously disappeared. Half a minute later, the sounds of running were heard, and in the middle of the endless desert of the dungeon, columns of dust rose. However, the hero knew that it was too early for the players to rejoice. In full view of everyone, a dragon warrior emerged from the dust and returned to his king. The dragon warrior rose to his knees, gifting his master with an artifact that was the key to defeating the boss. The glow of the artifact immediately attracted the attention of the players. Watching the scene unfold, Thimble was shocked. While one of the players was criticizing the black dragon for his intrigues, Jan himself directed his claw towards the artifact. As soon as he touched the artifact, a flash occurred. A glow and tearing pain engulfed the body of the boss, whose level had suddenly increased to diamond. At the same time, an earthquake struck the human world. The tremors were clearly felt by all the people, but only Teacher Bai realized that they came from some hidden kingdom. A ray of light appeared on the horizon, to which Bai proclaimed that something greater was coming. At the same time, in the dungeon, none of the players expected that such kingdoms had the ability to progress, having changed in appearance, becoming larger. From now on, the black dragon was called the Wing of the Black Flame. Feeling some changes in himself, the hero urgently called up a window with the character's stats. After carefully studying the information, Ian realized that he now had access to a new magical skill that dealt extreme damage. Further, having analyzed everything that had happened to him, Jan realized that, by interacting with the artifact, it had simply bypassed the restrictions that had previously been imposed on the black dragon. However, the hero still had to find answers to some of the questions regarding his status. At that very moment, Lucius appeared, shouting towards the other players that he had failed to find the artifact in the tomb. Lucius stopped abruptly and now looked at the clearly transformed boss. Next, the killer's gaze caught on the artifact, which was now in the dragon's clutches. Realizing that Lucius would try to take the artifact and was unaware of the change in the boss's level, Thimble tried to stop him. However, Lucius, full of self-confidence, was already approaching January. Considering himself elusive to the boss, Lucius practically jumped into the dragon's paw. Following this, the hero simply turned his paw and slammed the killer into the ground. Seeing that one of the team members was dead, Lay asked Thimble what they should all do next. After thinking about the situation for a second, Thimble started to run, calling on the others to do the same. The other players looked after him in shock. At that very moment, the dragon's voice sounded, but he had no intention of letting anyone go. The other characters hurried to flee, heading towards the portal that served as the exit from the dungeon. But Jan, true to his word, blocked the player's path to escape. Following this, the boss opened its mouth, activating the Breath of Annihilation ability. The players managed to put up a protective barrier, but it was immediately destroyed. Breathing heavily, Thimble admitted his defeat, suggesting that everyone else put their things in the magical cache so that they would not be lost after death. Of all the players, only the Necromancer refused to give up. He stubbornly wanted to continue the fight, complaining about his knowledge of all the boss's habits. The Necromancer once again used dark magic, summoning souls into the dungeon. Following the call of the Necromancer, an army of undead appeared on the battlefield. Once again, the hero encountered a bone dragon, but also new disembodied spirits. After which, the dragon boss began to receive various types of damage. The undead's poisonous breath hit him again, this time causing more mild discomfort than any real problems. Quite tired from tussling with his enemies, Jan flapped his wing and moved his body. The Necromancer's army fell before it even had time to properly engage in battle. The Necromancer laughed disgustingly. He threatened Jan that sooner or later his soul would still join the ranks of the army of the dead. The Necromancer's laughter took on hysterical notes. It seemed as if he was going to teleport out of the dungeon, abandoning everyone else. The hero looked at him with disdain. Not intending to let the Necromancer go, Jan decided to use his newly acquired skill. A sphere of fire appeared, covering the nearest area of the dungeon. In this dungeon of suffering, the screams of roasting players could be heard every now and then. While grieving, the Necromancer continued to threaten the dragon boss that sooner or later, they would meet again and again and again. But then the Necromancer discovered something strange. Being engulfed in flames, his health dropped to 0. But for some reason he himself did not respawn. Using his new skill, Yang destroyed the Necromancer once and for all. Some time passed and the action changed to the world of people, where the participants of the expedition were now in mourning. Suddenly, the door to the room where they were located opened, and one of the supports ran inside with news. He said with obvious excitement in his voice that all mentions of the Necromancer Lu had simply disappeared. The news that Lu was actually dead sent the players into a frenzy. Now they began to puzzle over what was so special about the boss and his behavior. At the same time, in his thoughts, Thimble believed that headquarters should deal with everything that had happened. However, for some reason he believed that the dragon intentionally killed only the Necromancer and let everyone else go. Some time passed, and the scene changed to a residential complex. There, in complete relaxation, Jan sipped his drink. Leaning back on the couch, the hero admitted that he was incredibly tired after the fight with 5-star players. Afterwards, he opened the inventory window, enjoying the items he had collected. But among this multitude of things, the one that Jan liked most was the assassin's dagger. Getting up from his seat, the hero found himself the luckiest bastard, because now he managed to get hold of a weapon of the stellar level. The hero had barely put on his jacket when a notification came from the system about the addition of the next 20 levels to Jan. Next, through the system, Jan became convinced that the Necromancer had indeed died once and for all. Additionally, the system notified the hero himself that if he died while in the role of the boss, he would also die in real life. The hero grinned contentedly, because he not only got rid of a dangerous enemy, but also clearly protected himself from the imminent invasion of other players. Also, the system notified Jan that he could hunt as a player and his boss, killing him and gradually increasing the boss's level. After this news, the hero opened his palm, enjoying the sight of the artifact that would bring him victory. Now, Jan saw himself as an incredible fighter who was destined to defeat the invincible Black Dragon. Having decided to begin the second phase of transformation, Ian left his home. At the same time, standing in the middle of a busy street, the abbess of the Bai Temple was waiting for someone. Suddenly, she noticed the right person. The characters met, but Bai pretended that it was Jan who was looking for the abbess. Ultimately, Bai explained her appearance by saying that she was waiting for the man who had been blessed by the temple. However, their unusual meeting ended with the hero in the temple again, reaching out to the statue for a new task. Soon, Jan received a new, even more impossible task. The hero found such obstacles trivial, however. As help, he asked Bai for a map of new dungeons. A minute later, Bai handed Jan maps that indicated dungeons of various levels. The hero was about to leave, but the abbess of the temple asked him to wait. Bai glanced suspiciously at Jan and lamented the recent mass disappearances of high-level players and the generally unhealthy atmosphere of a number of dungeons. The hero took Bai's words as a warning and thanked her. Then, after going through the dungeons, Ian found that most of them were sealed due to being overcrowded with players. Eventually, Ian stopped, sighing tiredly. Having caught his breath and opened the map, the hero expected to find a passage to one of the dungeons ahead. Looking closely, even in that direction, Jan saw a crowd of people. Looking more closely, he saw some familiar faces. Among them, Gu's shy appearance clearly stood out, and Faye was also visible with his cocky manners. Scratching his head, Yang never expected that a girl from his school would also join the Phantom Cloud Guild. Deciding that it would be much easier to negotiate with familiar faces, the hero jumped off the cliff. Meanwhile, at the entrance to the dungeon, the boars were pestering the women in every possible way. Suddenly, the advances of one of them were responded to with the point of a sword pointed at his face. Lan made it clear to the chubby one to keep his hands to himself. Faye pretended not to be afraid of such threats, and then stood behind the thug. The brute, whose name was Ern, glared at Lan, saying that a woman should know her place. As an important argument, Ern brought his impressively sized fists to Lani's face. Lan was at a loss as to what to do, since any outcome, be it a fight or a retreat, would be seen as an act of weakness. Eventually, Lani's hand touched the weapon without her noticing. But it so happened that in the midst of the upcoming conflict, Jan appeared. Hearing the character's conversation from the side, the hero called himself the strongest of those present. With her body trembling from the unexpected meeting, Gu recognized Jan. The hero was also recognized by Faye, who was clearly unhappy with all this. Afterwards, Ern spoke up, advising Jan to beg for mercy, since the big guy had the third level of transformation. But Yang simply ignored the big guy's words, walking towards Gu and greeting her. Next, Lan leaned over to Gu, and they explained to her that the girl and the guy had known each other since school. Afterwards, Lan turned to Yang himself, but the hero explained to her that he had come to the coordinates of the dungeon to undergo the second transformation. Lan was momentarily stupefied, unable to comprehend how classmate Gu could raise his level so quickly. In the midst of these conversations, Faye's voice was heard again, provoking Yan to reveal his personal information and boast of his achievements. After learning that Faye was only level 10, Yang decided to punish him cruelly with a special skill that reduced experience. With a flick of his index and middle fingers, a special magic burst out from Yan's hands, passing right through Faye. Faye's health instantly dropped to 0, to which he only managed to scream in shock. The hero received a small portion of experience, and the bully, meanwhile, went to rebirth. Immediately after this, the big Ern delivered a crushing blow to the ground. Thus, Ern threatened Jan with reprisal for Faye's unexpected murder. The hero grinned in response and took a fiery sword from his inventory. At the same time, he turned to Lani, inviting her to join the fight. But Lan, for some reason, thought that the hero had challenged her. Ignoring the fact that Yang was Gu's friend, Lan and Ern joined forces against the hero. Then, both of them launched simultaneous attacks against January. Hundreds of attacks from the big guy rained down on the hero. Unable to hit Yang with his standard attacks, Ern switched to Thunder Tiger's special move. After which, having gained enough strength, Ern directed this power against the hero. Instantly, Ian blocked the big guy's attack. After which, with all his might, the hero parried the blow. At the same time, a sneak attack was made by Lan Yu, but her blade collided with the barrier. After stopping the attack for a second or two, Lani realized that the guy in front of her was wearing and using items of at least gold level. At that very moment, from the direction of the mountains where Jan had launched Ern, the rumble of stones was heard. Tearing apart mountain ranges and screaming threats at the hero, Ern came onto the scene again. In response, Yang raised his fire sword, stating that he was late. Having ordered the big guy to disappear, the hero got rid of his enemy with one swing of his sword. Afterwards, he turned to Lani, asking if she wanted to continue the fight. Lan smiled awkwardly and sheathed her sword. Ian found this decision worthy, since in any case, both characters were in the same guild. Following this, Yang asked Lan to convey his apologies to the guild leader, since the dungeon now belonged exclusively to the hero. Taking a few steps, Yan entered the dungeon, which was intended for group cleansing. While making his way through the local area, the hero suddenly noticed movement. Only one goblin with a bow was aiming at Jan. Drawing his sword, Jan felt a little awkward confronting such small fry. But at that very moment, the roar of another goblin was heard, emerging from an ambush. The hero skillfully intercepted the green bug. Suddenly, another goblin kicked the crystals growing in the cave towards the hero. With one swing of his sword, Yang defeated the goblins and also cut through the crystal flying towards him. Shaking himself off, Jan found the dungeon quite treacherous. The hero believed that in this place, unlike all previous battles, he would have to rely on his own skills. Finally, after some thought, Ian decided to try out his new skill in the dungeon. He went even deeper into the cave until the hero heard the growling of goblins again. Two green monsters, having waited for the right moment, rushed at Jan from an ambush. But the hero's demonic shield simply threw them away. Afterwards, Ian summoned a hammer into his hand. Then he performed a demonic attack on them. Immediately, another horde of bloodthirsty goblins came running to the noise of the battle. A hail of arrows fell on the place where the hero was. However, Yang simply jumped to the side from the attack site, summoning the demonic crossbow in response. In an instant, magical crossbow bolts were fired at the goblins. Next, jumping to his feet, Yan wanted to put an end to the goblins' sneak attacks once and for all. Having started running throughout the entire dungeon, the hero collected absolutely all the creatures that were hostile to the player there. Having lost his pursuers for a split second, Yang summoned a giant sword and stopped abruptly. Having lunged at them, the hero wanted to get rid of all the local monsters in one fell swoop. Immediately after this, the charred carcasses of monsters began to cover the floor of the cave. Immediately after this, something fierce cast its wild gaze at Jan. Apparently, following the sounds of battle, the dungeon boss himself came out to the hero. Suddenly the Ice Tiger spoke, mocking Yan's skills in every possible way. The hero believed that he did not have his own mind, but was simply repeating the text inserted by the system. Jan was not against competing, and therefore gave the boss a head start. The tiger's paw was about to descend on the hero, but in reality, it encountered magical resistance. In the blink of an eye, the demonic blades dealt fatal damage to the boss. Having finished in less than 3 minutes, Jan began to move on to the next dungeon. Returning to the human world, the hero discovered that the girls from his guild were hiding behind rocks. Ian called on them to leave their shelters, but the girls themselves were afraid of the monster in human form, which cleared the most difficult dungeons in a matter of minutes. Later, with his usual ease in another dungeon, Jan defeated another boss. As soon as his victory took place, the system offered to carry out a secret mission. A map appeared in front of Jan, according to which he had to track down a certain animal. Having bought into the information about increasing attributes for completing this task, the hero happily accepted the mission. Reading through the information about the mission, Yang assumed that he would have to meet a beast that clearly exceeded the magpie level of development. After thinking it over, the hero came to the conclusion that he should unlock the star-level weapon. Meanwhile, knowing that using a weapon of this level would not be so easy, Yang decided to visit the Heavenly Pavilion. In fact, Yan planned not only to acquire information, but also to tease the inhabitants of the Heavenly Pavilion with his artifacts. After some time, the hero visited the city where the Heavenly Pavilion was located. Chuckling, Yang looked with satisfaction at the precious stones that would enhance any equipment. Further, upon entering, Jan encountered a rather impressive queue. Looking around the hall, some of those present attracted the hero's special attention. Ian's gaze caught on Thimble and Lucius, who were actively discussing the loss of their equipment. Thimble sighed heavily, asking Lucius to be grateful that headquarters decided to turn a blind eye to their failure in the dungeon. Realizing that the precious dagger could not be returned, Lucius was overcome with rage. He kicked the log chair so hard that the furniture flew straight towards Jan. The hero put his hands out in time, simultaneously calling on Lucius to behave decently. At that very moment, the degree of mutual intolerance between the characters rose to a critical point. Coming up, Lucius grabbed Jan by the hem of his clothes, but the hero, showing no fear, simply began to laugh. Thimble arrived in time and tore Lucius away from Ian, reminding him of his reputation. Next, Jan spoke up, shook himself off, and called the pavilion's reception shameful. Thimble apologized to Ian, but at the same time, said that they are not in the business of selling strategies. Unexpectedly, the hero took out a golden card and waved it in front of the characters' noses. Without attaching much importance to the card, Lucius simply knocked it out of the hero's hands. At that very moment, with leisurely steps, someone approached the map lying on the floor. Thimble and Lucius immediately recognized the unnamed man as the manager. The manager of the first city, named Bell, looked at the characters as he picked up the map. There was a short pause, during which Bell gave Lucius a juicy bream. Falling to the floor, Lucius looked at Bell with confusion. After which, Bell approached Ian, apologizing and handing the hero a gold card. A conversation ensued between the characters, during which Ian confirmed that he had gained privileges due to completing 5-star quests. Bell then turned his attention to Thimble and Lucius, telling them to treat Ian properly. Then, quickly saying goodbye, Bell grabbed Lucius by the cloak and dragged him along. Finally, Ian managed to approach Thimble, asking him about a master-level blacksmith. When Thimble replied that a blacksmith of this profile was a matter of money, the hero snapped his fingers. As soon as the bag of gold appeared at Thimble's feet, he promised Ian that he would help with any issues. The hero's mood returned to normal again. Now he was discussing the history of the local temple, because the city manager had made a favorable impression on January. After leaving the temple, Jan talked to himself about the blacksmith and his strange location in the city. But then, his attention was drawn to conversations from the outside that concerned the raid on the Black Dragon. Listening closely, the hero realized that many players were now afraid to step into the Black Dragon's dungeon, fearing to repeat the fate of the deceased necromancer. Considering this news as a chance for himself, Yan decided to hurry up in order to personally defeat the Black Dragon. A little later, the hero reached an unremarkable house. Inside, the hero was met by two puzzled girls and a blacksmith working on metal. Jan quickly recognized the girls as members of the guild and asked the purpose of their visit to the blacksmith. But then, one of the girls named Yu jumped up to Yan, becoming passionately interested in the guy's preferences in the female sex. Immediately, Rong's hand grabbed Yu's glasses. Pushing her friend aside, Rong believed that it would be better for the hero to go to some other forge. Smiling and scratching the back of his head, the hero was not surprised that, once again, no one took him seriously. Then, raising his hand, the hero demonstrated his weapon, for the sake of which he came to the forge. In addition to the girls, even the blacksmith himself turned his attention to the star-level weapon. The blacksmith gasped and admitted that he had not seen blades of such quality for a long time. Next, Yan entrusted his weapon and crystal into the hands of the master. As soon as the weapon was in the blacksmith's hands, he exclaimed at the top of his voice that he would not let Jan down with his skill. The work began immediately, and a blacksmith's hammer loomed in the air. The blacksmith swung his hammer, and then placed it on the heated metal. Rong was shocked. For the first time, she witnessed the enhancement of a star-level weapon. Yu was not far behind in her emotions. Of all those present, only Yan did not react in any special way to the blacksmith's work. At that very moment, Yu began to tease Rong for staring too hard at the hero. Hearing the girls' conversations from the side, Yan regretted for the first time that he had chosen the wrong guild. Some time passed, and then the blacksmith presented his work to Jan. The blacksmith was so filled with strength of spirit while working on such a weapon that he did not even demand any payment from Yan. However, not wanting to remain an ungrateful brute, the hero nevertheless thanked the blacksmith with his usual price of 1 billion. The blacksmith accepted Jan's offer and was glad to collaborate again in the future. At the same time, looking at Yan's composure, Yu managed to fall in love with him, and Rong, on the contrary, began to consider the hero an S-rank holder. Later, the scene changed to a mountainous region, where Yan had to find a mysterious monster. The hero noted that with his increased attributes, he could now even challenge the masters of transformation. Next, one by one, Yan began to drain the bottles of elixirs, which increased the hero's already high attributes. Throwing the last bottle aside, Jan stepped into the abyss. During the flight, thick shadows appeared out of nowhere and began to surround the hero. Soon, the hero landed on the limb of one of the winged creatures. Activating super speed by consuming mana, Yang began his movement towards the flying monsters. The double blows of the reforged weapon that followed during the movement killed the flyers. Soon, Yang landed, happily noting the damage from the compilation of skills of the old and new classes. At that very second, dozens of glowing eyes stared at the hero. Deciding not to waste time on the dull clearing of the dungeon, Jan immediately used the scrolls, drank the potions, and decided to do everything in one fell swoop. Next came a bright flash and heat. Having gotten rid of the enemies, Yang entered the cave of the terrible beast. As the hero progressed, Ian noted that there were fewer and fewer monsters on his path. Ian continued walking until a glow washed over his face. At first he squinted, but once he got used to it, he looked more closely. Ahead, a stone arena was visible with a strange creature lying in the middle of it. The system only made it clear that the creature was called the Mutated Beast, but no other specifics. Assuming that the hero was in for a tough fight, Yang activated Shadow Form. Having made a leap and attack, Yan landed straight on the beast's head. Jan dealt significant damage to the beast, but it was not enough, causing the mutant to awaken with a howl. Then opening its mouth, the monster began to shower the hero with magic darts. Ian jumped away from the threat, doing a somersault in the air. Afterwards, he counterattacked the monster with his own skills. Then he made another attacking jump. Without giving the monster time to catch its breath, the hero destroyed it with a second finishing blow. As soon as the monster was defeated, the system gave John 2 notifications. A strange key and a rotting piece of flesh were placed in the hero's inventory. Ian assumed that the key was important in completing the mission, but was at a loss when he saw the meat. Ultimately, deciding to put these issues off until later, Jan returned to the task of changing classes. Immediately, the system rewarded Jan with new levels and skill points, which the hero distributed evenly between the stats. The hero was delighted that his diamond weapon could now deal mixed double attribute damage. A little later, Jan returned to the temple, where Abbess Bai congratulated him on completing the quest. Next, Ian answered the question of the cutout beauty that he planned to rest for a while after completing difficult quests. However, Jan did not tell the whole truth. In fact, he was planning to buy some things in order to defeat the Black Dragon himself. Sometime later, Bell met Thimble and Lucius in his office. He informed them about the gathering of a new expedition to the Kingdom of the Dragon. Since the dungeon now had a permanent death rule, Bell made sure that players could be resurrected using special life rings. Bell admitted to the players that he would have been happy to go with them, but he had a lot of other things to do. After these words, the door to Belle's office swung open. Everyone looked around in surprise at the female person who had come to someone else's meeting. Taking a polite pose, the Beastmaster Enra asked to be greeted in a proper manner. Belle quickly rose to one knee, while Erna told the players that she had deliberately kept her visit secret. Then the girl bent over in her back, as if she wanted to sit down. The assistant saw this and immediately moved the chair. Then, with a crazy look, Erna made it clear to everyone that the black dragon was her exclusive prey. No one dared to contradict Erna, especially as the daughter of the founder of the Heavenly Pavilion. If Belle took Erna's appearance relatively calmly, Lucius was in a state of shock from meeting such an influential person. Belle was quick to explain that Erna occupies a fairly important place in the association of animals, both as hunters and collectors of exotics. Belle sincerely believed that Bella's appearance promised a clear victory over the Black Dragon. After all, in such a case, the Heavenly Pavilion would become the most prestigious organization on the entire continent. Belle reduced his speeches to explaining the actions of Thimble and Lucius, so that they would not even try to contradict Erna. When the characters started talking about a dragon hunting guide that might be useful to Erna, it turned out that Jean, whom they already knew, had bought it. Belle glanced at the hero's profile, trying to understand his motives, while Lucius suggested simply taking leadership away from Ian. Belle quickly dismissed the idea, saying that information could be found in other ways. Following this, the scene moved to Jan's house. There, sitting on the sofa, Jan lazily studied the manual, which cost the hero a pretty penny. While turning the pages, at some point, Jan found the black dragon he needed so much. Reading through the characteristics, Jan was surprised that the reference book did not indicate the black dragon's ability to reduce damage. Next, Jan began to read the list of black dragons found, the first of which was the young diamond one. Next in the description was a lunar dragon in his teenage years. Finally, the last one on the list was the black dragon, already familiar to the hero. Reading further, Ian found out that the two previous dragons, besides the black boss, had already been killed. It turned out that the secret piece of meat that the hero had previously received was once swallowed by one of the dragons, which allowed him to rise. Immediately, Jan guessed that for such pieces of meat, the Heavenly Pavilion was ready to pay very generously. A plan immediately formed in Jan's mind, which consisted of feeding the black dragon strange meat and thus enhancing his own transformation abilities. Later, having retired to bed, Jan noted that no matter how hard the hero tries, sooner or later, all bosses are defeated. From the subsequent half-sleep, Jan was awakened by a voice informing him that if the black dragon was defeated, it could become the hero's pet. Jan jumped out of bed, asking the void again, to which the mysterious voice confirmed its previous words. Immediately, a picture of Jan, sitting on top of a tame dragon, dictating his own order to the world, appeared in the hero's mind. On the other hand, Jan was not very confident in his own abilities, and that something like this would happen soon. Just as Jan was about to start moving towards the implementation of his plan, he noticed new messages in the guild chat. Having opened the chat, from the players' messages, Jan learned about a certain forest, which, apparently, represented a secret kingdom. The hero responded to the chat conversation very briefly. The guild members all sighed in disappointment at Jan's manner of communication, but in the meantime, a roar was immediately heard in the guild house. Yu, despite the condemnation of the other guild members, began to flirt with Jan through innuendo. Lin tried to calm Yu down and simply offer Jan to go on a raid together, which the hero, in his detached manner, refused. Meanwhile, the scene changed to the residence of another guild. Leaving the guild building, Lei addressed his people, because today, they had to go to the forest dungeon. The guild members pondered over Lei's words, and at the same time, they made it clear that a certain guild consisting only of women had also been granted the right to participate in the raid. Lei tried to encourage his men by saying that all past failures could still be corrected. Smiling meanly, Lei informed his men that they would simply kill players from another guild for their own pleasure. Time passed, and the scene changed to the gates to the dungeon of the Dark Forest. As he wandered past the many other players, Yang reflected on how the difficulty of the dungeon here was comparable to the Black Dragon's realm. Before the gates to the dungeon opened, someone from the Heavenly Pavilion greeted the players with a speech, the gist of which boiled down to the incredible rewards that could be obtained inside. Yan looked at the players from the side, considering the Spirit Hunters Guild to be the strongest of them in terms of competition. The hero knew that even though they had been defeated, they were still a formidable force. At that very moment, Lei spoke up, addressing the other players and threatening them with the difficulty of the dungeon. Many players decided to retreat in a good way, just to avoid incurring the wrath of Lei's guild. The hero noted that Lei's guild was dragging its feet for some reason, perhaps in order to deal a vile blow to the Phantom Cloud members. At the moment of these observations, one of the players from Lei's guild jumped up to Yan, letting the hero know that he should leave. Yan politely replied that he was not going to interfere in other people's affairs, and immediately the player grabbed the hero by the hem of his clothes. Jan grabbed the player's hand, restraining him quite easily, after which he threw him over himself. The player was thrown by force and flew tens of meters, destroying trees and rocks with his body. Eventually, the flight stopped, but the player was no longer able to get up. Lei rushed to the hero for an explanation, but he only made it clear that he was defending himself. Roshan then spoke up, condemning Jan for his actions. Lei reassured his friend, unexpectedly agreeing with Yang's arguments about self-defense. Lee walked away from Yan and told Roshan that he didn't want to mess with the hero, because he was obviously of a high level, since he managed to defeat a player at the 4th stage of transformation in 3 seconds. A little more time passed, and then Jan noticed some more familiar faces. Lin and her maidens arrived at the entrance to the dungeon. Lei pretended to be friendly, offering to go into the dungeon forest together. Chuckling contentedly, Lin suggested Lei's secret plans, while also reminding him that his guild had lost many items of their equipment. Realizing that his plan had been exposed ahead of time, Lei had already deliberately activated some skills, threatening Lin that her guild would not enter the dungeon. The next second, Rong's ice magic fell upon Lei. The girl attacked first, without waiting for instructions from the guild leader. Lei's ploy succeeded. He accepted the challenge, after which his men took out their weapons. The upcoming fight came to an abrupt pause when Jan stood up from his seat. The hero asked everyone out loud what right Lei had to dictate anything to anyone. Having shocked Rong with her behavior, Yu once again admired the hero's courage. Following this, other girls joined in with their discussions and desires regarding January. Lin came forward, and the hero quickly apologized to her for not having visited the guild house before. Looking at Yan, Lin envied him in her thoughts because of his leveling up and top-end equipment. Meanwhile, the players of the Spirit Hunter Guild had mixed reactions to the fact that Yang was a member of an all-female guild. Among them, only Lei was hostile to Yang's words towards him. The hero smiled charmingly in response, waiting to see what step Lei would decide to take next. At that very second, thunderbolts whistled somewhere from the side. Raising his hand, Jan easily intercepted one of them. Afterwards, the hero decided to return the arrow to its owner. With all his might, Jan threw the arrow back. The projectile pierced the armor and hit Roshan's body. Unable to tolerate such impudence any longer, Lei burst out in a threatening cry. Lei took a step forward, projecting magic in front of him. But Yang reacted to this behavior with aloofness, only asking whether Lei really wanted to create problems for others. Lei shuddered and was puzzled when the hero spoke of a responsibility that the opposing guild clearly did not want to bear. Finally, with a sigh, Jan took out a scattering of scrolls from his inventory. Lei immediately fell silent, thinking that the hero had taken out the skill scrolls. Immediately, he commanded his men to activate the protective magic formation. Then Lei chuckled, stating that the hero would not be able to pass through such protection. Ian smiled back and activated one of his skills. The gusts of wind and fluctuations of the elements created by the hero immediately stirred the girl's skirts. Lei himself, with his mouth open, stared upwards, where a storm was now forming. In the middle of the elements, pointing directly at Lei, Yang loomed in the air. The next moment, thunderbolts rushed towards Lei. A discharge of incredible proportions struck the ground. As soon as the smoke and soot cleared, the hero's voice was heard calling for players from his guild to enter the dungeon. The girls looked at Jan, dumbfounded. None of the girls could believe that the hero had personally dealt with the members of one of the strongest guilds. But then Meryl's voice was heard, reporting that she had managed to sketch January. The girls looked at the drawing, realizing that the hero's main strength lay not in the scrolls, but in Jan's blade. Lin instantly imagined Jan's course of action, who used a deceptive maneuver to hide the blade and finish off his opponents with it. Rong's voice came from a slightly different direction, believing that Jan's strength was based on his equipment. Afterwards, the girls saw the image of Jan as the most powerful player in their guild. At that moment, Jan himself approached the girls, and they hastened to answer that they would also visit the dungeon. A couple of minutes later, all the players were already walking inside the dungeon forest. Yu kept running up to the hero with questions, to which Yang replied that they would all pass through this kingdom without incident. Suddenly, something darted in the bushes to the side. Shu hurried to calm everyone down, because a most ordinary rabbit jumped out of the bushes. Immediately, a two-headed velociraptor appeared behind him. Lin rushed to intercept the monster, calling on all the other girls to calm down. Standing in front of the monster, Lin instantly had a sword and shield appear in his hands. At the same time, from the other side of the bushes, a giant bear came out. Ian immediately responded to the girls' cries for help and flew into the giant bear with both feet. At the same time, while fighting the lizard, Lin raised her sword towards Yang, supporting him with a buff. Feeling a surge of strength, Yang looked at his hands, which were burning from the auxiliary skill. But the monster did not wait for the characters to finish chatting, and therefore waved its paw. Ian dodged and counterattacked, dealing an inordinate amount of damage. Soon the monsters were defeated, and Lin thanked Yan, but considered that he was working in a team for the first time. A few minutes passed and the dungeon was once again filled with the echoes of the clanging of swords. Ice magic was used, creaking and cutting, and only Jan, with his ultimate blow, ended the skirmishes. Eventually, the players reached the boss. Lin was taken aback by how confident Yang was towards the boss, whom she was afraid of. But be that as it may, she decided to trust the hero's instincts. Their general attack on the boss began. At the same time, in another place, Thimble came to Bell with a report of the guild clash. Bell sighed heavily when he learned that the players of one guild killed the players of another. But the important news that Thimble carried with him did not end with the skirmish between the guilds. Meanwhile, the battle in the boss's lair continued. At some point in time, having received enough damage, the boss staggered and fell on his back. All the players rejoiced because the boss was defeated. As soon as the fight ended, Lin appreciated Yang's sacrifice as a final blow to her guild leader. Immediately after this, the other girls came to the hero, praising and idolizing him in every possible way. From the outside, Rong noticed that Yang, although he seemed incredibly self-confident, experienced a certain awkwardness when communicating with the female sex. A little later, a conversation took place between Yan and Lin about the loot from the boss, which the hero simply refused. Their conversation was interrupted, because the girls were loudly rejoicing at the acquisition of diamond equipment, now begging their leader to celebrate this event. Unexpectedly, even Jan was invited to the celebration. But at that moment, the sound of the system ringing could be heard as it tried to establish a connection with the hero. With the light illuminating his body, without any further explanation, Jan hurried away. Before the connection was established, a battle was already underway in the dragon's dungeon. Having barely assumed the role of the Black Dragon, the hero decided to observe what was happening. After summoning observation magic, only one single player with a very striking appearance appeared before Jan. Lost in conjecture and thinking he was an elf, the hero watched the court magician Anka. Watching the player deal with the enemies in his path, Jan believed that a couple of elite warriors would be able to defeat him. A minute later, the court magician's movements were interrupted by new enemies. The court magician grinned contentedly, thinking that he could easily deal with the new scum. Just a couple of swings of the mage's sword and the monsters were cut into a salad. Then the blood of the defeated monsters splashed like a fountain onto the magician. Feeling wild disgust, the magician began to wipe the alien blood from his face. A little tired of the battles, the magician resorted to trickery, calling on a mountain giant to defend himself. Looking at everything that was happening from the side, Jan became worried, believing that the court magician could even be much stronger than the last players. Suddenly, Jan came to his senses. He remembered the words of the magician about a certain princess, for whose sake he came to the dungeon. Slowly, the dragon's blazing gaze moved towards the elf sleeping in the cage. After which, with his claw, Jan began to drum on the cage in order to wake up the sleepyhead. Yawning loudly and rubbing her eyes, the elf woke up. She had hardly opened her eyes when the dragon's frightening voice demanded to know if she really was a princess. Stuttering and pointing at the dragon, the elf couldn't believe that the giant snake could speak. Following this, the elf did not rush to give the dragon a direct answer, citing the fact that he had previously been quite stupid, and in principle had been silent. Then, immediately thinking that the dragon wanted to do something to her, the elf burst into tears, accusing Jan of perverted inclinations. Deciding to scare the elf, Jan squeezed the cage. Screaming in fear, the elf hastened to introduce herself as Lilith, the royal daughter of the North. Information about countries where dragons, elves, and giants lived immediately popped into the hero's head. But I remembered that only the elves from this list were friends with people. He then brought the cage to the viewing portal, allowing Lilith to look at the princess's savior. Seeing the court magician in the reflection of the portal, Lilith was clearly horrified. After which, biting her finger, Lilith mumbled about the unworthy family of the magician, and that it would be better if she spent the rest of her life in the dragon's cage. Seriously, Lilith was afraid of the heir of a powerful family, to whom even kings did not have an order. After listening to the elf's heart-rending story, Jan sighed and said that he would give Lilith to the magician. Taking the trick, Jan began to extract information about the magician's weaknesses from Lilith, in exchange for promising not to give it up. In the end, the girl gave in and agreed to tell everything she knew. Laughing quietly, Jan gave his word that he would listen to the elf. According to Lilith, members of the Ankh family were born with enormous spiritual powers, while being incredibly weak physically. Lilith also made it clear that in order to overcome such a disadvantage, the magician and his family members covered their bodies with an impenetrable magical barrier. Having laid out everything she knew, Lilith fell into despair, to which the hero tried to somehow encourage the process. It was at this moment in time that the hero remembered the strange piece of meat, with the help of which he was going to transfer the Black Dragon to a higher stage of development. Jan saw no other way out of the situation, and therefore opened his inventory. His surprise knew no bounds when it turned out that the dragon could be equipped with human equipment. But then Lilith's voice was heard, suggesting that the dragon let her go, just so as not to fall into the hands of the magician. But without receiving any answer, Lilith realized that the dragon had mysteriously disappeared. Looking around, the princess could not believe the idea that the dragon had simply lost his nerve and run away. In fact, Jan had moved to another point in the dungeon, now clutching a blade between his claws. Having such a weapon with him, the dragon's strength increased many times over, which guaranteed the hero victory over the magician. Meanwhile, the magician, prowling around the dungeon, challenged the dragon to a duel. But no matter how hard the elf tried, he couldn't provoke the boss. Subsequently, having licked his lips, the magician decided to destroy the dragon kingdom itself along with Lilith. After having played to his heart's content with the elf's body, having decided everything for himself, the magician began to activate the forbidden spell. But at that very moment, a huge dragon's paw was already descending from the heavens onto the perverted elf. Anka screamed, his health immediately dropping to 6%. Having flown into the air from the blow, the magician then fell backwards. Having barely recovered, the magician wondered about the superpowers of a dragon that had managed to destroy an indestructible magical barrier with one blow. Jan quickly apologized to the elf for his lack of common sense, after which tongues of flame began to pour out of the dragon's mouth. A couple more seconds and a fiery stream burst out of the boss's mouth. The magician only managed to scream, almost immediately turning into bones. Instantly, a notification from the system sounded, awarding Jan an impressive amount of experience. Further, looking closely, Jan noticed special spells and attributes that the court magician left behind. The most surprising thing that Jan discovered was the forbidden spell, capable of destroying entire cities, which the magician bestowed upon the hero with his death. However, the magician took the outfits that Jan would also like to get his hands on into oblivion. Events shifted back to the dragon's lair, where a crumpled cage clinked. There, the elf was sulking at the dragon that had suddenly disappeared, worrying that the boss would ultimately lose the battle to the preoccupied mage. Instantly, Lilith's cage shook as Yang returned to the lair. The hero hastened to reassure the princess that the annoying magician had been burned and would never return. Lilith remained silent, but in her thoughts, she wondered about the source of such great power of the black dragon, who was able to easily deal with Ankh. Ian caught Lilith's difficult gaze on him, wondering why the princess didn't douse him with magic. As it turned out, the elf carried a family curse that was passed down to one of her children and did not allow her to cast spells. After listening to the princess's dramatic story, Ian came to the conclusion that today he had changed Lilith's fate. After which, the dragon's monstrous paw reached out to the cage. Screaming in horror, the elf instinctively covered herself with her hands. There was a knock and crunch of metal, and opening her eyes, Lilith discovered that one part of the cage had been torn off. Then the dragon's voice was heard, informing the elf of her freedom. Next, John addressed both Lilith and his warriors, letting everyone know that the elf was free within the kingdom, and no one dared to harm her. But then, the ringing voice of Lilith was heard, who did not really believe the dragon's words, suspecting some kind of trick. However, Lilith did not receive an answer, because the dragon instantly fell asleep, and the hero himself passed out. A couple of seconds later, with a bright glow in the window of his own home, Jan returned to the world of people. But just as the hero wanted to rejoice at his newly acquired level, his system began beeping with a ton of messages. Opening the notification window, Yana was shaken by the 99 missed messages. In each of them, the girls from Jan's guild were worried in every way about the suddenly missing hero, wanting to see him again. In short, Jan sent a reply to Guildmaster Lin, thinking that this would be quite sufficient. Elsewhere, with an undisguised smile on her face, Lin read the hero's message. In response, Lin sent Jan a photo from a party of not very sober women. Hours passed, a new day began. In the middle of a busy city square, the hero met his classmate Gu. For a short time, they discussed the recent raid and the important role that Jan himself had played in it. The girl's expression changed when she realized that Jan had already managed to reach level 60. Unexpectedly, considering that the guy would no longer communicate with her because of the difference in achievements, Yang praised Gu for the girl's successes. Having become smooth and airy again due to the praise she heard, Gu even asked the hero again. Yang reiterated his previous words, hoping that one day he and Gu would go into battle together. Smiling and blushing, the girl thanked the hero. A little later, Jan chose a new, even more difficult and deadly task for himself at the statue in the temple. Suddenly, Bai appeared behind the hero, asking Yan to be careful because of the coming red moon. Bai explained to Yan that the red moon makes the monsters in the dungeons much more ferocious. But the hero, in his usual manner, brushed it off, thanked the abbess of the temple, and went home. In his mind, Yan didn't even think of attaching importance to Bai's words. because the hero now already possessed the strength of the fourth stage of transformation. Sometime later, the action moved to a dilapidated secret mansion, which played the role of a secret kingdom. Not far from the walls of the deadly mansion, the hiccups of an awakened player were heard. Opening his eyes and looking up, the red moon appeared before his eyes. Afterwards, getting up and looking around, he discovered that someone, despite Luna's threat, had nevertheless entered the mansion. The player tried to enter after him and bring the suicide to his senses, but the system did not accept his attempts to enter. After all, a couple of minutes earlier, Jan had already committed massacre in the dungeon. Smiling contentedly, Jan noted that all the tales about the Red Moon, in fact, turned out to be nothing more than horror stories. But just as the hero was about to go further into the dungeon, laughter was heard behind him. Looking back, Jan found the enemies he had defeated seconds ago alive and unharmed. Apparently, now under the influence of the Red Moon, the ghosts have transformed into bloodthirsty ghouls. Subsequently, Jan kept dodging his opponents, whose attack speed had noticeably increased. At some point, one of the ghouls hit the hero with his own tongue, causing some damage. At the same time, the second one was deliberately twisting off his own head. A little later, frightening Jan no end, two grinning heads moved towards him. In an attempt to stop the monsters, the hero used a demonic blade. After receiving special magical damage, the ghouls' heads became distorted and then swollen. A second later, they burst, spilling all their contents out. As soon as the unpleasant liquid touched Jan's skin and clothes, a message came from the system about a decrease in points. The hero was distracted from studying the notification by the swarming of enemies, who, although they had lost their heads, were still stubbornly moving. With a wave of his palm, Yang unleashed another blast of demonic power. Having promised himself to be more careful in the future, the hero continued on his way. Each time he encountered new types of enemies, Ian defeated them through demonic magic and ranged attacks. A little later, having overcome another section of the dungeon, the hero decided to take a rest, because the points available to him had already dropped to half. As soon as John tried to catch his breath, titanic fingers began to emerge from the area of the earth where the hero was located. The giant corpse rose above the ground, clutching the hero tightly in its palm. Finding himself in a difficult situation, Jan had no choice but to resort to emergency measures. Then a strange force seized the giant's hand. Spiritual wolves burst out of space-time itself and attacked the dead man. Having freed himself from the Titan's trap, Ian noted the incredible usefulness of the acquired attributes. Then, carefully approaching, the hero extended his hand to one of the wolves. Yan was happy that the summoned spirits easily recognized their owner, because otherwise they could easily kill not only the monster, but even the player. Next, albeit clearly breaking the balance of the game, Yan began to use spirits in order to completely clear the dungeon. After a certain amount of time and a certain number of battles, the hero reached the gate, behind which was the boss. Without much preamble, Jan kicked down the door. The hero had a view of the stage and a man standing in the middle of it, praying to his ancestors. In a trembling voice, the man confessed to the unimaginable amount of evil he had committed. After which, laughing, he rushed towards January. The boss didn't have time to do anything, because he was intercepted by spiritual wolves. Yang drove the spiritual wolves away from the boss's carcass, hoping to keep at least some of it for himself. Ultimately, having torn out the monster's head, the hero completed the quest, and also completed the dungeon. Next, platinum rank equipment appeared in the hero's hands. However, the hero could not wear it yet due to level restrictions. Anyway, Ian finished his business in the dungeon and headed towards the portal. The scene shifted to the area outside the walls of the mansion. There, surrounded by her people, stood Enra, indignant, who could not wait for the hunters in the dungeon to die. Lucius jumped up to the girl and began to ingratiatingly praise Enra's strength, for which the mansion clearly would not be a threat. However, Enra had no time for flattery. She wanted to find out any information about the guild that had entered the mansion's dungeon. Behind Enra, Thimble's voice was heard, informing the girl that there was no information about the hunters there. At the same time, Enra wondered about the identity of the daredevils who decided to enter the mansion under the influence of the Red Moon. Just when she thought they were guaranteed to be dead, a portal opened. From there, John appeared, stretching and yawning. Unexpectedly, the characters' gazes crossed. The hero looked with fear at the crowd of people at the portal, thinking that they had revealed the true identity of the Black Dragon. A situation arose in which many recognized in Yana a person they knew. In the end, it was Jan who spoke first, hinting that such a crowd was not required to pass the dungeon. Yana was interrupted by a player who was guarding the entrance to the mansion, and was now trying to accuse the hero of deadly carelessness. But the player's accusations against Ian were interrupted by Enra, who rudely ordered him to step aside. Stepping forward with her arms folded across her chest, Enra wanted to know if Yang had really completed the dungeon alone. Then, before she could even get an answer, Enra demanded that Ian give her the crystal that the boss dropped. The hero laughed in response, then decided to clarify what kind of girl was standing in front of him. In an instant, one of Enra's guards ran up to the hero, accusing Yan of the crime of not knowing the girl's identity. After which, with great pomp, the guard presented Enra as a young genius and the daughter of the owner of the Heavenly Pavilion. At the end of the performance, the security guard pulled out a baton to teach John a lesson for his inappropriate behavior. But she didn't have time to do anything, because someone's hand hit her on the top of her head. Enra reined in the guard and urged everyone not to go crazy ahead of time. At this moment in time, realizing that Enra, as the daughter of the owner of the Heavenly Pavilion, must have a lot of money, Yang tried to turn their conversation into a deal. Enra chuckled in response, openly revealing that she had originally planned to feed the hero to her pets. Having summoned the spiritual falcon, Enra set a condition for Yan to hold out for 3 minutes and then keep the crystal for himself. Subsequently, without announcing the start of the fight, the falcon rushed towards John. Meanwhile, Thimble and Lucius were divided on whether Ian could survive. At the same time, approaching the hero, the spiritual falcon flapped its wings. The hero began to dodge the magic, which plunged its blades into the ground. Jan didn't really have a choice, and so the hero had to demonstrate his own power. Seeing the familiar blade in Jan's hands, Lucius froze. Almost immediately after this, the falcon swooped down and seemed to pierce the hero right through. But somehow miraculously surviving, Jan repaid the spiritual bird with a counterattack. After which, he performed a kick, throwing the falcon high into the air, leaving magical feathers in its place. Eventually the spirit was driven out, and Enra even called Ian a daredevil. The hero hastened to remind the girl that the conditions only determined time, but not murder. Immediately after this, the girl's aura flared up in pink hues. The hero was forced to admit that Enra was strong. Somewhere from the side, a voice was heard calling on Enra not to fight with Yan, as the holder of a special status. Coming a little closer, Thimble briefly explained to Enra that John, as a member of the Black Gold and an honored guest of the temple, deserved to be treated differently. Looking at Ian, Enra spoke Thimble's recent words with obvious disapproval. Then she began to think about how the hero managed to level up so easily without any outside help. Her thoughts were interrupted by Ian, who was about to leave if no one present had any complaints about it. Enra gnashed her teeth and summoned her steed, calling on everyone else to follow her. Unlike everyone present, who immediately obeyed Enra's will, Thimble had to drag Lucius along with him. As soon as all the strangers left the entrance to the dungeon, a notification window popped up in front of the hero, informing him that the quest had been completed. Some time passed and the scene changed to the entrance to the dungeon where the Earth Dragon was located. It was there, looking at the entrance portal, that Enra and her entourage were now located. Filled with confidence and victory, the girl walked towards the portal. Suddenly, she was stopped by a player guard, who informed Enra that someone had managed to enter the dungeon earlier. An oppressive aura immediately formed around Enra. Lucius tried to attack the player guard, but he reduced everything to instructions, as well as the order of the queue, in the list of which, the person from the temple was always at the top. Enra's eyes lit up, a manic smile appeared on her face, and the girl herself suggested removing the personnel hindering her progress. Suddenly, behind everyone present, Jan's voice was heard, politely asking those around him to let him through. With a look full of hatred, Enra slowly turned towards Ian. Without delay, a squabble began between Jan and Lucius, both of whom found their chance meetings too frequent. Following this, Enra's voice was heard, warning the hero of the consequences if he continued to interfere in other people's affairs. Grinning, Ian thanked Enra for her instructions, after which he inquired about the purpose of the girl's visit to the portal. Thimble stepped forward and politely explained to the hero about Enra's intentions to practice killing dragons. But being quite stubborn, Jan insisted on his own, suggesting that the girl wait until the boss updated. Then he quickly jumped into the portal. Of all those present who were indignant at Ian's behavior, only Thimble began to guess how much great power was hidden in the boy. Be that as it may, Thimble and the others were faced with the fact that the hero intended to kill the boss alone. Only a couple of minutes had passed since Jan entered the dungeons, and he had already encountered resistance. Inside the dungeon, the hero was finally able to freely analyze Enra's intentions, which clearly involved subjugating the Black Dragon. Having gone a little further, the hero came to the lair where the Earth Dragon, which looked more like a lizard, was sleeping. A notification from the system immediately appeared, informing Jan of the boss's level, and also designating him as wild. Gathering his strength, the hero launched a charge, aiming his star-level weapon at the dragon's neck. Activating the soul mark, Jan's blade pierced the dragon's scales. The dragon, waking up in the blink of an eye, waved his paw, driving the hero away. Jan quickly changed his tactics and jumped into the air again. Another second and the hero landed right on the dragon's tail. Afterwards, dealing huge amounts of damage, Yang practically rode along the entire body of the boss. Cutting through the scales, the hero again flew into the air, breaking away from the dragon's head. Having studied the dragon's habits and dealt some damage to its body, Yan still managed to find the boss's weak spot and attack there. One successful blow, and the hero has deprived the boss of 50% of his health. In total, Yan brought the dragon boss to a state of rage. Almost immediately, the dragon transformed into a kind of wheel state. The spinning mass moved towards the hero, crushing any objects in front of it into splinters. Wherever the hero moved, the dragon wheel followed him. Having temporarily gone on the run, Jan urgently needed to come up with a plan to counter the new threat. At some point in time, his gaze caught on a protruding piece of the mountain that was made of granite. Having thought of something, the hero glanced back briefly. Jumping back at the last moment, Yang allowed the dragon, taking the form of a wheel, to crash with all its might into the dense rock of the mountain. After crashing into the wall, the boss dragon temporarily lost control of itself, receiving the stagger status. Finally, it was time for Jan to act. Following this, the scene moved to the portal entrance to the dungeon. Thimble and Lucius were talking about why they were forced to simply stand there and wait for who knows what. Even Enra herself, having settled down more comfortably, wanted to see how Jan's campaign would end. Suddenly, a long system notification appeared above the entrance to the dungeon, stating that Jan had dealt with all the enemies, including the boss. Then a strange sound arose, which distracted everyone except Lucius, who was outraged by the hero's impossible victory. The portal entrance flickered, and a silhouette appeared from within. While wearing a golden armor, Yang looked at Enra's delegation, who were still huddled at the entrance to the dungeon. But none of those present managed to utter a word. There was a short pause, after which a general burst of laughter was heard. Being ridiculed, Ian reproached himself for not putting the ugly armor that had fallen out into his backpack, but for putting it on himself. Having come to his senses a little, the hero challenged those laughing to try to repeat the time record for clearing the dungeon. No one answered Ian's call, and as he passed by Enra, the girl noted that there was nothing outstanding in the hero's achievements. They exchanged a few words about the Black Dragon, after which Yan declared that he would subjugate the boss before the girl. Enra's eyes widened with delight and she asked Yan again. Suddenly the girl was touched by the stage of anger. But the hero, putting on a tough face, reminded Enr that he was an honored guest of the temple and the man who would subdue the dragon. Soon, a notification came from the system that the second part of the secret mission became available to January. As it turned out, the hero's goal was hidden in the snowy mountains and the secret prison there, which no one had ever heard of. Afterwards, Jan decided to examine the previously received things, which were now intended for a new task. Opening the inventory, a rusty key and dragon blood essence glowed in front of Jan with a golden glow. Having quickly drawn up a future plan of action, the hero hurried to say goodbye to Enra. The other characters had no choice but to watch the arrogant boy walk away. In an instant, Enra's crazy-looking head turned towards Thimble and Lucius, the girl ordering the two to keep an eye on Ian. Some time passed now. Heading to some other place, the hero happily celebrated the completion of another transformation. Jan even called up the info panel once again in order to enjoy the characteristics that the received dragon armor gave. Soon, a view of snowy mountains opened up before the hero. Moving on, Jan encountered a stifling fog that drenched the hero with a chill that pierced his skin. Having decided to check his route with the map, Jan almost started shouting, because in fact, he had not even walked half the route to the dungeon. The hero didn't even notice how something eerie was secretly watching him from the haze of fog. Suddenly, the hero turned around, saying that he needed to sort out all sorts of little things. The next moment, magic pierced the creature that was hiding in the fog. As it turned out, Yana was saved by a mysterious stranger who was also wandering in the fog of the frosty mountains. Callista, the owner of the Thunder Sword, could not understand how someone like Yang ended up in such a godforsaken place. Bowing for her help, Yan told the girl that he had come to the mountains to carry out a secret mission. Suddenly, Callista offered Ian to join her, but the hero hastened to inform her that the mission required a solo passage. After that, the hero briefly said goodbye to the girl and disappeared into the fog. Once out of sight, Jan grinned slyly, because in his thoughts, he was going to cheat once again. Then the hero summoned the spiritual wolves. Unexpectedly, the spiritual wolves turned red, and then launched a high-speed dash. Looking at the state of the wolves, Yang was worried that they might still be under the influence of the red moon, and therefore be potentially dangerous. Thus, fanning the fog before his movement, Jan rushed along the labyrinth of mountains on the wolves. At some point, the hero put his feet out and braked. Looking up, a tall door leading into the dungeon stretched out before Jan. As soon as Jan walked through the doors, an unpleasant smell hit his nose. Along the walls of the cave through which the hero walked, half-decomposed corpses were visible every now and then, which gave off the smell itself. Realizing that the smaller enemies had already been killed by someone, Jan knocked down the grate in front of him with all his might. Next, he entered a room that served as a library, in the middle of which was a pentagram. In the center of it, with a glowing eye, was a dead man, to whom Jan greedily reached out. As expected by the laws of the genre, the dead man came to life, gained weight and height, and now presented himself as the boss. The boss's skull opened and a scream escaped, but Ian politely asked the dead man to behave more modestly. The next moment, the spiritual wolves pounced on the dead man, who was now screaming in pain. The boss was defeated, experience was awarded, and as a reward, the hero was given a book. Opening the book out of interest, Jan uncovered a crazy story about an old necromancer's experiments on people. The hero slammed the book shut and put his hand to his forehead in disappointment when he learned that all of the necromancer's experiments had failed. Initially, the thoughtless waste of time was unexpectedly rewarded when the system notified Ian that he had acquired the blood blessing ritual. Having called for details, the hero learned that the ritual allowed one to increase one's strength characteristics through manipulation of blood. The hero thought about it, because despite the multiple increase in his characteristics due to the ritual, it did not really help the boss against the spiritual wolves. Suddenly it dawned on Jan that he could use the blood of a powerful creature for the ritual, and not ordinary people, as the necromancer did. Then, licking his lips, Jan decided to wait with the ritual, because he could get the blood of the black dragon himself. Deciding to try something out, Ian wanted to connect to the black dragon while still in the dungeon. Having begun to prepare, the hero ordered the spiritual wolves to guard Jan while he was in the ritual circle. Next, Jan commanded the system to make a connection. The scene immediately changed to the kingdom of the black dragon. Now there, sighing, Lilith twitched her legs boredly. She was angry at the black dragon, who, although he had given the elf a promise of freedom, himself slept on a permanent basis. Then, sighing, Lilith remembered that during the entire long time of the elf's imprisonment, only one court magician had come to save her. Immediately after this, a dragon's roar was heard. The elf was seriously scared, to which John hastened to explain to her that he was acting out of old habit. Then, having lost interest in Lilith, the hero decided to get down to business. Having shocked the elf, the dragon thrust his claw into his body with all his might. Golden-colored blood immediately gushed from the dragon's wound. Lilith noticed another abnormal behavior in the dragon, to which Jan gave an excuse in the form of a bad mood. Hearing this, the elf giggled slyly, thinking that the black dragon had been denied a dream by a representative of his own species. Then, Lilith blushed and shook her head negatively when the hero suggested that the elf was worried about him. Distracted from the girl again, Ian combined the boss's blood he had received with the vial. Having finished this task, Jan began to disconnect from the system, and the dragon, to the elf's surprise, fell asleep again. The dragon's last words were instructions to the elf to keep an eye out for enemies. As soon as the dragon began to snore, Lilith became indignant at the whole area, because every time the dragon left her alone with strange words spoken beforehand. A second later, having disconnected from the dragon, the hero returned to the dungeon. Next, Jan stood in the center of the ritual circle. A bottle of golden dragon blood appeared in his hands. Taking another risk, Jan began to swallow the viscous blood. The next second, a sharp spasm seized his body. Screaming in pain, Jan fell to the ground. Behind the pain, a heat began to be felt that penetrated into all parts of the hero's body. Yana was overcome by the feeling that the blood she had drunk was trying to take possession of the hero. Immediately after this, the behavior of the spiritual wolves also changed, and they began to growl disapprovingly at the hero. Sensing danger, Jan commanded the wolves not to come closer. Involuntarily, the hero smiled. The thought settled in his head that only through pain would he be able to become stronger. A few more moments and a bloody cocoon wrapped around Jan's body. Noticing that the master's movements had stopped, the spiritual wolves began to slowly approach him. The next moment, rays began to break through the cocoon. The cocoon shell crumbled, and Jan's renewed eye appeared from within. Another crack in the cocoon, a crunch, and a relief body appeared from there. There was another crack, and a powerful hand forced its way through the cocoon. Having finally broken out of the cocoon, a new Yang appeared to the world. By increasing his stats and resistances, it turned out that from now on, Yang could project and control fire from his hands. Immediately, the spiritual wolves clung to the hero, sensing in him the strength and submission that Jan himself respected. Next, deciding to test the acquired power of the black flame, Yang snapped his fingers. Right there, a wave-like storm broke out in front of the hero. Jan became frightened, realizing that he had gone a bit too far. The next moment, riding the spiritual wolf, the hero was already running from his own magic. The flame pursued the hero until he, riding a wolf, jumped over the abyss. Finally safe, Ian began to instruct himself so that in the future, he would not overdo it with his newfound power. Afterwards, he called the system to change his profession. His actions were interrupted, because John heard someone calling for help. Somewhere in the mountains, holding her sword in front of her, Callista asked someone not to come near her. Licking her lips and drawing her blades, the The girl was cornered by a group of players. Callista tried to reason with the players, but they didn't care about the threats of revenge from all sorts of guilds. The players even boasted that each of them had at least one kill behind them. One of them even laughed out loud, anticipating how greedily he would enjoy the girl's defenseless body. After which their greedy hands reached out to Callista. Callista was about to want to kill herself rather than endure such humiliation, when one of the hands reaching out to the girl was cut off by something. One of the players yelped in pain. Immediately after this, Jan's voice was heard, arriving just in time. The bandits quickly turned their attention to the hero. Then the voice of Callista was heard, who did not want Ian to sacrifice himself for the girl. But the hero only grinned smugly, because he knew how much power he now possessed. Having decided to play with the bandits at first, Jan began to dodge all their attacks. Then he began to throw them into the air with light pushes, but one of them still managed to slip behind the hero. The fatal blow did not happen, because Jan simply cut off the attacker's sword. The player could do nothing but look at the broken platinum-level sword in confusion. Suddenly, a brilliant idea came into his head to take and defeat Jan, in order to shake out the precious things from the hero's inventory. After which all the robbers attacked Jan at once. The hero laughed loudly, saying that the robbers would not be able to spend the money they had stolen. With his next move, Yang extended his hand and summoned a swirling flame. Immediately after this, magic began to envelop the bodies of the bandits. A few moments later, the flames of destruction swelled, rising to the tops of the mountains. As soon as the bandits were destroyed, a variety of things that were used by them for perverted pleasures fell into Jan's inventory. Afterwards, the hero looked around the affected area, noting the worthy characteristics of the acquired magic. Next, Jan's gaze touched the confused Callista, whom the hero asked to keep what he saw a secret. But behind the girl's fear, an embarrassed smile and gratitude for the rescue instantly appeared. The characters quickly got into conversation, and Ian introduced himself to the girl. Callista gasped. It turned out that she had already heard something about Yana earlier. The girl remembered that her friend Yui had been telling endless stories about a hero who had defeated thousands of bosses single-handedly. Following this, with a chuckle, Callista said that many people must now know about Jan's exploits. The hero hastened to end this uncomfortable conversation and said goodbye to the girl. Watching the hero go, Callista was forced to admit that Ian was truly an amazing person. After some time, the hero's eyes again looked at the statue in the temple. With a confident movement, Jan extended his hand towards the pedestal. For a series of completed 5-star missions, the hero was immediately enveloped in colorful rings of blessing and level-up magic. As a special reward, the system gave Jan a skill that could destroy any spell and effectively resist magicians. Also, a summoning armor skill appeared, which spent mana, but protected the hero. But the most important prize in the series of blessings and items was a book. By opening it, the hero once again increased his stats, doubling the effectiveness of some of his old skills. As soon as the end of the world was over, the abbess of the Bai Temple congratulated Jan. With a somewhat saddened look, Bai conveyed to the hero the information that from now on, in order to increase the level of transformation, Jan would have to visit a completely different temple. But as soon as Bai said this, the statue in the temple was filled with a golden hue. A glow immediately burst out of the statue, which began to penetrate the seductive body of the abbess. Looking at how Bai was wrapped in a strange-looking cocoon, Yang somehow remembered a similar situation with the blood ritual. Less than a minute passed, and then the cocoon cracked. Having reached a new level of transformation, a renewed Bai was revealed to the world. As it turned out, the system had specifically blessed Bai, so that she would continue to accompany Jan. Then, suddenly feeling weak, the winged girl clung to Jan's body. Having felt feminine warmth and the beating of someone else's heart, a certain calm next to Bai, the hero himself now felt it. Picking up the girl, Jan suggested that they go to the city of heaven together. At the same time, a disgruntled crowd gathered on the street. The players gathered outside the temple were angry that the doors were sealed shut. A minute later, the doors of the temple opened, and thick smoke began to pour out from inside. Many people noticed with displeasure that Jan was carrying the abbess of the temple somewhere. To irritate the hero, the players suggested the wildest theories about what Yang had done to the priestess. Calling for everyone to make way, Jan moved along the crowds of players. A few meters later, a strong hand grabbed the hero by the shoulder. Holding Jan, the bald big guy wanted to know what the hero had done to the temple priestess. Jan turned around instantly, hissing like a dragon, which frightened the big guy. He fell to the ground in horror, and behind him, the voice of the new abbess of the temple was heard. The girl, who had previously played only the role of a guide, now thanked the hero for her promotion. Although the new abbess was happy with her appointment, in reality she was sad that she would no longer be able to see Jan. But then, suddenly, the hero made a promise that he would meet the girl again and even invite her for tea. Ultimately, trying to hold back her tears, the new abbess wished the hero a successful journey. Sometime later, the characters reached the Celestial City. While there, Bai was deliberately taken from the hero's hands, assuring him that the girl would be taken care of. Realizing that the Celestial City would now become the new location for quests, Yan decided to buy a house in these parts at the same time. Sometime later, Jan sent a message to his family, briefly informing them of his move. Having closed the message window, the hero looked up at the house that the seller presented to him. Jan was a bit worried about the size of the house, but the seller, for a small surcharge, guaranteed a whole army of maids to help the hero. Unable to resist such a tempting offer, Jan agreed to purchase. The days of the hero's unrestrained rest began. First-class service and breakfast in bed. Hot spring baths that relaxed the hero to the fullest. At the end of the day, completely exhausted, Jan would collapse onto his bed. Enjoying the riches and rest, the hero planned to visit Bai the next day. At the same time, Bai herself had just woken up. Rubbing her eyes, the girl tried to understand where she had ended up. Seeing the Bai priest in front of her, fussing about her health, the girl thanked him. After giving Bai a sip of the restorative brew, the priest started talking about Yan and what the girl thought of him. Bai was quick to christen Yan as an outstanding hero and virtuous person who was destined to bring light to the world. The priest was glad to hear such things from Bai, and therefore from now on, he entrusted the heavenly city to the new priestess. Bai's firm breasts swayed as the priest noted that the red moon had not passed for several days. Without delay, Bai jumped up to warn the hero about something. Bai stopped right there and prayed for Yan so that nothing would happen to him. The priest, observing the girl's impulsive behavior, assumed that she had feelings for the hero. Events shifted back to Jan's mansion. The snoring guy woke up urgently when he heard a shrill female scream. Running out into the street, the hero met a maid who was pointing somewhere in fear. Looking up, the hero took a few steps back when he saw the demon boss standing in front of his house. Then the voice of the demon was heard, condemning the hero to death. Just as Ian was about to rush into battle, Enro appeared in the sky above him. In a commanding voice, the girl demanded that the hero leave the battlefield and leave the boss to her. But first, the puzzled hero tried to find out at least something about the Red Moon invasion, which is why everything happened. However, Enra, not being in the mood to answer stupid questions, had already called upon a spirit to help her. At the command of the mistress, the summoned beast rushed into battle. The demon, on his part, carried out a similar movement. With a play of color and shadow, flashes, both forces collided. Their battle affected Jan's brand new house, which he categorically disagreed with. During this battle, Bai appeared out of nowhere. On the move, warning the hero of the danger, the girl buried her nose in his chest. Having found a slightly less dangerous place for the two of them, Yan decided to find out from Bai all the details of what was happening now. Having collected her thoughts, the girl told Ian about an unknown space from where monsters could invade the world of people in order to kill players. Now, everything fell into place for the hero. However, even he believed that the invading demon was too strong. But then, Bai also said a few more words, thinking that Enra wanted to get to the special red crystal by destroying the invading demon. After listening to everything that had been said so far, Yang came to the conclusion that the level of the invading monster had not increased chaotically, but had changed dynamically. Meanwhile, slowly, the demon gained the upper hand over Enra's spirits, using crushing blows every now and then. The girl retreated slightly, thinking that she would not be able to win this fight so easily. Suddenly, Yan appeared in front of Enra again. Taking out his star blade, the hero suggested that the girl step aside and just watch. Raising his hand, an eerie magical aura instantly began to form around Jan. As if directing this force, the hero pointed towards the demon. Following this, Yang used the ghost body skill, which managed to move to the demon in the blink of an eye. Next, having climbed onto the demon's body, Yang used the death mark skill, which reduced the enemy's health to 40%. Enra was at a loss, because before her eyes, the guy literally deprived the mighty monster of more than half of his health with one blow. The demon tried to respond to Jan, but all his attacks missed their target. Ultimately, having decided to rely on dual cultivation, Yang was ready to finish off the demon. Following this, the hero ran up to the demon and put his hand forward. Jan's seemingly light push turned into an irresistible pressure. Under the influence of force, the demon's legs began to stagger, and he himself fell to the ground. However, being ready to fight further, the demon let out a roar. The demon then rose up, raising his axe, and growled that he would now finish off the hero. The only response was Jan's chuckle and a new aura that covered his body. The next second, Yang gathered the oozing aura with the force of one blow. Then he swung his fist. Having lost his arm, the demon growled, and the boss's health began to fall to 0. At the same time, somewhere on the side, Bai rejoiced at Yan's latest stunning victory. Enra, on the contrary, was dissatisfied, sensing some kind of cheating that Yan was demonstrating with his inadequate strength. Enra chuckled and mounted her steed, promising that one day they would meet the hero again. A couple of minutes later, left alone with Bai, Yang showed her the crystal he had found in the demon's body. The girl immediately recognized the crystal as a rare artifact, and immediately exclaimed in surprise. An inexplicable spherical object hovered in the sky, right above the hero. Almost immediately, the hero felt a pain in his body and fell to his knees. Consciousness slowly left Yan, and the last thing he saw was Bai's frightened face. Some time passed, and rays of light from the window awakened Jan. Having buried his face in something soft, the hero gradually opened his eyelids. The hero recoiled in panic when he realized that he had been sleeping on his chest. Following this, Bai's languid voice was heard, rejoicing at Yan's awakening. Bai hastened to reassure the hero, explaining his naked state as the fact that Yang had undergone a purification ritual. After which, a long monologue followed, during which Bai explained all the intricacies of the ritual of cleansing the player who fought with the demon of the Red Moon. In detail, and with obvious pleasure in her voice, Bai recalled how she stripped Yan of his clothes. Suddenly, it dawned on the girl that she had become too carried away in her story. Yan noticed something strange standing out on Bai's neck, and immediately the girl started coughing. Seeing the hero's concern, Bai hastened to explain to him that this is exactly what the Red Moon infection looks like, from which the priests themselves are cured. Suddenly, taking Bai's hands, Yang asked her not to risk herself for the sake of the hero in the future. The girl quickly removed her hands, trying to take control of herself. Bai began telling Yan about the benefits of the new stage of transformation. In an instant, the hero was bombarded with explanations about the next set of privileges, mostly in the form of money and incredible discounts. But the most important item on the list, Bai highlighted, was the exchange of red crystals. As it turned out, in such an exchange, Yan could easily trade the received crystal for forbidden spells and items of legendary rarity. After this conversation, a couple of minutes passed and then, already dressed, Jan came somewhere. Next, the hero wanted to look at the set of things that even Enro wanted to get through exchange. Immediately, a list of various weapons and spells opened up before the hero. Jan's eyes didn't know where to stop on the list, because all the items offered were of the highest quality. And yet, the hero was dissatisfied, because the average price for an item was 300 crystals, while Yan only had 3. The hero was distracted from thoughts about the need for further pumping by Bai, who informed him about returning to the temple. Yang was somewhat surprised when he heard from Bai that a very important foreign guest would be coming to the temple. A little later, the action moved to the city center. Walking along the streets, some people admired the beauty of the city. The beast mistress Min, accompanied by her retinue, was looking at the sights. The guards walking behind her were discussing how Ming's father had paid a lot of money so that the girl could subdue the dragon. The retinue's advance was stopped when an old man, blocking their path, greeted them. As it turned out, the retinue was met by Old Man Lao, the consul for external relations. The old man was approached by Min's assistant, after which a rather uncomfortable conversation took place between the characters in a kind tone. The old man insisted that Min was just an ordinary upstart who would die under the dragon's paws. The assistant denied this, believing that Lao was simply worried about his authority. Unnoticed, Min herself approached the characters, finding the establishment of friendly relations between Lao and Zenai's assistant extremely cute. Lao coughed with emotion when Min asked the old man to teach her a lot. Then the old man pointed to the portal, behind which was the kingdom of the Black Dragon. While Min was bidding farewell to the old man with all her heart, her retinue was indignant at such a reception. Having overheard some of the yapping from her retinue, Min immediately accused them of not observing etiquette. Somewhere high up from the side, they were watching Min's moralizing. Standing on the roof, Thimble recounted to Enra the biography of Min, who was also considered an outstanding beastmaster whose strength was comparable to Enra's own. However, Enra was less concerned about the stupid girl from the Flower Kingdom than she was about Yan himself. Following Enra's words, Thimble called up the information panel, which showed that Yang, who was a recent warrior, had increased his level quite quickly. Enra almost cried out loud, realizing that the hero was the most ordinary person, but who, for some reason, was incredibly lucky. Thimble distracted Enra from her thoughts by pointing out that Min's retinue had already disappeared into the portal. Missing Thimble's words about the upcoming preparations, Enra stared at Min. The stupid girl, who would have noticed Enra's gaze on her, waved goodbye to her. An extraordinary feeling overwhelmed the girl. Thimble also noted that Min was clearly waving her hand at them, which meant that the conspiracy had completely failed. Suddenly, for some reason freaking out, Enra mounted her steed, ordering Thimble to gather all the people in front of the Black Dragon's dungeon. The scene changed, returning to Jan's house. Sprawled on the sofa, the hero gave instructions to the maids on cleaning and repairing the house. As expected, a notification from the system appeared that someone had invaded the Black Dragon's realm. The glow of the portal engulfed Jan, and he only managed to say goodbye to his workers. A second later, the hero was already embodied in the boss's body. Using observation magic, Yang determined that the dungeon had been invaded by Enra and her people. Enra personally commanded the expedition, promising to reward her subordinates with riches in case of success. The hero secretly spied on the expedition's movements, hoping to pay off the cost of repairing the house after defeating them. Meanwhile, Yan noted that Enra had taken a very thorough approach to preparation, taking more experienced fighters with her. But then the hero was distracted by the voices of his dragon subjects. Yang turned his attention to the two elite boss dragons, who swore to their king that they would be able to drive out the invaders on their own. The elf's voice was heard, letting Yan know that two elite dragons appeared after licking the blood of the boss himself. Lilith also pointed out the other two dragons, although under the influence of the boss's blood, they, on the contrary, became sluggish and weak. The hero thought about what had happened, believing that two unique elite dragons could play a role. Eventually, Yan gave the go-ahead for the dragons to go and hold off the players. Then the hero glanced at the elf, who looked displeased, but she did not explain her behavior. In her thoughts, predicting the fall of the black dragon at the hands of a new party of heroes, Lilith, for some unknown reason, did not feel joy. A couple of minutes passed, and the dungeon was filled with the echoes of battle. The players' advance was accompanied by the screams of monsters and the commanding voice of Enra, who drove the people forward. Enre didn't like the excessive tension in Thimble, believing that he shouldn't take the small stuff like opponents along the way so seriously. Following this, something thundered behind Thimble, and the system alerted him to the presence of elite enemies. The heroes turned their gaze to the two dragons that blocked their further path. Players went on the attack, separating the mini-bosses to prevent them from performing combined attacks. At one point, one of the mini-bosses received two crushing blows from the players at once. Falling to the ground and roaring in death, the dragon died in the name of his king. The surviving mini-boss has become much stronger after the death of its fellow. Then, with a deafening roar, the dragon called the smaller creatures to his aid. At the same time, the sound of fingers snapping was heard. Enra called upon the spirit beasts to help her people, urging them to remain strong and continue to fight. Seeing the spirit beasts rushing towards the mini-boss, the players became inspired. One after another, the spirit beasts began to deal damage to the mini-boss. Then, in a final blow, they all fell upon the dragon. At some point, Enra's voice was heard, asking not to kill the mini-boss, but to leave him weakened for the girl. Soon, the second mini-boss fell next to his brother. Growling, he only asked to finish him off. Next, Enra approached the mini-boss, bent down, and began to try to tame him. The dragon jerked, growled, and exclaimed that he would never submit to a man. But Enra continued her attempts, activating the taming skill over and over again. At some point, the dragon completely forgot his identity, starting to look around in confusion. Struggling with himself, the dragon was forced to admit that he was now Enra's servant. Secretly watching this picture, even Yan himself, who was against taming his dragons, growled angrily. Then, having assessed his strength, the hero called up the inventory, where the strange meat lay, deciding to feed it to the black dragon. Lilith radiated disgust when she realized that the black dragon was about to eat the disgusting piece of meat. Ignoring the reactions of those around him, the dragon threw a piece of meat into his mouth. As soon as the fangs and tongue touched the meat, the dragon's face twisted. Following this, Jan began to spit, because the meat tasted like sewage. Then, the hero felt how an irresistible force began to grow inside his body. Having burst out of the dragon's throat, this force rushed upward. Her pillar of light was noticed from afar by the players who had invaded the dungeon. The previously defeated dragons seemed to come to their senses, realizing that the light was the work of their king. Immediately, a gust of air followed, causing Enra to cover herself with her hands. A couple of seconds later, the girl's eyes froze in surprise. The first thing that came into her sight were massive claws. Then wings appeared, like the sails of a frigate. For reasons completely unknown to Enra, the boss mutated and increased its level. Along with the boss's level increasing to lunar, the level of the dungeon where Enra arrived also increased. Now, Jan was ready to crush, and so he rushed towards the players. Lucius, having started to insult the black dragon, ran forward, but Thimble managed to intercept him. The players, realizing that the boss had increased his level and was now beyond the expedition's reach, turned to Enra for advice. The girl, meanwhile, was biting her nails, trying to find some explanation for what had happened. At the same time, Jan was accumulating strength. Seeing that their leader was hesitating, Thimble took over command. Following his instructions, the players began to prepare for an aggressive defense. Not even a minute had passed before a fiery breath followed from the black dragon. A fiery hell erupted, engulfing the duel area. In the raging flames, human screams were heard. As soon as the elements subsided, the black dragon descended to the ground in front of the last survivors. Barely alive, Thimble practically admired the boss's power, which killed more than half of the player squad with just one attack. Unexpectedly, Thimble broke the circle of life, returning himself to full health. All other living members of the expedition acted in a similar manner. Thinking that Yang had used all of his powerful tricks, Enra summoned the spirit beasts, deciding to carry out a counterattack. The next moment, multiple magic and physical attacks fell upon the dragon, which generally had no effect. In order to assess the extent of the damage inflicted on the dragon, Enra flew closer to it. Taking a look, the girl said in shock that the dragon had not suffered any damage. Enra's words were echoed by Thimble, who saw the only outcome as a banal delay. Thimble's words were supported by Lucius, who considered the boss invincible in the current state of affairs. Having played with the hunters to his heart's content, the dragon raised his paw and growled that his strength was limitless. At that very moment, one of the players began to activate the sand attack ability. But immediately after that, the dragon strike caught up with him. Following the impact, columns of dust rose into the sky. As soon as the curtain dispersed, players appeared underneath it, some of whom were on the verge of death. Looking down on the battlefield from above, Enra had a number of questions about how the Black Dragon managed to defeat the entire group in just one encounter. The girl was brought out of her state of shock by Thimble's voice, which urged her to flee. Enra wanted to continue the fight, but Thimble made her understand that their defeat was inevitable, and it was necessary for at least one person to survive. While fiercely struggling with her inner principles, Enra eventually acknowledged the truth of Thimble's words. Afterwards, the girl hastened to retreat and leave the dungeon. The hero noticed Enra's escape and was about to turn his attention to her, when suddenly the players used provocation. The surviving players planned to sacrifice themselves and buy time for Enra to escape. Without depriving the players of their hopes of death, the dragon belched flames in their direction. At the same time, Enra hurried towards the exit of the dungeon, blaming herself for losing the battle. The girl calmed herself with the thought that from now on, no one would be able to defeat the Black Dragon, which meant no one would be able to shame Enra for running away. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew and knocked the girl off her horse. Finding himself on the ground and looking up, a black dragon appeared before Enra in all its glory. Instantly, the girl summoned one of the spiritual beasts to delay the boss. But as soon as she tried to run away to the side, something grabbed her. Having fallen into the clutches of the dragon, Enra began to scream so that the boss would immediately let her go. The girl immediately shut up, because the dragon's menacing voice began to sound, mocking Enra's efforts to tame the boss. Then, as payment for such impudence, the dragon opened its mouth with obvious intentions. Enra froze and stuttered, trying to say something so that the dragon would not take her life. After which, the girl began to sob uncontrollably. Crying out loud, Enra was not so much afraid of dying, as she was of losing to Yan and the girl from the Flower Kingdom. The hero was moved by tears and decided not to eat Enra. After thinking for a couple of seconds, the dragon said that he would give the girl a quick death. With a light blow, the dragon burned the Beast Lord alive. Having finished with the invaders, Yan asked Enra not to be too angry with him, because the hero really was not prejudiced against the female sex. Afterwards, a signal was heard from the system, and the hero received the next levels of character development. Feeling a surge of previously unknown strength, the dragon let out a roar. Then, Jan brought up the system window. Melcom, the hero examined the quantity and quality of equipment that the players had lost in the dungeon. Deciding to take a closer look at one of the trophies, something flashed in the dragon's paw. Immediately after this, the system displayed information about the rarest Spirit Whisper ring. Jan narrowed his eyes in satisfaction when he learned that the ring gave unimaginable types of resistance, and also had no level restrictions. Immediately, something new began to spin in front of the dragon. The spinning of the object stopped and the scroll of the Wind God's Fury appeared before the hero. Having familiarized himself with the scroll's lethal characteristics for any opponent, Yang, in the form of a dragon, soared into the sky, hoping to temporarily put an end to the dungeon's defense. Far, far away, the elf watched as the black dragon soared into the sky. She was glad of her guardian's victory and hoped that the dragon would keep his word. A couple of minutes passed and now the hero returned to his house. Looking around, Jan noted with satisfaction that upon his return the repairs had already been completed. Next, Ian sat down on the sofa, asking his maids to provide the hero with a relaxing massage. Meanwhile, some events were unfolding near the portal to the entrance to the Black Dragon dungeon. There, the group of players that had just been defeated by the Black Dragon were in disarray due to such a crushing defeat. Thimble's voice was heard, urgently shutting everyone up and trying to find Enra. Having fallen silent, the players imagined that the girl had finally died, just as the necromancer had once been destroyed. But then, Thimble heard the faint echoes of crying. Looking behind one of the rocks, he eventually discovered Enra. Sobbing and tearing herself away from her tears for a second or two, Enra mumbled that she was ready to tame the Black Dragon. Then she let out an embarrassed cry when she realized that her complaints were being heard from the outside. Thimble wanted to report the losses to Enra, but she, at this point in time, did not want to hear anything more. Still, Thimble dared to approach Enra, suggesting that she focus on taming the other dragons. These words struck Enra, because if she had managed to tame other dragons, the girl would still remain the great Beastmaster. In an instant, Enra remembered the existence of 2 other dragons, although they were equal in level to the Black Dragon, but in terms of strength, they were much weaker. Enra agreed with Thimble, causing the latter to laugh happily. Next, Enra appeared before the members of the expedition, letting them know that their losses would be compensated. The girl's speech was interrupted by a sweet and innocent voice from the side. As it turned out, Min and her retinue appeared nearby. Min hurried to meet Enra, informing her that she had come to tame the Black Dragon. Without shaking hands, Enra walked around the girl from the Flower Country and wished her luck. Following Enra's departure, words of contempt were heard from Xena, who demanded that the girl adhere to the norms of etiquette. Just as quickly as she started, Xena's anger faded, realizing that Enra had been defeated by the dragon. Immediately, Min hit Xena on the head, calling on her to behave appropriately and not rejoice in other people's grief. Obeying, Xena began to activate the dungeon for entry. Xena felt a sharp sense of surprise when she learned that the dungeon had been upgraded to lunar level. Immediately after this, Xena was surrounded by the rest of her retinue, who also did not understand how they could fight in a dungeon of such complexity. Following this, contact was made with Old Man Lao, who pledged to compensate for the dissatisfaction of Min and her retinue by providing free hotel accommodation. The old man himself began to think that some third party might be involved in the dragon's rapid growth. After all these events, hours passed and a new day arrived. Yang wandered to the entrance of the Black Dragon's dungeon. While stretching his muscles, the hero understood why no one else dared to go into the dungeons. Because from now on, Yan himself was the boss there. Having activated the portal, the guy soon entered the kingdom of the Black Dragon. Looking around the dungeon for the first time, Jan felt like a hunter, not a formidable destructive snake. Not even a minute had passed before flying creatures began to gather near the place where the hero was. But Jan was in no hurry to give battle to the local monsters. Instead, he used his upgraded dragon eyes. Instead of attacking, the flying dragons were caught in the air, looking at Jan. One of them recognized in the hero's gaze the ruler himself, the Black Dragon. An aura of flame surrounded Jan, causing the flying dragons not to dare approach the hero. Abruptly, the hero commanded the creatures to retreat. Jan's thunder-like voice sent the flying snakes fleeing. Afterwards, the hero summoned the soul of the Dark Wolf. Jan immediately commanded the wolf to guard the territory and not let other small monsters through. Next, the hero planned to start acting like a boss. At the same time, the Black Dragon woke up from hibernation, which the elf noticed. But the dragon, without even exchanging a few words with Lilith, simply took off and rushed into the distance. The dragon's flight lay towards the entrance to the dungeons, near which the spiritual wolves were located. A few moments later, the boss landed in front of them. The spirit wolves were overcome with doubt, and they immediately smelled the scent of Yan on the boss. But then, for some reason, the boss raised his front paw. Having discouraged the wolves, the dragon pierced his own chest. For some reason, a roar followed, turning into words, during which the Black Dragon noted that a number of Yan's talents did not work while he was injured. As it turned out, the hero was remotely controlling the dragon's thoughts, now commanding him to stay in place and not try to regenerate. Then, unexpectedly, the connection was broken. Following this, Jan came down from somewhere high above. The hero began to approach the Black Dragon, thanking him for the fact that the guy was able to realize his dream. But Jan also noted that his journey was just beginning, and he needed to move on. After running, Yan jumped up. In the future blow, he called on the Black Dragon Athos to die, rise again and enslave the world together. 2 hours have passed since then. Both Yan and his spiritual wolves felt immense fatigue. However, the dragon's life was only reduced to 19%. Having finally experienced what it was like to be a hunter, the hero decided to fuel his powers with an elixir. Jan was ready to attack again, and this time, for the last time. Meanwhile, the action moved to the sleeping Lilith. The elf woke up suddenly when she heard the dragon's roar. As Lilith ran towards the sound of the roar, the other dragons suddenly felt their bodies begin to dissolve. Lilith felt that with each passing second, the Black Dragon's aura was weakening. At the same time, in another place in the dungeon, Jan stated that the job was done. Roaring from the complete loss of health, the Black Dragon collapsed. The hero stood frozen and watched the beauty of the majestic boss's death. As soon as the Black Dragon disappeared, a weapon appeared in its place. Approaching the weapon, Jan confidently grabbed the handle. As soon as the hero touched the weapon, he felt the frantic power that filled his body. A notification from the system instantly appeared, and now Yan knew that the acquired weapon significantly increased many of the hero's stats. With a joyful exclamation, Jan swung his weapon. Slamming it into the ground, Yang shattered the surrounding area into dust. The hero did not expect to become the owner of such destructive power. However, despite defeating the Black Dragon, Yan still had the boss's artifact in his hands. A notification from the system appeared that this artifact, as well as its next super useful properties, was awarded to Yan. Immediately after this, the Black Dragon was resurrected, but now, being close to the hero, Ian hurried to touch the boss, at the same time apologizing for erasing his memory for his own benefit. But there was no time to talk, and so Jan jumped on the boss's nose, ordering him to fly to the top of the fortress. Obeying, the dragon soared into the sky. The action moved to the dragon's lair, where the lost elf was wandering, now not knowing what to do after the death of the boss. By chance, she spotted a familiar winged silhouette in the sky. Soon, the dragon landed next to Lilith. The elf looked up and gasped. Promising salvation, the mysterious young man extended his hand to her. The elf couldn't believe that Jan had managed to subdue the Black Dragon. But Lilith remembered that before, no one had ever managed to defeat the strongest and most cruel of the dragons. Yet, accepting reality, in her eyes, Lilith saw Ian as a legendary dragon slayer. Meanwhile, seeing that the elf had frozen, Jan again offered her his hand. With a hesitant voice, Lilith agreed and climbed onto the dragon's nose. Next, Jan asked the elf to hold on to herself, because they were about to take off. Immediately after this, the dragon soared upward. A couple of seconds later, the hero urged Lilith to open her eyes and enjoy the views. Following the advice, Lilith was presented with a truly beautiful view of the mountains and clouds. Having become free for the first time, the elf felt an unprecedented lightness throughout her entire body. The Black Dragon himself responded to their conversation, also wanting to give Lilith freedom. At that very moment, Lilith for some reason turned all her attention to the Black Dragon, considering the boss to be the hero of her story. Meanwhile, the flight continued and they approached the portal. At the same time, in the wasteland, outside the dragon's dungeon, a battle was taking place. Players who had defeated another batch of monsters suddenly saw clouds gathering above them. Raising their heads, they were stunned to see a giant dragon in the sky. The next second, he landed with a bang next to them. Realizing that the boss was near them, the players began to run. Jan looked contentedly after the fleeing players, whom he had frightened with his power. Next, a conversation took place among the characters, during which it became clear that Lilith did not really want to return home. The elf, embarrassed by her words, still wished to travel with Jan, in fact, remembering her oath to marry the Dragon Slayer. With a heavy sigh, the hero had no choice but to accept the elf, although in fact, Jan had no plans for her. At that very moment, Lilith decided to find out how Yang tamed the Black Dragon, but the hero kept it a secret for now. Some time passed and the scene changed to a city of people. There, in the midst of the peaceful bustle of the city, a piercing roar was heard from nowhere. Thimble and Enra immediately recognized the Black Dragon's voice in the roar. Min heard the same thing, and unlike many others, enjoyed the boss's voice. Following this, Min suggested that Xena go down and find the source of the sound. At that very second, someone unknown was spying on Mina from around the corner. The scene changed again, moving to the secret kingdom of the Black Dragon. Tired of such long flights, Lilith? John asked in every way to be patient until the characters reached the desired point. Some time passed, the dragon landed, and Yang pointed Lilith to a point above which clouds of dust were rising. A huge number of players, under the leadership of the chief of the Heavenly City Wei, went to the source of the dragon's roar. Eventually, the crowd of people found the Black Dragon and were stunned at the sight of it. At that very moment, Jan hurried towards them. Belle recognized Yan and immediately told Wei about it. Approaching the people, the hero made them understand that he had tamed the Black Dragon. But Wei was in no hurry to take his word for it and asked the hero to prove it. Jan gave the dragon a command and it roared at the top of its lungs. Everyone present was frightened, but from now on, Wei believed Yang. But at the same time, Wei's breath caught when he saw how strong the aura was swirling around the hero. His breathing became even more difficult when his eye caught sight of Lilith, who was considered a nearly impossible task to save. Staggering, Wei decided to touch Yang, who he believed must be a divine messenger. But he stumbled and fell to his knees in front of the hero. For a moment, an awkward scene ensued. Smiling, Yang extended his hand to Wei to help him stand up. However, at the most inopportune moment, a notification was heard from the system that the hero, having moved on to the next stage of development, had to replace the new boss. The next second, Wei distracted Yang, believing that the person in front of him was the leader of the Beast Conquerors. Belle was quick to calm Wei down, reminding him that no one had received any notifications about Yan. It was then that Min, who had been greeting everyone, came to the forefront like a jack-in-the-box. The girl extended her hand to Ian, introducing herself, and at the same time asked the hero to tell him everything about taming the Black Dragon. Min immediately corrected herself, saying that such information was clearly secret. Following this, everyone was shocked, because Ian publicly said that he was not a Beast Conqueror. Immediately, in defiance of each other, The characters began to question Jan about how he managed to subdue the Black Dragon. As expected, Ian had no intention of revealing his secret, but he did offer the trio a ride on the dragon to the city. Wei didn't ask any more questions, and promised Yang that he would inform the people of the city that the dragon was not dangerous. Then Min spoke up, asking Yan for permission to tell her teacher about everything she had seen. Wei quickly explained to Yang that teacher Ming must be the leader of the Beast Conquerors. Bowing to Yan, Min reported that her teacher would certainly be glad to invite the hero to the Beast Conquerors Association. After hearing this, Jan was overcome with a feeling of unprecedented importance, because his advice would be asked by people of the highest levels of development and life experience. Deciding not to rush things for now, Jan said something about his business, after which he rushed upward on the dragon. Looking at the boss flying away over the horizon, Min regretted that she didn't have her own dragon. Some time passed, and the dragon reached the city near the mountain. The dragon flew over the highest point of the world there, where Enro was located. Noticing a familiar face, Ian looked at Enra. She, with obvious displeasure, also recognized January. The girl was wildly infuriated that someone had overtaken her. However, Enra accepted the fact that she needed more practice. Wiping away the tears that were welling up in her eyes, Enra swore that one day she would also tame a dragon, and after that, defeat Yan himself. Next, the dragon flew over the city itself, and at the same time, the news came that the kingdom of the Black Dragon had been cleared. The townspeople peered at the dragon's appearance, discussing it, even noticing the rider, next to whom was a girl. After some time, the scene moved to Jan's house. Having frightened the maid, the dragon landed on the porch of the house in all its glory. A hero appeared who hastened to ask the worker for forgiveness. True, now Yan didn't know where to put the dragon himself, because he was not a beast conqueror with all the corresponding skills. Lilith looked out from behind Jan. She found the hero's dwelling spacious and clean. As soon as the elf descended from the dragon, the hero made it clear to her that the house was entirely at the girl's disposal. In his thoughts, Jan found the princess simple, without complexes, and most importantly, sweet. Some time passed, and events took place somewhere inside Jan's house. While meditating, the hero asked the system to introduce him to the new boss. The hero shuddered when the system assigned Yan a god-level boss. The hero began to remember that such a level was only awarded to those players who had overcome all the previous ones, but not before this one. In reality, this meant that Jan, having jumped over many other tests, was already on the ladder that led to the level of a demigod. Jan had no choice but to agree to the connection. At that very second, a portal opened up beneath him. The world in Ian's eyes darkened, and then a flash of light burst through the emptiness. The demon lord woke up and the muscles of his body trembled. Following this, a panel with hundreds of characteristics and talents opened up in front of Jan, which made the hero incredibly delighted. After learning about the boss's abilities, Ian asked the system to tell him about the dungeon itself. The panel lit up, and it became clear to the hero that the dungeon was another secret kingdom, where players could endlessly increase their level and search for treasures. Further, having learned about the player's attempts to pass the dungeon, the hero realized that the boss was essentially immortal, which meant that Yan could not easily take and defeat him. Afterwards, the demon looked up, looked around, and saw thrones that were clearly empty without their owners. Taking a closer look, the hero realized that some of the throne holders had been defeated, because they no longer had a glow in the stone. In light of this, Yan decided to take advantage of the boss's talent in the form of original sin. Following this, an enveloping magic appeared in the air. By Jan's command, the Lord of Gluttony, Beelzebub, was resurrected. Noticing the dungeon boss, Beelzebub exclaimed in surprise, and then thanked his master for his second life. The demon hastened to bow to the hero and ask him for mercy for his defeat. Jan's surprise quickly turned to delight, because the resurrected demon sacrificed part of his talents to the boss, which the hero himself wanted to turn to his advantage. Just as Jan wanted to talk about something with Beelzebub, he heard an annoying knock on the door. As quickly as possible, Jan sent the demon to his post. Sitting on his throne, Beelzebub swore that from now on he would fight even more fiercely, just to clear his name in front of the boss. The teleporter was activated, and Beelzebub was sent to the part of the dungeon that he owned. After this, Jan hastened to break the connection. Clenching his fist, the hero felt a new strength and a thirst for power, which he had fed on while being a demon in the abyss. Meanwhile, the annoying knocking on Jan's door grew louder. Leaving the room, the hero ran into a maid, who informed him that Wei had arrived for the meeting. Jan hurried down to the first floor of his house, where an unexpected guest was waiting for him. As soon as Wei saw Yan, he greeted him with all honors. After shaking hands, Wei hastened to inform the hero that his feat of taming the Black Dragon had quickly spread throughout the area. But the true purpose of Wei's meeting with Yan was to inform him that Yan, as the tamer of the Black Dragon, would be met by a person from the Beast Conqueror Association. Yang wanted to know the arrival time of this person. but Wei said the figure was in the next 10 minutes. The action moved to the teleportation center of the City of Heaven, where a crowd had formed. The people, caught up in the excitement, were waiting for someone there. A few seconds later, shouts of the arrival of the Beast Conqueror Elder could be heard from the crowd. A kind old man named Mank appeared before the people. Enra hurried to the old man and greeted him. Having already resigned herself, the girl informed Mank that from now on, she could not bear the title of primacy, because she had been surpassed in the matter of conquering the dragon. The old man called Enra his daughter and asked her not to dwell on her defeats. During their conversation, Enra suddenly remembered the secret realm of spiritual dragons, which could only be entered by a person who possessed a dragon of his own. In fact, Enra followed the path of Vela, who was the first and only one who had previously managed to tame a dragon. The rewards of the secret dragon kingdom attracted Enra, because the stronger your dragon was, the more valuable the rewards themselves would be. In light of this, Enra named the silver dragon as her new target for taming. However, Mank asked the girl not to rush and suggested that they go to a joint meeting with Jan. As soon as she heard about the hero, Enra turned around and walked away, apologizing to the teacher along the way. Afterwards, the scene moved back to Jan's house. While walking on the lawn, Yang and Wei suddenly heard an unusual sound. Mank, riding a phoenix, was approaching them. Mank's flight passed directly over the sleeping black dragon. Suddenly, the great serpent woke up. The dragon raised its head and let out a wild roar. Hearing and seeing the dragon, the phoenix suddenly stopped. The next second, the bird took off in a completely different direction. A little later, after calming the phoenix, Mank landed next to the other characters. As soon as the old man got off the bird, Wei introduced Yang to him. Mank began to praise Jan, calling the hero's talent extremely rare. Mank accepted the hero's words as luck with laughter, and in response, offered Jan to become a member of the association. Jan thought about it. He was trying to convey to the old man that he was not a beast conqueror. The old man waved it off. He considered such things to be a mere trifle. As soon as he did, Mank asked the hero again about his words before. Urgently calling up Ian's character panel, Mank learned with horror that his class was fighter. Then Mank turned away and asked the hero to wait. The old man called up the guild chat, where he informed all members that Ian was not a beast conqueror. After that, Mank called up another menu, but the data there was hidden. Eventually, after discussions in the chat, Mank invited Ian to join the association as an honorary member. In return for such honors, Monk asked for only a little, a couple of lessons from Ian on how to tame the black dragon. The hero thought for a moment. He was not ready to give up the privileges of the SSS class so quickly. Cunningly, Ian said that his lessons might not have any effect, to which the old man compared the hero to Valia, who also failed to help the association in any way. Finally, the hero grinned and agreed to join the association. Afterwards, the scene moved to the Holy City, the temple, where changes of professions took place. In Yan's world, the sacred city played a particularly important role, but no one really knew its origins. The most important person in this place was Saint Vega. Vega appeared to people once every 10 years, at the very time when players who had reached the level of a demigod were ready to test their strength on someone else. Great warriors and magicians, they all challenged Vega. Their destructive attacks, capable of destroying the very fabric of nature, were directed at the saint every now and then. But nothing could ever penetrate even Vega's light shield itself. Events returned to the present day, with Vega awakening once again. With anger in her eyes, the priestess took in the information that the demon of gluttony, Beelzebub, had been resurrected. For Vega, all this meant only one thing. A new mechanism had appeared that broke the established rules of the era. Vega then turned to the statue, asking for its blessing to carry out a crusade into the demonic abyss itself. The next moment, the Eye of Insight took possession of the priestess's vision. Spiritually, she was transported into the very darkness and emptiness of the world. As soon as Vega rose, the thrones of the sin demons appeared before him. The priestess recalled that after the last deep expedition, many other demons were finally and irrevocably defeated. Consistently, her memory called the names of the cruel rulers of the demonic kingdom, but among them, only Beelzebub, for some unknown reason, was brought back to life. Looking up, Vega saw a huge silhouette, but whose true details were hidden from the priestess even by the Eye of Insight itself. Pointing a spear towards the silhouette, in the name of light, Vega ordered the unknown to show his face. In the whirlwind of events, a man was shown to the priestess, but whose face was still hidden. Suddenly, a menacing voice sounded behind Vega, who was angry about the espionage. The next moment, holding a formidable sword, Lucifer appeared before the priestess. Following this, the abyssal realm magic barrier was released towards Vega. The magic created pushed Vega away. The priestess felt the Eye of Insight effect that had been cast on her earlier weaken. Eventually, the vision faded, and the spirit of the priestess left the demon realm. Having driven out the uninvited guest, Lucifer hurried to her master. She looked at the dungeon boss lovingly. dreaming that one day she would be able to look at his face again. At the same time, in the temple, Vega fell to her knees. She did not expect to face such a powerful rebuff. Now, the priestess could only guess who the one was that even the Demon King himself served. Suddenly, a light descended upon the priestess. This light signified to absolutely everyone that a new boss had appeared in the abyss. Afterwards, the system began to notify various outstanding players one by one about the appearance of a new boss. Some of them were looking for glory, while others wanted to get hold of more powerful weapons. Others were attracted by the very thought that the quest for divine ascension would become available. The events moved to the Temple of the Celestial City, where the buzz of the crowd could be heard from the announcement of the system. And if for Bai, the announcement of the world boss was a historic event, then for Yan it was more of a shocking revelation. As soon as this news reached Mank's ears, the old man hastened to leave the hero. But then, Bai spoke up, sharing her experiences about the extraordinary events that have befallen the world recently. In response, Yang smiled, patted Bai on the shoulder and promised to be careful. But in reality, in his thoughts, the hero was mentally preparing himself to confront the most powerful guilds in the world. Ian considered his advantage to be the first to defeat the Demon King and get the unique items that would drop from the boss. Suddenly, an interesting thought settled in Jan's head. The hero believed that he would be able to get hold of no less unique things if he defeated the Demon King's confidants. Yang expected that the weapons he would obtain from the Demon King's companions would have simply unrealistic characteristics. Also, Yan thought about the fact that his subjects could sacrifice themselves, thereby avoiding unnecessary combat. However, first, Yan had to resurrect a considerable number of demons, and to do this, it was necessary to reduce the spell's recovery time. In his plans, the hero hoped to bypass all other players, be the first to defeat the Demon King, and have the title of divinity. Be that as it may, Jan had been actively cheating all his way, and especially now, he was not going to leave this path. But first, Ian took on another 5-star mission, which would provide the hero with the next level of transformation. Some time passed, and at the entrance to the Temple of the Heavenly City, quite a few outstanding players had gathered. A mage named Stone found the meeting with the other great players disgustingly unexpected. In a sarcastic manner, the old drunkard was greeted by Carolina, who was the chairwoman of the Beast Lords. Tan, the leader of the Eternal Battle Guild, urged them to talk about business, rather than argue and swear. Among them also sounded the voice of Bo, the knight who responded to Vega's call. Together they moved towards the doors of the temple. Then, pushing the heavy doors, they went inside. The forum, where powerful players came, was buzzing. Once seated, the players were presented with images of leaders of powerful states. Nobody expected it, but suddenly the sacred Vega itself appeared on the forum's territory. Having quickly thanked everyone present for their participation, the priestess began to talk about the resurrection of Beelzebub. Vega described her vision in detail. The priestess titled her story with the need to destroy the Demon King's confidants, because only with the help of their weapons would it be possible to eliminate the boss himself. Afterwards, Vega dedicated this important and dangerous task to the heroes who were sitting at the table. Following this, the priestess gave a brief summary of the successes of the last expedition, which managed to destroy only 3 of the Demon King's companions. Next, Vega turned to Stone and Tan to find out how deep they could go into the abyss. Before answering, the magician uncorked the flask and took a sip. Pointing his fingers, Stone informed the priestess that he was 3 levels ahead of the previously set record. Although in a more optimistic tone, Tan agreed with the magician's words. After listening to the players, Vega concluded that they should raise their level by another 100 positions. Knight Bo suddenly came up with an interesting idea, suggesting that we destroy the Demon King's companions over and over again and thus level up. However, after this proposal, there was discord among the players due to claims on the weapons that would be obtained after defeating mini-bosses. Knight Bo threw up his hands, suggesting that the other players concentrate on achieving the common goal, rather than squabbling. But the swearing, showdowns, and the keen desire to be first among others completely absorbed the participants of the round table. The longer this situation lasted, the tighter Vega's grip on the spear grew. At one point, calling for silence, she struck the ground with her spear. The priestess reminded the players of the purpose of the meeting, promised help from the Temple of Rebirth, as well as the formation of the expedition itself. Knight Bo hastened to apologize to Saint Vega. Next, Tan spoke up, proposing to create an expedition, not just from players and guilds, but from the countries themselves, thus getting rid of strife and competitors. After listening to Tan, all the other players agreed with his proposal. However, there was a flaw in Tan's plan, and it concerned weak countries that would not be invited to participate in the expedition. Vega summed up the dialogue by deciding to hold a vote. The voting was launched and absolutely all players voted for Tan's ideas. The first question was closed, and now the priestess passed the floor to Karelin. Getting up from the table, Carolina reminded everyone of the existence of a secret spiritual kingdom of dragons, where a lot of wealth was also hidden. She was interrupted by Stone, who reminded her of the rules for entering the secret kingdom, the most important factor of which was a tamed dragon. Carolina agreed with all the words of the magician, also noting that recently, a young man appeared who managed to tame the black dragon. Nightbow immediately responded. After hearing the story, he did not understand why Jan was made only an honorary member of the association and not the head. Tired of being interrupted and slamming the table, Carolina announced to everyone present that Jan was not a beast conqueror at all. The players present took these words with obvious surprise. Stone immediately responded that he called this information nonsense, because at one time, the magician also tried to tame the great snakes. Carolina made fun of the drunkard's words, which only made Stone even more angry. With each passing second, the conflict between the beast conqueror and the mage grew more intense. In the end, they both agreed that killing a dragon was easy, but subduing it was simply impossible. Now, even Vega herself doubted the information when she learned that high-level players were unable to subdue the dragons. Carolina took the floor again, offering the priestess to personally study the card of player Jan. Saint Vega did just that. Calling up Jan's card, she was convinced that he was a warrior by profession. Suddenly, Nightbow jumped up from the table, unable to believe that Yang, only at the 3rd level of transformation, had managed to defeat the black dragon. Tan, however, was more reserved and regretted that he had not heard anything about such an outstanding warrior earlier. In response to all of them, a laugh was heard from Carolina. The Beast Conqueror claimed that any player has a chance, albeit a ghostly one, to tame a dragon. There was a murmur from the stands when Carolina declared that with the right approach, which is still a secret, taming a dragon is just a whim. As a result, Carolina called the domestication of all animals by people her cherished goal. Then, the magician's sigh was heard. He wasn't so much concerned with long-term plans as he was interested in meeting with Jan. Stone swore that he would not offend the hero in any way, but would only exchange with him the secret knowledge of conquering the dragon for one or several forbidden spells. At the same time, the hero was suddenly overcome by a runny nose. However, Bai could do nothing more to help Jan than hand him napkins. Afterwards, interacting with the statue, the hero chose another 5-star task. Reading through the location's features and difficulty modifiers, the hero remembered that one outstanding player had once gotten stuck in this dungeon. Be that as it may, Yana was not afraid of what was to come. After leaving the temple, the hero saddled the dragon and said goodbye to Bai. After some time, Jan reached the frosty abode of the ice dungeon. The players there did more than just endure the omnipresent cold. At some point, a dragon landed in front of them. After descending and stepping onto the icy ground, Jan apologized to the players for scaring them. The players looked in fascination at Jan and then at the black dragon, from whose mouth hot breath was escaping. Overall, even the Great Serpent was forced to admit that this dungeon was too cold. Not even a couple of minutes had passed before snow monsters jumped out of ambush towards Jan. The dragon greeted them with his piercing roar. Feeling the power of the former boss, the monsters fell on their faces, begging for mercy, and the dragon actually allowed them to live. Following this, his fiery breath rained down upon the icy city ahead. The dungeon boss here went berserk when he learned that his kingdom had been almost completely destroyed by the heat. But the next second, a dragon's paw stepped straight into the boss's lair. Afterwards, a fiery tornado engulfed the boss's lair, and he was easily defeated. At the same time, Rong arrived at the ice dungeon, having learned that it was already occupied by someone. One of the players told the girls that a brave man had entered the dungeon and would surely pass that. The player made it clear that by brave man, he meant Ian, the man who tamed the black dragon. But strangely enough, neither Rong nor Yu had any idea that the brave man was the main character. Rong hurried to bring Yu to her senses, because the girl had once again fallen in love with a stranger who possessed superpowers. The player's voice was heard again, suggesting that the girls simply wait, and then personally meet the brave man, as the other two had already done. As it turned out, the player was pointing at 10 in stone. A couple of minutes passed and vibrations began to come from the portal into the dungeon. Soon a black dragon appeared with Jan riding on top. Yu quickly fell in love with the dragon, as well as its owner. Then her gaze touched Ian. The girls were taken aback by the fact that Jan turned out to be the brave one. The hero hastened to greet those. Jan was immediately asked questions, and he confirmed that he had indeed subdued the dragon. Then, when the girls' words touched on the purpose of their visit to the portal as a passage through the dungeon, the hero urgently called up his inventory. A second later, Yang took out the item Ice Heart, wanting to give it to his friends. Having no plans for the item, Yang placed the heart into Rong's hand as a gift. Under pressure from Yu and quite embarrassed, Rong was forced to accept the gift. A black dragon watched these empty conversations from the side. Suddenly, the hero sensed something was wrong and turned to the snake. Levitating around, Stone felt the dragon. The hero was shocked, because the magician could somehow touch the dragon and not receive resistance. A little later, Jan decided to find out the identity of the old drunkard. At first, the magician sighed and spread his hands. He then said that he did not mean to harm anyone. Then, the magician suddenly disappeared, and the hero was unable to notice his movements. The hero realized that there were quite serious people in front of him, and therefore, he suggested moving on to the essence of their meeting. Stone and Tan introduced themselves to Ian. After hearing this, only more questions began to swarm in the hero's head. Taking the floor, Ian suggested that the characters had come to talk about the Black Dragon. As soon as the hero said this, Stone, not hiding his temptation, wanted to quickly learn about the secrets of taming. Tan placed his hand on Stone's shoulder, urging the mage to behave with restraint. Then Tan spoke up, explaining that the characters had found Yan through Carolyn, and now would simply like to chat. Afterwards, Stone spoke up, taking scrolls with forbidden spells from behind his cloak. The magician offered them to Jan in exchange for the secret of taming. Mentally, Jan licked his lips at such a tempting offer, but something still stopped him. The hero was worried that having learned about the lie, the two strongest players would simply grind Jan into dust. In fact, having decided to play big and not looking at the consequences, Jan demanded the Book of Spells itself for his knowledge. The hero's words somewhat puzzled Stone, because he believed that magic was inaccessible to Ian as the Beast Conqueror. Then, Tan reminded Stone that Yang was a warrior whose subclass wielded magic. Having heard enough, the old drunkard showed the hero a book of forbidden spells. Despite certain limitations on the characteristics that were needed to interact with the book, Ian agreed to take it. In his thoughts, the hero was wildly happy that with the spells he had acquired, he would be able to easily destroy hostile players, even at the stage of the 7th transformation. Then, Ian reminded Stone that the knowledge voiced might not necessarily work, to which the magician waved his hand understandingly. Following this, Stone began to cast soundproofing spells to prevent the characters from being overheard. A few moments later, a dome-shaped magic covered the place of conversation. A few minutes passed, and the hero told his version of how to tame the dragon. The magician was pleased with what he heard, and hurried to try out the knowledge he had received. Tan was also pleased with Jan's story, no longer considering him a charlatan, because the hero described the Black Dragon's dungeon in detail. As a token of gratitude, Tan gave the hero a book of warrior skills. The hero looked at the item he had received, fascinated. Meanwhile, Tan continued, as if envying Jan, who would be given access to the secret spiritual kingdom of dragons. While listening to Tan, Yang called up the system directory, from where he learned about the size of the reward in the secret dragon dungeon, which increased in proportion to the strength of the player's tamed dragon. Meanwhile, Tan knew that Jan's new task concerned the demon abyss. The hero attributed these words to his own lack of confidence, as well as the fact that it is possible to raise the level in other places. Next, Tang brought the topic of conversation to the transformations that Yang had already undergone, as well as the Red Moon invasion. However, Tan, like everyone else, had no idea what the Red Moon was, but he knew that the chances of its appearance increased with each passing year. After which, Tan touched on the topic of the demon abyss, comparing the creatures there to the monsters that come with the Red Moon. According to Tan, by going into the abyss, the players were thus preparing to meet the creatures of the Red Moon. Against this background, and under the pretext of personally visiting the abyss, Tang said goodbye to Yan. Now, left alone with his own thoughts, Jan knew by sight those he would encounter in the abyss, and therefore had to speed up his preparations. With these words, the system rewarded Jan with more levels for completing another 5-star quest. After which, the hero assessed the next skills, considering them useful under certain circumstances. A little later, having returned to the temple, Yan, as before, was completely absorbed in thoughts about becoming much stronger. Bai noticed the hero's strange behavior, to which Yang only smiled and left the conversation. Some time has passed since then, since Ian connected to the Abyss boss again. Using the resurrection skill again, the hero called for Samael to return to life. Having been resurrected, Samael awaited instructions from his master. Completely unexpectedly for him, John again decided to kill Samael. In complete horror, the demon tried to at least get an answer as to why the Lord was treating him like this. The hero hastened to call the character Window, realizing that Samael's power was much greater than that of Beelzebub and all other demons. And in his abilities themselves, Jan found Samael to be very, very gifted. Deciding to play his part, in a voice as alien and cold as death itself, John asked if Samael really doubted the ruler's decision. Having crumbled the floor beneath him, Samael declared that he would not dare to disobey, but he had hopes for more, since the Demon King had previously resurrected the useless Beelzebub. Even despite Samael's rather calm speech, Ian felt how the demon of anger was oozing with this very anger. Continuing to play his role, the hero responded by slamming his fist into the floor. Having demonstrated his strength in return, Jan persuaded Samael to die so that he could be reborn again in the future. Feeling his importance, the demon agreed with his master. Jan thanked Samael for his understanding, and then summoned the sword. Then the hero threw it at the demon of wrath. The socket in the sword opened, drawing in Samael's powers. Gradually, the demon of wrath died, admiring the power of his master. Lulling him to sleep, the hero promised that death would not be eternity for Samael. The scene changed, moving to the 100th level of the demon abyss. Beelzebub, who had been actively eating everything around him, suddenly stopped. The demon felt how death befell Samael, believing that the ruler himself had granted him emptiness. At the same time, in his lair, Jan was not very happy with the results of killing the demon, because the system, as a penalty, deprived the hero of about 40% of experience. However, Jan wasn't overly upset, because after completing the transformation, the experience would be enough to raise the level to an extraordinary level. After this, the hero decided to move on to the most interesting part and look at what Samael left behind. With a magic whip, Jan pulled the objects towards himself at once. The system opened a window where the hero was presented with descriptions of multiple organs, pieces of limbs, and vials of the former demon's blood. The hero, with his last breath, mastered his own emotions when he learned about the numbers of increased strength and health that all these items gave. Finally, with such characteristics, Ian himself felt like a boss. Jan assessed his new power in the ability to tear apart a black dragon with his bare hands and not lose even half of his health. Next, Jan touched the next items he received, one of which clearly needed forging. Next, the hero looked at the flask with Samael's blood, remembering Tan's words about the red moon and the similarity of the demons there with creatures from the abyss. Later, the hero believed that the red moon itself was like an abyss of demons, where bosses and treasures were also hidden. Suddenly, Jan hurried to get rid of these far-reaching thoughts, because first of all, he had to defeat the demon lord. Then, the hero began to examine the other props he had received. The next item was the armor of the King of Wrath. The equipment suited Jan in every way, but he was upset by the complete lack of any weapons. Deciding to wait until next time, Ian disconnected from the boss. Unexpectedly, the system notified the hero that there were special drops left in the dungeon. Opening the menu window, Jan activated the drop. A glow flared up, illuminating the demon lord. Then, out of nowhere, a limited edition hammer hung in the air. The hero exclaimed happily, because finally, in his hands was a weapon to fight the boss of the abyss. Next, Jan began to think about collecting all types of weapons, putting debuffs on them, and thus easily dealing with the Lord of the Abyss. His thoughts were interrupted when one of the stone thrones activated. Lucifer herself came to have an audience with the hero. Immediately after this, Lucifer began to beg her master for punishment, because she, without orders, dared to return to the bottom of the abyss. Jan was about to become angry at the demon's arbitrariness, when his gaze caught on the whip that Lucifer had handed him. By this time, Lucifer had already turned her back, waiting for the blows. Without really wanting to, Jan felt it was necessary to play the role of the ruler. Swinging the whip, braiding it in the air, the hero slapped the demon on the back. Sighing languidly, Lucifer asked her master for more blows. Ian continued to lash the whip at her back. With only 2 blows, Ian marked them as punishments for Lucifer's willfulness and arrogance. With genuine horror, the demon looked at his master. At the end of the execution, the hero was ready to hear a report from Lucifer. Bowing, the demon told Ian about the event when the priestess Vega invaded the abyss. The hero considered such an event and abilities to be simply incredible. In Jan's mind, Vega was already clearly at the divine level. Tearing himself away from his thoughts, the hero hurried to send Lucifer back to his post. As she left, Lucifer also noticed that Samael was resurrected and then killed again, which only meant mercy on the part of the ruler. The demon was overcome with a rare sense of satisfaction as he imagined her being killed by her master with his own hands. Meanwhile, left alone, Jan reasoned about the mysterious priestess whose powers were so great. Following this, the scene moved to the dragon's nest at the Silver Lake. There, standing next to the exhausted dragon, Stone couldn't understand why Jan's method wasn't working. Looking at the list of dragons already visited, the magician admitted with dissatisfaction that he would have to visit a couple more places. But at that very moment, the system announced that the first weapon to fight the Lord of the Abyss had been obtained by someone. Boiling over the violation of established rules, Stone's moral anger transformed into an electrical storm. As Stone exhaled, he knew of only a couple of people who could pull off something like this in a single day. Following this, the scene moved to the Kingdom of Flowers. The local shogun wanted to know Mina's chances of subduing the giant dragon. The head of the Junshiro family responded, informing the shogun that although the black dragon had been subdued, there was also a red one, whose chances of being subdued were very high. The shogun found the news he had heard good, and further wished to discuss the issue of invading the abyss of demons. But his words were also interrupted by news from the system about receiving a rare weapon. Those present in the hall began to blurt out among themselves, considering what had happened either a violation of the rules or a favorable development of the situation. The great shogun quickly spotted a couple of candidates who could pull off something similar. Suddenly standing up, he ordered his men to urgently visit the holy city to obtain an explanation. After this, the scene changed to the holy city. There, Saint Vega was ready to receive guests from different countries who urgently came to the temple. The priestess herself considered such an incident to be a bad omen, since it could potentially lead to a war between the countries. The scene changed again, moving to a round table. Having risen from the table, the shogun made claims to the priestess about the embarrassment that had occurred. The three strongest players silently watched all this without commenting on the accusations. As soon as the shogun finished his speech, Vega took the floor, suggesting that the offender surrender his weapon and admit his guilt. In exchange, the priestess promised forgiveness and no consequences. But no one present said a word. Realizing that it simply wouldn't happen, Vega had no choice but to act. Raising her spear, she summoned an avalanche of light. Calling upon all the power of light, the priestess wanted him to expose the liar. The magic worked, hovering like small lights over the heads of everyone present. Seeing the lack of effect, Carolina spoke up, suggesting that either there were no liars on the forum, or that they had not shown up at all. Vega looked at everyone present with a dissatisfied look. Realizing that many were looking askance at her, the priestess repeated the spell, but this time, marking herself as a test. Svet reacted calmly, and Vega asked if everyone present was now happy. Stone almost laughed at what had happened, but quickly changed his emotions and apologized to the priestess for everyone's disbelief in her. However, in the opinion of the magician, what happened did not answer the question of who dared and, most importantly, managed to kill the companion of the Lord of Demons. Carolina spoke up, admitting the possibility of betrayal on the part of the strongest players from those countries that did not show up at the temple. Vega took the initiative, explaining that her spell detects lies not only in those present, but in all demigod-level players. Once again, everyone could only guess about the identity of the mysterious killer of the demon boss. The silence was broken by Vega, who reminded those present of the order of countries that were supposed to organize expeditions into the demonic abyss. Now the priestess was interested in whether the shogun's country would continue the test after what had happened. The shogun responded with a disappointing refusal, complaining that the other demon bosses were beyond the capabilities of the warriors from the flower country. Having heard the refusal, Vega handed over the right to proceed further to Stone and his Federation of Eagles. The magician was glad to have the chance to take turns. Looking at the drunken magician, the shogun did not object to this decision. Following this, Vega slammed her spear onto the floor. She announced to everyone that from now on, the entrances to the dungeon of the Abyss of Demons would be guarded. Time passed, a new day arrived, and the scene moved to the hero's house. While dressing, Jan planned to change his profession thanks to the experience points he had received. Before the hero had time to leave the house, the system notified him that a world event to obtain weapons to destroy the Demon Lord had been launched. Scratching the back of his head, Ian was glad that at least he was not listed as the owner of one of the 7 types of weapons. Opening the inventory menu and looking at the hammer, the hero hoped that he would never find out about its secret. At the same time, the hero was afraid of people's reactions to his next increase in level and transformation, deciding to postpone this issue for a bit. As a result, having started looking for a solution to keep himself occupied, Jan began wandering around the house. Having met one of the maids, the hero praised her for her hard work. Coming closer, Jan gently informed her that washing by hand was hard and thankless work, when machines had been created for such things. Embarrassed, the maid ran to the side, as quickly as possible informing Jan about the importance of hand washing and the intimacy of this process. Hearing the maid's words, some strange parallels were made in Jan's mind. The hero urgently thought about a secret place to continue his leveling up, for which the Dragon Kingdoms were ideal. At the same time, Jan hoped to meet as few people as possible in such places. At the same time, the hero planned to rid himself of annoying competitors by destroying all the other dragons in one fell swoop. Then, after returning home, Yang contacted Bai, asking her for information regarding the dragon dungeons. Soon, the system displayed an image of a dragon in front of the hero. This was followed by a map, after examining which, Yang asked Bai to reserve the Silver Dragon dungeon. Bai fulfilled the hero's request, but immediately reported something strange, in the form of 50 people being recorded in the same dungeon. After hearing the news from Bai, Yang knew that the people in the recording were nothing more than Enra's tricks. Despite Bai's warning about possible problems from people who signed up for the dungeon before Yan, the hero still insisted on booking. Jan himself did not think that he had anything to fear. Considering his stats and millions of health, the hero was not averse to dealing with people. Then, the hero had a question about what to do with the parts of the defeated demon. Obviously not wanting to just swallow them, Jan imagined various dishes. Shaking his head, the hero abandoned this crazy idea, because Jan had no culinary skills. Eventually, Jan pulled himself together and put aside his unnecessary thoughts. Afterwards, he stuffed the raw organs into his mouth and began to chew them furiously. Almost immediately after this, there was a flash of light that burst out through the windows of the house. The maid who witnessed the flash of light screamed in panic as something began to emerge from the glow. Then, thinking that something bad had happened to her owner, she burst into the house. Immediately, Jan's half-naked body appeared before her eyes. The maid, flushed, hurried away. As soon as the hero was left alone, he called up the character window, looking in complete confusion at his health, which had increased tens of thousands of times. Jan was confident that under the current conditions, he could easily defeat the Black Dragon on his own. After a couple of minutes of getting dressed and simply stretching, the hero felt his body completely renewed. But before moving on, Ian decided to visit Lilith. Approaching the door of the room where the elf lived, the hero knocked. No one answered, and Jan went inside without asking. As he began to look around the room, Jan's eyes suddenly caught sight of someone's tender hips. Lilith also noticed the hero and froze in place, perplexed. After a short pause, the elf let out a cry of embarrassment. Jan himself hastened to cover his face, just to avoid getting slapped. The tension among the characters eased when the hero heard the bed squeal. Removing his hands, Ian saw Lilith, who was looking at him, breathing heavily. Flushing, Jan was unable to utter a word. Then, slowly turning around, in a metallic voice, Ian apologized to the elf for his behavior. After which, Lilith silently left the room. Not expecting such a development of events, the elf giggled, finding the hero very cute. In Lilith's mind, Ian was the complete opposite of the people the girl encountered in the palace. Following this, the scene changed to the city of Nine Rivers. Now, Enro was furious when she found out that someone dared to cut in front of her in line. A familiar feeling came over Enro when she learned that the person standing in front of the line was a VIP of the temple. The first thing Enra thought of course, was Yana. The confidant distracted Enra by offering to meet with the VIP and agree on everything. But the girl didn't want to hear anything like that, and simply pushed the poor guy away. Assuming that the mysterious person was indeed Yang, Enra had no choice but to turn to his teacher for help. After dialing his number through the system, Enra instantly turned into a sweet, docile girl. In an angelic voice, Enra complained to the teacher about the VIP and asked for assistance. The teacher promised to do something, after which the girl began to walk from side to side. The pace of her movements increased until at some point, Enra began running from corner to corner. At some point, a notification came from the teacher with disappointing news. Enra had already entered into a dialogue with the teacher, learning that the VIP had turned out to be extremely popular. Only now did the girl learn what kind of hero, what kind of man stood like a mountain, the god of war, Tang himself. At that very moment, Thimble asked about further orders, but Enra, without answering, suddenly jumped up from her seat. After which, looking back, she rudely asked Thimble to follow her. Next, the scene moved to the secret kingdom of the Silver Dragon. There, fighting his way through hordes of monsters, Ian found it surprising that he didn't meet any other players at the entrance, considering this a sign of tact. After a short period of time, the hero reached the boss himself, who didn't even have a name. The dragon noticed Jan, and clouds of steam immediately appeared from his mouth. The next second, the dragon was already spewing its fire at January, but the blue flame only enveloped the hero's body. The ground beneath Ian's feet foamed and then exploded, throwing him into the air. While in the air and drawing his weapon, the hero called on the black dragon not to interfere with the battle. Landing on his feet, Jan was just waiting to try his new powers on a worthy opponent. Then, with just one swing of his weapon, a rain of granite rained down on the dragon. Jan began to get closer to the dragon, trying his best to avoid the boss's attacks. After which, a wormhole of impressive size opened up in front of the hero. Something flashed in the wormhole, and from there, thunderbolts of lightning burst out towards the hero. Despite all the boss's efforts, Jan lost no more than 1,000 health. Next, from long-range attacks, the dragon moved on to close combat. The boss's paw rushed towards Ian, covering the hero and closing the ground at the point of impact. But then the dragon sensed something was wrong. With astonishing ease, with one hand, Yang lifted the dragon's paw. Following this, Jan made the jump. Raising his weapon, the hero flew straight into the dragon's mouth. However, Jan did not reach the target, falling somewhere under the dragon, after which he appeared in the air again. This time the hero's slashing blow caught the boss. The Devourer effect activated in Yan's sword, thus absorbing about 10% of the boss's stats. The hero immediately looked at his weapon, whose characteristics had increased, but leaving plenty of room for future development. After which, Jan summoned his black dragon to the meal. Having arrived, Athos began to greedily devour his fellow. At the same time, having called the system, Yan learned that he had reached the maximum level of development, and further, the experience was already wasted. However, in addition to Yan, the characteristics of the black dragon itself also increased after eating the meat. But then an interesting thought came to Yan. The hero suddenly remembered the demons of the abyss, who could sacrifice their health and characteristics to the master. Ian was fired up with the crazy idea of bringing demons into the real world and taking away their characteristics from there. The hero laughed slyly as the cunning plan took shape in his head. Almost immediately, Jan came to his senses, because no matter how much he fantasized, the demon kings could not leave the abyss. Deciding to leave this issue for later, Yang chose to head to the next secret dragon kingdom. But as soon as the hero wanted to continue his journey, the system notified him that one of the dragon kingdoms had been conquered by a player named Min. At the same time, in the secret dragon kingdom, Min was petting a tame dragon. The entire retinue of Ming rejoiced at the success of their mistress. Old man Lao, standing next to the retinue, was pleasantly surprised by Ming's successes and by the events of the last few days. Then, without skimping on words, the old man congratulated Min as well. At that time, Min herself was sad that she had not been able to talk to her heart's content with Yan, considering him to be special in his own way. On the other hand, the girl hoped that one day she would cross paths with the hero, because he was a member of the association. After some time, Enro watched from the side as Min flew away on the dragon. The girl was shaken by the indignation of her incessant failures. At the same time, in the association chat, all the Beastmasters congratulated Min on his success. At that very second, Enra's legs gave way. At the same time, Yang was not particularly happy either, as Min was now considered a competitor. Following this, the hero learned about the creation of a coalition whose goal was to fight the abyss of demons. The hero grinned slyly, mentally apologizing to Beelzebub, who was now also about to become the ruler's victim. Some time has passed and the scene has moved to the abyss where Beelzebub was bored. On the other hand, Beelzebub was glad that he did not meet the crazy Carolina again. Suddenly, the demon heard the call of his master, believing that now he too would suffer the same fate as Samael. Obeying, Beelzebub would rather die at the hands of the ruler than the players. In a split second, the demon moved to the throne of the ruler. As Beelzebub expected, the Lord called him to death at his own hands. Crouching to the ground, the demon was ready to meet this outcome. Jan rejoiced at Beelzebub's loyalty and extended his hand to him. The suffocating magic engulfed Beelzebub, and the demon screamed. The next moment, the demon's carcass burst, transforming into many different objects. The remains of it began to resemble a dried-up tree. Looking over the fallen items, Jan was forced to admit that he had underestimated Beelzebub. Right there, the system provided the hero with a drop, which Jan quickly opened. The system activated the chest, the contents of which stunned the hero. Another limited weapon, necessary in the battle with the Demon Lord, appeared before the hero's eyes. Yan liked the stats of the acquired weapon. The only thing that disappointed the hero was the restrictions on use depending on the character's divinity level. In this case, the hero began to think about how to develop further, without attracting unnecessary attention to himself. Following this, the scene moved to the Holy City. There, Saint Vega discussed the favorable development of events, since the incident with the disappearance of weapons did not lead to a conflict between the countries. From now on, in order to prevent the repetition of such unpleasant events, the entrances to the Abyss of Demons were guarded by guards who reported personally to Vega. The priestess then turned to her deity. A notification from the system appeared, informing Vega that the Red Moon's damage rate was 14%. Vega also talked about the players who managed to pass the 5th transformation, whose number was 0. The priestess believed that if the situation continued in this way, in the future cycle of the world, the main driving force in it would still be demons. Vega frivolously hoped for the emergence of a hero who could fix everything. And at that very moment in time, the system notified her that another demon king had been defeated. Immediately, Vega turned to the guards at all the entrances to the Abyss of Demons, but they had nothing to report. Immediately after this, another notification from the system appeared, stating that another weapon for defeating the Demon Lord had been taken away. In an instant, the priestess remembered the mysterious figure from the vision, whom Vega considered to be guilty of what was happening. Conversations immediately followed between prominent players, who began to accuse each other of stealing unique weapons. Vega was even forced to intervene in their conversation, and she rejected any accusations against the temple. Vega saw no other option, and therefore suggested making a joint expedition into the abyss. At the same time, still in the role of boss, the hero reasoned that the whole world had learned about what had happened, which meant that the invasion of the abyss could happen very soon. Given the past achievements of expeditions that the system recorded, Jan assumed that players could bypass the previous stages and immediately penetrate the 500th level out of the 700 possible. Subsequently, a cunning plan was born in Jan's head. The hero wanted to see how the players would pass through the level, which would be guarded by a creature that contained several qualities of the Demon Kings at once. Some time had passed since then, and the united expedition was already approaching the entrance to the dungeon. As he had once been in his distant youth, Stone was fascinated by the sights of the abyss of demons. Next, the magician turned to the other players, but they could not wait for the imminent start of the battle. The strongest players were full of confidence that the third weapon would definitely be theirs. In her usual cheerful manner, Carolina even decided to find out who of those present wanted to lead the squad. Of all the players, a Temple Knight volunteered to personally defeat at least one Demon King. The question was closed, after which Tan gave the command. All the players rushed into the dungeon in a single impulse, moving at a fast pace. The expedition was a few steps away from reaching the first 100th level of the dungeon. By mostly avoiding the monsters, players hoped to skip the next level, since, in their opinion, there was no boss there. But as soon as they had advanced further, a dark, demonic figure descended from the heavens. Lucifer opened her eyes and turned her gaze towards the intruders. The players immediately stopped, because for some unknown reason, it was not the demon of gluttony that was in front of them. Taking a seductive stance, Lucifer called on the people in a gentle voice to prepare for a terrible death. Of all the players, the knight came forward, believing that the boss of gluttony had simply changed his appearance. There was a whistle, and something flashed past the knight in a line. The knight sighed, after which he literally began to fall apart. The player died, and Lucifer mockingly extinguished her hot index finger. Carolina encountered Lucifer for the first time. In addition to the boss's strength, she was shocked by the demon's power, which simply knocked weaker players unconscious. Deciding to find out at least something about the enemy, Stone stepped forward and used the appropriate magic. A notification from the system appeared, reading which the magician with difficulty said that the boss was at the divine level. At the same time, while the battle was going on in the abyss, Yang also became familiar with Lucifer's characteristics, which were only slightly lower than those of the ruler himself. Ian screamed loudly when it turned out that, based on abilities, no one could damage Lucifer while being below the boss's level. After that, Jan hoped that Tan and Stone would definitely be present in the group of invaders in order to deal with them. As a result, the hero commanded Lucifer to take Beelzebub's place and guard the 100th level of the dungeon. The demon happily agreed to carry out her master's order. At the same time, the players also began to act. Activating their abilities, they prepared for an all-out attack on Lucifer. Tan's war cry was heard. Manipulating powerful magic, sparks poured out of Stone's eyes. Summoned spirits, magic, destructive blows. All of this was simultaneously directed towards Lucifer. The combined force of the attack was so great that the nearest section of the dungeon was engulfed in an explosion of flames. As soon as the heat dissipated, the players thought they had managed to defeat the mini-boss. But the next moment they were thrown back by a gust of air. Without losing a drop of health, Lucifer appeared before the players in all her glory again. The players who got to their feet considered Lucifer a true monster, because the boss was not hurt at all after all the efforts of the heroes. Tan's commanding voice rang out, calling on everyone to activate their defensive abilities. But Stone suggested that he abandon this attempt. Now, Lucifer carried out the attack, saying out loud that he would present his master with a tasty treat. With a slight wave of his hand, a wave of magic flew towards the players. The players' cries rang out and a storm of devastation engulfed the battlefield. Once the dust settled, it turned out that only Stone, Tan, and Carolina remained alive. Tan believed that their luck in survival was only possible because the Trinity had once defeated Beelzebub. But this information did not bring anything useful to Stone, which is why the magician decided to have a last drink. Determined to fulfill her oath to the end, Lucifer swung her sword. Immediately, the remaining 3 players were defeated and teleported outside the dungeon. Once outside, Stone asked if everyone had really returned. Following this, angry cries were heard from the other players, who did not expect such fierce resistance and quick failure. Tan found their behavior unsurprising. Nightbow shared his impression that as soon as Lucifer began to swing her sword, the character immediately understood everything about the group's impending defeat. Carolina responded, not satisfied with the knight's words that the boss was impassable, which meant that the demon lord was also invincible. Tan considered the current situation to be a vicious circle that would not allow players to reach the highest divine level of development. Hanging his head, Stone responded, considering Lucifer the second invincible opponent in his life after Saint Vega. With a sad voice, the magician described the defeat of their group as the greatest tragedy in the world. With the help of magic, Ian grinned and eavesdropped on the players' dismal conversations. Having surpassed all others, the hero wanted to become the sole deity. Now, thanks to Lucifer's victory, Jan could secretly watch the souls of the people defeated in the dungeon, eavesdrop, and even subjugate them. Unexpectedly, amidst the abyss of emotions, The hero noticed how one person was radiating joy at the group's defeat. Jan's interest fell on a player named Atan, who was clearly from some distant country. The hero knew only scattered and distant information about the country of Atana, where all power, wealth, and even abilities were in the hands of the nobility. Deciding to study Athan and his unusual behavior in more detail, Ian interacted with the player's soul. Immediately, Athan's thoughts echoed in Jan's head, who was happy about the defeat of the world's strongest players. Atan considered this combination of circumstances a chance for his country to become a hegemon. In the future, he considered the current state of affairs to be the most advantageous in order to take possession of the Devourer's legacy. Jan himself was interested in Athan's words about the mysterious Devourer. Feeling something familiar in this name, the hero called up his inventory, where he quickly found a dragon sword with a similar subtext. As it turned out, the sword that Jan got from Athos once belonged to the dragon's ancestor. After studying the description of the sword and finding some information in the system, it became clear to the hero that the sword's true power, its legacy, was hidden in the secret spiritual realm of dragons. Meanwhile, Athan still did not calm down. He bragged to himself that soon his brother would get into the secret kingdom of dragons and take the Devourer from there. Having obtained this kind of power, Athan called it the easiest victory over any boss, even the divine level. Athan also planned to get rid of other possible competitors by killing them in dungeons from where the player could no longer be reborn. Jan listened attentively to these vile plans, after which Athan giggled every time. The hero interrupted the reading of thoughts, now calling Athan a poor thing, because his thoughts were now someone else's property. After which, Jan thought about a convenient way to deal with Athan. But then the hero came to his senses, because he left Lucifer without work. Having called upon magical foresight, Jan found Lucifer in the form of eternal bow to his master. In fact, Lucifer could barely contain her lustful urges because of the morals of her master, who did not react in any way. Suddenly Jan's voice was heard, calling the demon to him. Having immediately appeared before the ruler to bow, Lucifer hoped that the hero would be pleased with her. Jan was really pleased with that, and even wanted to somehow thank the demon. From what he heard, Lucifer's breathing quickened. The demon called the praise from the ruler the best reward. Raising his finger, Ian reminded Lucifer in a menacing voice that she had no right to refuse her master. The hero directed the magic straight at Lucifer, and she sighed hotly. Magic saturated the demon's body, causing her to literally go crazy, experiencing incredible sensations. Afterwards, Ian sent Lucifer away until the next summoning. The hero then sighed. He found role-playing with such a powerful demon as Lucifer quite tiring. Suddenly, at that very second, a pillar of light pierced the space in front of the demon lord's throne. The concentrated light began to dissipate, and in its glow, a figure began to appear. Finally, Saint Vega appeared before January. The story went back a bit when Vega learned that the united squad of heroes had suffered defeat in the abyss of demons. Realizing that the situation was out of control, Vega hurried to the statue. Vega prayed and asked for a blessing. Next, kneeling, the priestess asked for the gift of the power of the Eye of Insight. The deity responded to Vega by giving her something much greater, the Eye of Truth itself. Having received the opportunity to see absolutely everything in the world, Vega hurried to visit the Demon Lord. Landing in front of the Demon Lord, Vega thrust her spear towards him. Ian boredly propped his face up with his fist, informing Vega that he knew a lot about her. Rising from his throne, Yang guessed that the priestess's visit was due to the news of the player's defeat. But the hero did not know how he should greet Vega herself. The priestess was silent. But mentally, she found it hard to come to terms with the fact that the Demon Lord had woken up so soon after her first visit earlier. However, having seen the true form of the ruler, Vega still could not see who was behind the great evil. The best outcome the priestess saw was a retreat and a revision of strategy with the outstanding players. However, Jan himself was not ready to let the priestess go easily. Vega didn't even notice how magic stretched out behind her like spread fingers. The next moment, the fingers grasped Vega's body, bringing it closer to himself. The hero was curious about what items he would be able to obtain after killing the priestess. Suddenly transforming into a beam of light, Vega slipped out of Ian's grasp. The hero grinned. Now he understood why Saint Vega was truly considered the most invulnerable and invincible. But then, Jan noticed a portal, where Vega had apparently fled. Later, with glimpses of light, Vega returned to the human world. Trying to catch her breath, the priestess kept saying that she had experienced true horror. Seeing Vega, another priestess of the temple, Raya, rushed to her aid. Vega did not share what she saw with Raya and simply attributed her condition to exhaustion. Following the portal, Ian observed this whole situation. Thus, the hero became convinced of the existence of the legendary Holy City. As he continued to observe, Ian reflected on the fact that in terms of her power, Vega was probably absolutely identical to Lucifer. The hero found it sad that Vega did not participate in the squad of players, because then, having died, he could manipulate the soul of the priestess at his own whim. Afterwards, Jan turned his attention to the statue in the temple, believing that it was a central hub of communication with similar statues around the world. Next, the hero decided to use his dark powers and subjugate the statue. A couple of minutes of persistent attempts passed, but Jan still did not achieve success. Then, Jan decided to change tactics and take control of one of the people. The next second, a stream of water shot out of the dark eye. The girl gasped and her body froze. With the last of her strength, she tried to resist the terrible force. A minute later, having transformed, she was already shuddering and dreaming of meeting the demon lord. To his surprise, Ian discovered that he had managed to turn the priestess into a succubus, and even raise her level. Suddenly, the demonic eye froze. The protagonist was interested in whether the statue would react to such sacrilege. The next moment, an impulse descended from the temple spire. At first, it spread throughout the holy city. Then he went beyond it. Subsequently, temples around the world responded to the impulse. Then came a notification from the system that a demon faction had been formed, capable of enslaving and annexing players. Following this, the system reported the formation of an entire demonic city in the abyss, with a corresponding statue. The game version was updated, and many people were shocked by the appearance of a whole new faction. Discussing the news among themselves, many came to the conclusion that no one in their right mind would join the demonic faction. Others believed that the emergence of such a faction would help those players who were already infected with demonic power, and thus would not lose their minds. And if the faction of demons did not cause a stir at first, then the news of the passage to the kingdom of elves really captured the minds of the players. Looking at all this from the outside, Bell reasoned that the most important prerogative is the preservation of public order. Wei, however, was more skeptical, fearing that the strongest players might defect to the demon faction. In response, Bell called this outcome the worst-case scenario. Immediately after this, the scene returned to the Holy City. Still in the form of the Evil Eye, Ian never expected that his experiment would change the world of the game. Immediately, Jan remembered that he had set up an impassable barrier for the players in the form of Lucifer. Continuing his reasoning, Yang believed that in this regard, many might wish to join the demon faction. Now, through the soul mark, the hero could sense how at least 7 of the strongest players were struggling with internal contradictions. Jan saw another benefit for himself, because by leveling up at the demonic statue, no one would find out about the hero's true motives. At that very moment, a notification came from the system, as a result of which Yan learned that now, having killed the demon lord with the mini-boss weapons, the player himself will officially take the place of the lord. Meanwhile, the hero learned that after defeating the demon lord, the system would select an even stronger boss for the player, but whose strength Yan could not even imagine. At the same time, Vega discovered a demon in the temple. In response, Raya grinned and was already about to run away. However, the priestess, using light magic, was not going to allow this to happen. A stream of radiation engulfed the succubus. As soon as the magic ceased to work, the guards were unable to find the remains of the succubus. Vega stopped searching for the guards, as she knew that the demons had left the temple. Mentally, the priestess was angry with herself for allowing evil through her carelessness to penetrate the Holy of Holies. Returning to the abyss, Jan did not consider his behavior as an escape, but only a small retreat. Then he turned away from the succubus's persistent advances and looked up. Before him, behind the high fortress walls, lay a demonic city. Voices could already be heard in the city itself. These were the first players who had turned into demons due to magical infection. Having gotten rid of the harassment with a menacing voice, Yang ordered the succubus to restore order. Obeying, Raya stood in front of the statue. Next, Ian thought about controlling the demon army, which would only grow, meaning they would need their own high priest like Vega. In a flash, the hero returned to the throne room. Deciding to face the new king of original sin, Yang summoned Envy. Responding to the call of the ruler, the demon Livia appeared. Being the embodiment of self-satisfaction, Livia basked in fantasies that she had now moved Lucifer's position and become closer to the ruler. Afterwards, without any preamble, Jan appointed Livia as the great priestess of the demons. A minute later, the hero watched through the system how quickly his demons began construction, and that later, all of this would go to Jan. The construction was personally supervised by Livia, who gave her subordinates no respite. The succubus, who easily falls in love with everything, began to praise Livia in every way for her organizational skills. Envy was completely satisfied not only with the acquired power, but also with the very close distance between her and the ruler. Just when Livia thought things were going well for her, a notification came from the system, informing her of the need to repel the Red Moon invasion. The notification puzzled Livia, because it was the first time she had encountered something like this. In pursuit, she grabbed a passing demon, trying to find out something about the system notification from him. After reading the dialogue box, the demon told Envy his knowledge about the Red Moon and why it hunts some of the players. Having acquired some information, Livia nevertheless decided to get specifics from the ruler himself. Following this, she began to mentally ask for an audience, but the ruler did not answer her. At this point, Envy had no choice but to wait for the next awakening of his master. Next, the action moved again to the Holy City. By announcing an extraordinary forum, Vega called together the strongest of the players. First of all, the priestess asked everyone for forgiveness for such urgency. Stone's voice was heard. He was not in the best mood, and therefore asked to get down to business. Vega began her speech with the New World event, and the hope that the gathered players would not dare to join the demons. However, some of the players had the courage to talk about the agony of choice. In particular, this was related to Lucifer, who was invulnerable. Bo agreed with the knight's opinion, believing that the defeat had hurt many morally. Carolina did not agree with Bo's pessimistic opinion, believing in humanity and goodness. After them, it was as if Vega took over, considering that unexpected allies for people could appear in the kingdom of the elves, where the path was now open. She was interrupted by Tan, who again reminded the priestess of Lucifer, whose level was insurmountable for other players. Tan hoped that if the mysterious player who had already collected 2 types of demon boss weapons would side with the coalition, together they would defeat Lucifer. All those present agreed with this opinion. Later, the players' conversation turned to the kingdom of the elves, but Vega hastened to report that she had already prepared everything for the meeting. After Vega said this, an image of an elf was projected near the round table. The court magician Alan greeted the people. Some of the players cried out when they saw how high the elf's level of development was. Vega, who greeted Alan, began to speak. Alan licked his lips as he looked at the human high priestess, making it clear that the rumors about Vega were true. After hearing this address to him, all of Vega's former cheerful mood was blown away like the wind. Seeing such an appeal to the high priestess, the hot-tempered stone began to fill with the magic of destruction. Alan pretended not to notice the drunkard's efforts, after which he began to inform about the details of the union. Opening the parchment, Alan read out a series of demands, which consisted of prohibitions and sacrifices from the people to the elves. Unanimously, the players did not take such demands very enthusiastically. Their sentiments were quickly picked up by the public on the forum, who began to loudly voice their discontent. Even Athan himself was horrified, whose plan to penetrate the secret kingdom of dragons could be destroyed in an instant. Suddenly, a spear strike thundered, and Vega called everyone to order. Vega turned to the elf, making it clear that the humans could agree to pay tribute and even help in finding Lilith, but not to restrict themselves from entering the Dungeon of Dragons. Surprisingly, Alan did not argue, but asked for a list of those countries that could fall into the secret kingdom of dragons. After studying the list, Alan agreed to cancel the item with the dungeon in exchange, asking to bring the tamer of the Black Dragon to the Elven Kingdom. His self-confident manner of speaking was interrupted by Tan's fist hitting the table. Getting up from the table, Tan decided that the impudent elf had made demands not to just one person, but to the entire country. In response, the elf merely threw up his hands, suggesting that the people themselves choose whether they agree with the demands or not. At the same time, through the communication system, Tang heard the voice of the shogun, who saw nothing wrong with making a small sacrifice to gain a powerful ally. Athan also jumped up from his seat and spoke out in support of the alliance with the elves. If the outcome were different, Athan threatened Tan that some of the allies would go over to the demon's side. The other players did not support Athan's speeches, finding them disgusting. Then, surprising everyone, Tan approached the shogun, who was present at the forum. Without any speeches, the commander sent him flying with a punch. Trying to figure out the motives behind Tan's behavior, Atan urgently ran up to him. However, with her next move, Tan slammed him into the ground. As it turned out, Tan couldn't allow anyone to bully his opinions and his country. Then, turning to Vega, Tan swore that he agreed to all the elves' conditions, but he would under no circumstances give up John. Subsequently, Tan quickly left the forum. At the same time, signs of life began to appear from Shogun and Atan. The latter, in revenge against Tanu, swore that he would deliver the Black Dragon Tamer to the elves. All this was observed by Yan, who suddenly stood up from his seat with the help of demonic powers. By tearing off the towels, the hero believed that the one who challenges the authority of the monarch should be punished. The astonished maids looked at Jan, who suddenly froze in place. Jan came to his senses, after which he wished to continue the massage. As soon as the hero returned to the chair, the maids began to work on Jan's body. However, Jan was haunted by the question of why the whole world had turned against him, and especially the kingdom of the elves. The hero left this question for a later date for Lilith. A little later, having visited the princess, the hero learned that the death of the court magician at the hands of a black dragon could not have been the cause of hatred on the part of the elves. Lilith said that the elves were only nice and polite in appearance, but in reality they were actively fighting for power. After these explanations, it began to dawn on Jan that the elves were more negatively disposed towards the Black Dragon himself, who had once brought horror to their kingdom. Having carried out a long chain of logic, Jan now understood that the elves were afraid of the one who would penetrate the secret kingdom of dragons and release the devourer from there. However, Jan himself did not agree to share such an ancient heritage with anyone. Further, the hero mentioned that the elves were also looking for Lilith, but the girl flatly refused to return. Referring to Jan's previous words, Lilith hoped that he would not dare to kick her out. Taking pity, Jan promised the elf that he would not betray her. The hero found the only problem in the fact that many had already seen Lilith, which meant that over time, they would definitely find her. Suddenly, according to the system, the hero received a notification from Tan. Ready to put on a new show, Ian went out to meet Tan. After a pause, Tang began his speech by saying that Yan might be banned from entering the Forbidden Dragon realm. Jan was genuinely shocked, because he had fulfilled all the necessary conditions. Meanwhile, Tan informed Yan that he absolutely refused to hand over the hero to the elves. Putting his hand on the shoulder of the upset Yan, Tang promised him that he would be compensated for the impossibility of entering the secret realm. On this note, their conversation ended. The hero's previous emotions suddenly disappeared, because in fact, Yan was preparing some kind of surprise for the opening of the gates of the secret dungeon. Following this, the scene moved to the Kingdom of Flowers. Sitting on top of the tame dragon, Min was upset that Yang would not be able to take part in the joint expedition. While the girl was dreaming about another act of communication with Ian, her dragon, on the contrary, was glad that he would not meet such a wild nature. Next, events moved to the state of Shiva. There, speaking before Vishnu, Athan insisted on radical action against opponents within the secret kingdom of dragons. Another character agreed with Athan's words and promised to kill his opponents. After all these events, a little time passed and a new day arrived. Many watched in delight as the elven dragon knights appeared in the sky. While on one of the dragons, the elven prince Eric watched the people from above. Another elf approached Eric, asking his brother to be restrained and not allow their plan to become apparent prematurely. The elves were talking about a secret conspiracy to conquer the human world, as well as women with whom the offspring of the royal family could have fun to their heart's content. The elf's lustful gaze was already fixed on two seductive-looking women. His teeth chattered in anticipation of the long-awaited satisfaction. At the same time, the girls standing below were discussing among themselves that they felt some kind of danger coming from the elves in the sky. But then the shogun appeared, urging Min to focus on the task at hand. The same thing happened with Vida, who was supported with kind words by Karolina. All these events were secretly observed by people from the country of Shiva. A few seconds later, Athan's nephew came into action. Meanwhile, one of the elves began to clumsily seduce Min. Everyone was busy preparing and executing secret plans while the entrance to the dungeon was opening. Already sensing victory, Athan giggled. Suddenly, lightning struck him. Having miraculously survived, Athan immediately realized that a forbidden spell of mass destruction had been used. Looking up, Athan noticed a familiar shape in the sky. There, among the clouds, Stone worked his magic. Having cast his spell, the old drunkard waved his staff. Another blow of forbidden magic was dealt at the entrance to the secret kingdom of dragons. From the side, Jan watched this performance, riding a dragon. As it turned out, the hero simply controlled Stone, forcing him to act against his will. After which, Jan turned to the black dragon itself. Remembering the lizard's natural instincts, the hero wished that Athos would devour everything. One blow of forbidden magic after another was dealt to the place where the entrance to the Forbidden Kingdom opened. Having survived the magical fire, the shogun tried to gather people in order to stop the crazy magician. Amidst the dust and heat of magic, the shogun found Atan. But instead of providing assistance, he launched a rapid attack. During their fight, Yang activated the forced suggestion skill. As a result, a small scuffle between the characters turned into a long and heated battle. While fighting, the shogun and Atan practically destroyed the space around them. Jan grinned contentedly, having singled out a gap when everyone would be busy with each other. Now it was up to the hero to act. Meanwhile, the control over Stone suddenly ended. Waking up from the trance, the magician suddenly found himself in a very strange place. Looking down, Stone said that things were really bad for him now. Also, gradually, the internecine battles of other characters died down. Having abruptly ended the fight, Shogun and Atan came to the same conclusion that someone had taken control of their bodies. Athan had no idea who would be capable of doing something like this. Their thoughts were stopped by Stone's displeased voice. The magician noticed that, taking advantage of the confusion, a rider on a black dragon flew into the gate. When someone present suggested that Tan might be to blame, Stone rejected such an idea, citing the fact that the military leader was a man of honor, and also an ordinary warrior. Gradually, the character's thoughts touched on Jan's figure. However, the guess was shattered by the low level of the hero. Stone also couldn't explain the hell that was happening everywhere as soon as the demon abyss became of interest to players again. Having suggested leaving the matter aside for the time being, Stone considered it more important to concentrate on the problem of the elves, who would certainly try to avenge the death of their knights. The other characters agreed with the magician's words, deciding to contact the royal court. After all this, the scene moved to the secret kingdom of dragons. There, flying on a dragon, Min was afraid of meeting mythical creatures, which, according to rumors, were much larger than other dragons seen before. This feeling was also transmitted to Athan's nephew, who associated the emotion with the general aura of fear due to the devourer. Seeing that Min was clearly afraid of something, Alan even suggested that the girl move to her own long dragon. Another elf was delighted by Alan's attempts to take advantage of an innocent girl right on the dragon's back. Along with this, the elf examined the fang of an ancient dragon, an artifact that would allow the dragons to suppress their fear of the devourer, and which humans did not have. Right there, the stone tablet of Athan's nephew appeared, with the help of which he planned to take control of the dragons of other players. Then, a piercing roar was heard, and many thought that they were approaching the boss. Looking up, it turned out that Yana's black dragon was hovering over the group of people and elves. Already armed, Jan counted the number of upcoming opponents. Athan's nephew glanced at Ian along with everyone else, immediately feeling his dragon tremble as the hero's black dragon appeared next to him. The elves were loudly indignant that the insignificant human race had broken its own word. Afterwards, Eric commanded his dragon knights to knock Jan off the black dragon. On the prince's orders, the dragon knights rushed to throw Jan down. But then a whirlpool formed, into which the knights themselves found themselves. With just one swing of his weapon, the hero killed the entire elven guard. The elven princes were horrified by the power that the most ordinary man possessed. In order to deal with the guy, Eric decided to use some hidden trump card. However, the elf did not have time to do anything, as he was captured by one of the demonic weapons. Seeing that Eric had been defeated, Alan's only option was to escape. However, while trying to escape, he was knocked down. After flying some distance down, the elf prince fell onto the rocky ground. A little later, Jan got to him. The elf tried to somehow reason with the hero, but in response only received a boot to the face. The hero made it clear to the elf that for any insult, Jan would take revenge 100-fold. The elf panicked and began to demand that the hero let him go. Jan's next actions were interrupted by the call of the Dragon Knights, who, having been resurrected, were returning to battle again. Next, from their side, the dragon's flame was released towards the hero. The impact site was covered by a fireball, and the elves thought that they had burned January. Watching the progress of this whole situation from the side, Min noted that the color of the eyes of the elven dragons had changed. She believed that the elves had used some kind of spell to completely control the dragons. Alan's satisfied laughter was heard behind the girls. But then something began to bother the prince as he looked at the center of the fiery strike. Suddenly, movements of an unclear nature appeared from there. A stream of flame burst into the sky in response. It turned out that the black dragon Athos came to the hero's aid. Jan himself, using cunning, dragged the elf away somewhere. The dragons of the players, watching the battle, quietly whispered among themselves that they felt terrible fear of Athos. Some of them even hid behind the mountain ranges, just to avoid Athos's field of vision. A similar feeling befell Atan's nephew, who understood that he could not fight Jan openly. Meanwhile, the dead elves were reborn again. Losing a ton of levels with each death, the elf prince came to the disappointing conclusion that at this rate he would not be able to defeat the hero. Having no other choice, the elf prepared to use the scroll of return. Instantly, something cut the scroll in the prince's hands. It became clear that this move was made by Yan, who threw the return blade. At the same time, a cocoon fell next to Alan, inside which Eric was frantically trying to break out. Unexpectedly, the elf prince remembered diplomacy and tried to barter his freedom. In response, there was a crunching and squelching sound of a crushed cocoon, which the black dragon had deliberately stepped on. Finding himself close to the elf prince, the hero reminded him of how the vile pointy-eared ones planned to kill Jan. Falling to his knees, the elf prince tried to apologize, to appease Jan, reducing everything to a banal misunderstanding. Later, after descending from the dragon, Jan mentioned Akara, and also that the hero does not trust the words of the elves. The hero's face hardened, and he said that he would kill the elves until they lost the very ability to come back to life. After these words, the elf prince screamed in panic, covering himself with his hands. Deliberately, one elf after another, Jan began to chop with his sword. In the carnage caused by the hero, Jan didn't give a damn about any words the elf said about world bosses and events that would now become impassable for humanity. With a decisive swing, Jan finally took the lives of a large group of elves at once. The last survivor was Eric, who cursed Jan and the entire human race. Making a small concession, the hero allowed the elf to free himself and give his last fair fight. Barely standing on his feet, the elf summoned the enchanted weapon. He then jumped up and activated his Storm Strike ability. Trusting in his victory, the elf burst into mad laughter. He continued to activate one skill after another until their synergy gave birth to the destructive storm itself. The elf smiled, hoping that such a destructive phenomenon would definitely save Jan from life. To his confusion, having lost only 10% of his health, the hero appeared, shaking himself off. The elf gnashed his teeth in indignation. He even thought that Jan was the boss in human form. Congratulating him on his guess, with his sword at the ready, Jan hurried to the elf prince. More slashing blows were carried out, and a new batch of elves was forever deprived of the opportunity to be reborn. Seeing how easily Jan dealt with the elves, Athan's nephew was in a state of indelible shock. In the end, the hero managed to find him very quickly. Afterwards, Jan gave the command to Athos. The dragon easily tore the failed killer to pieces, thus preventing him from being reborn in the future. When it was all over, Min and Vita hurried to Jan. They did not condemn the hero for what happened to the elves, but they could not understand the motives for killing another player. Wiping off the alien blood, the hero briefly told the girls about the plans of the country of Shiva, and that what happened was an act of self-defense. Then, passing by the girls, Jan advised them not to get underfoot. Otherwise, the hero would not guarantee their safety. A few seconds later, the hero mounted Athos and soared into the sky on the dragon. During the flight, Jan reflected on his victories, but they were so easy that they did not really please the hero. Afterwards, Yang looked at his blade, whose stats had increased, but had not reached the values Yang had expected. A notification from the system appeared, giving Yan the task of destroying a dragon of the Scorching Sun level. Thus, Jan was surprised to learn that he had reached the first stage of absorption, and now, after the victory, he could move on further. Further, the hero flew towards the light, believing that this is where the devourer should be. The closer the dragon got to the light source, the thicker the fog became in front of Yang. Relying on the dragon's heart to show him the way, the hero commanded Athos to fly on. At some point, Jan broke out of the foggy barrier. Before the hero appeared meadows where the remains of a titanic creature, the very same devourer, lay. Looking at the remains, Ian admired not only the size of the devourer, but even the feats of that nameless hero who once defeated the dragon. Sensing that Athos was agitated, Jan offered the dragon to jointly witness the continuation of the legend. Unexpectedly, something bothered Jan. The hero never expected that his dragon would suddenly start falling. Miraculously landing on his paws, Jan immediately discovered that the fog was beginning to thicken around Athos. Looking up, the devourer's wing stretched out before the hero. Jan thought that he should climb up the remains, thus performing some ancient ritual. As soon as Jan got down from Athos and took a dozen steps, eyes began to glow in the fog. Dozens of dragons rushed towards the hero, which Jan recognized as those he had already defeated. Spontaneously, in the darkness of the fog, the battle began. Having withstood the first blow, Yang drew his blade, believing that his test had begun. Following this, Jan performed a directional jump. Swinging his sword quickly, he cut the bone dragons into many pieces. Yana was not at all surprised when the seemingly defeated undead began to restore themselves. The hero was ready for such challenges, promising to destroy the undead until they got tired of regenerating. New slashing blows fell upon the undead. With Athos's help, Jan crushed the chopped bones into dust. Having finished, the hero grinned smugly, not feeling even a bit of difficulty in such a test. Next, Jan hurried to climb to the top. As one might expect, something strange was already moving to intercept the hero. Unable to cope with the barrier, Yana was thrown off the mountain slope. At the very last moment, miraculously, the hero caught hold of the edge of the ledge. Immediately, Yana was excited by Athos's roar. The dragon has become distorted, changed color, and is basically undergoing a metamorphosis. Soon, someone descended onto the mountain path. A dark figure with a sword stood at the ledge where Ian was now. Clearly nervous, Ian smiled at the figure. The next moment, Yang skillfully grabbed the other edge of the ledge when the figure tried to knock the hero down. Ian desperately tried to survive, but the figure was also on his heels. Finally, the hero had an opportunity to get off the cliff and stand with his feet on solid ground. Assessing the state and extent of the battle, Jan involuntarily came to the conclusion that everything that was happening was a trap. Ultimately, Jan sternly raised his sword above himself, wanting to take revenge on the unknown entity that took Athos from the hero. Suddenly, the entity spoke, informing Ian that he had passed the test. Following this, the body of the black dragon familiar to Jan began to recover from the void. However, the dark entity itself had nowhere to go, as a result of which the hero entered into a conversation with it. Jan introduced himself to the entity, but it, as before, asked Jan the same question. At some point in time, It dawned on Yan that the entity may have recognized the hero as the demon lord. Then, cutting through the air, a sword flew from the sky into the hands of the entity. Jan just opened his mouth, unable to really keep track of when all this happened. The next action, the sword touched Jan's shoulder. Without wanting to, the hero was forced to kneel before the entity. Without knowing how or why, Jan did not feel any pain. Then an entity responded, speaking of a certain correction that had failed. In response, a battle cry was heard from Jan, who responded to the entity with a blow from his own sword. Yana missed, the blade of his weapon passed by. A fight ensued. By striking each other and attacking each other, neither of the opponents could achieve success. At some point, the entity twisted and performed a jump followed by a somersault. Jan didn't have time to parry the blow, and now watched as the blade approached the hero's throat. The next moment, mechanically, the hero grabbed the blade with his teeth. Feeling terrible discomfort, the hero nevertheless responded with his own attack. Having driven the entity away from himself and then laughed, Yang took possession of the alien weapon. Under the pressure of Jan, the entity retreated and now stood a little further away. Now, having disarmed his opponent, Jan saw his victory as only a matter of time. But suddenly the entity sat down. The entity began to exude magic and said that something had become clear to it. From the essence, the magic passed to the sword, which the opponent gave to Jan. The hero didn't even notice how the sword secretly stuck to his hand. Visually weakening, the entity, faithfully conveying its mission, gave Jan the order to kill Chloris. The hero didn't understand a thing about the entity's request, thinking that it might be somehow connected with the Devourer. Next, a message appeared from the system that Jan had become the new user of the Crimson Blade. Next, Jan called up the description of the item, reading the extremely strange lines about a certain correction that the blade carried out by feeding on the crystals of the Red Moon. Following this, Jan took one red crystal from his inventory and confirmed the blade's power. The sword glowed, replenishing its charge by only 1 unit. As soon as Jan finished his experiments, Athos's roar was heard throughout the area. A few moments later, a black dragon appeared, which made Jan extremely happy. By summoning the dragon's stats, Yang learned that Athos had absorbed the flames of immortal beings, thereby making them mortal. After reading the description, the hero for some reason compared Athos to a necromancer who could both take and return life. Afterwards, bone dragons appeared, which obviously became Athos's minions. In connection with this, the hero thought about creating his own army of elite creatures, which would be absorbed by the black dragon. Then, strange numbers appeared above the bone dragons, which Jan had never seen before. Since Jan had plenty of time, he decided to try out his newly acquired fix at the same time. Taking out a new blade, Yang stared at one of the bone dragons. As soon as the hero swung his blade, the bone dragon strangely disintegrated and completely disappeared. After spending a small amount of charges, Yang discovered that the Crimson Blade was capable of simply destroying any opponent, including self-reviving undead. After which, Yana asked an important question, because earlier the entity used a sword on the hero, but it did not lead to anything. The hero tried to get some clues from the system, but it also found no information. With his hands in his pants pockets, Jan generally considered the raid to be a success, since not only the hero, but also the Black Dragon himself had leveled up. Some time passed, and the action moved to the place where the exit from the dungeon was located. Min and Vita perked up when they saw the exit suddenly become active. Min suggested that Vita go first. Surely the girl would want to wait for Jan. Unexpectedly, the girl's dragons began to tremble. Athos appeared in the sky and dived towards the exit from the dungeon. Having landed, Athos, at Jan's command, roared at the dragons, thereby ordering them to behave quietly. Crouching to the ground, they obeyed. After getting off the dragon, Yang turned to the girls, praising them for their work and allowing them to leave the dungeon. Also, the hero hoped that the girl would keep her mouth shut. Vita was about to decide on an answer, but Min promised to keep the secret of what happened for both of them. Afterwards, Min hoped that she would have another opportunity to talk to Yan. The hero looked at her silently, without giving an answer. A little later, leaving the dungeon, Min said goodbye to Yan. Jan himself found the girl downright strange, because she considered the hero a truly good person. Now the last player left in the dungeon, Yan began to think about how to return to the human world without getting into trouble. Yang thought about the newly formed demon faction, guessing that they should also be able to join the human factions. Deciding to test his theory, Ian launched a parallel incarnation. Having crossed into the abyss, the hero discovered that upon his return, in the city of demons, there were even more demons. Almost immediately, a notification from the system appeared, stating that demon players could leave the boundaries of the abyss. From that moment on, Ian decided to find out whether not only an ordinary demon, but even the boss himself would be able to leave the abyss. At his command, Lucifer appeared in the throne room. Immediately, Jan ordered the demon to try to pass through the gates of the abyss. Some time passed, and the scene moved to the icy plains, where one of the gates of the abyss was located. The guards standing there were terribly frozen, considering the cold their main weapon, which would not let even one demon through the gate. To their amazement, Lucifer was approaching the gate. Realizing the threat, the guards prepared for battle. But then Lucifer's voice was heard, calling the whole commotion too noisy. Simply by passing by, her power overwhelmed the guards. Reaching the gate, Lucifer raised her leg over the forbidden line. Having confirmed her master's theory, the demon was able to enter the human world. Later, upon returning, Lucifer reported the results of her campaign, letting Ian know that the demon had lost part of her strength and level when she stepped into the human world. But even with such a turn of events, Lucifer remained a formidable fighter, which Ian wanted to use to his advantage. Following this, Ian gave a new order, commanding Lucifer to go to the human world and punish some players on behalf of the ruler. Next, Ian gave Lucifer orders regarding himself. The hero made it clear to the demon that a man named John would become the ruler's guide. The events shifted back a bit, when players, outraged by Yan's behavior, gathered around the entrance to the dungeon of the secret kingdom of dragons. On behalf of many, Stone expressed his distrust of Tan, who had previously covered for the young man. However, no matter what accusations the magician made against Tan, he could not respond in any way. Suddenly, another military leader spoke up with accusatory rhetoric, declaring that Tang had tarnished the honor of the royal guard. Denying the accusations against him, Tang openly challenged the military leader. At the same moment when the fight was supposed to happen, Vita and Min came out of the dungeon. The girls were joyfully received, and immediately began to ask about the fate of the elves and John himself. Vita began to think about her answer again, but Min got ahead of her, coming up with a story about how the girls had simply gotten lost and had lost all the other participants in the raid. Then, Vita came up with a thrilling story on the fly, full of dangers and a miraculous rescue of girls who still didn't understand anything. Many believed in Ming's story, but not the military leader who knew the rules for passing through the dungeons. Then, grabbing the girls by the hands, the military leader decided to take them to the kingdom of the elves for interrogation. The commander's action was interrupted by Stone and the shogun, who did not want to give their people to anyone. The warlord pointed a threatening finger at the people, promising them consequences if anything happened to the elf princes in the dungeon. Finding the right moment, Atan entered the conversation. Politely and condescendingly, he began to remind everyone present of the importance of an alliance with the elves, without which it was not possible to defeat the demon lord. The military leader assessed Atan's impulses, promising that he would report on the prospects of an alliance with the country of Shiva. As they were talking, an arrow-shaped aura appeared far in the sky. Growing larger as it approached, it soon reached the entrance to the dungeon. The arrow-shaped aura stopped moving, and from there, an elegant leg appeared. The players stared at the demon Lucifer, who, for some completely impossible reason, had nevertheless left the abyss. Stone felt that the demon's aura was not as strong as in the abyss, and therefore he immediately grabbed a couple of magic scrolls. After calling up the character window, Stone still didn't know Lucifer's skills, but her level had indeed dropped slightly to semi-divine. The lull was broken by the elven commander, who called on everyone to unite in order to defeat the demon together. Soon Tan led the attack against Lucifer. Some fought with full dedication, while others, like Athan, were ready to run away if the battle turned out to be unfavorable for the players. Words of blessings were heard from everywhere, and along with them, battle spells screamed through the air. Their combined efforts saw Tan finish with his fist of absorbing destruction. Magic, curses, sword swings, and a bunch of other things were now flying towards Lucifer. Subsequently, all this resulted in a series of explosions of incredible scale in their forms. With the end of the attack, Lucifer even felt like she had unexpectedly lost a couple of feathers from her wings. Now the course of action passed to the demon himself. Lucifer flapped her wings and used her Dark Mastery ability. Streams of air appeared that began to grab the players and pull them towards a dark point in the sky. But then Stone noticed that Lucifer's influence did not extend to all the players. Tan, Min, and Vita still stood firmly on their feet. At that very moment, the portal to enter the dungeon started working. From there, Yan emerged and activated his manipulations on Tan. The next moment, urgent thoughts came into Tan's head. Grabbing the girls by the hands, he dragged them somewhere. The hero looked after the players, whom he had skillfully gotten rid of with the help of his tricks. From now on, all Jan could do was wait. Having flown over Ian, Lucifer soon landed next to him. Having studied the hero, Lucifer did not have any friendly feelings towards Ian. However, she did not dare to contradict the decree of her master. Ian laughed in response, then began to tell Lucifer to help the hero take one person. The demon's face changed for a second or two. From Jan's approach, from his commanding voice, Lucifer felt that very aura of the ruler. Soon the scene moved to Jan's house. There, enjoying freedom, Lilith calmly watered the flowers. There was a roar. A demonic spot appeared in the sky, which caused the elf to drop the watering can in fear. Then, Lilith collapsed to the ground, sensing that something was wrong. Then, using magic, Lucifer grabbed the elf and began to pull her into the portal. Lilith tried to break free and, just in case, find out who intended to kidnap her. However, no matter how the elf resisted, with each passing moment, she became closer to the portal. Very soon he disappeared without a trace. The events of the plot moved to another place again. Somewhere in the middle of the wasteland, the resurrected players were completely depressed by their latest defeat. Suddenly, Stone remembered Tanya, deciding to ask those around him if anyone had seen the military leader. Many remained silent, and only the Shogun gave a negative answer. Then Athan's voice was heard, reporting that he saw Tan run away somewhere. He would probably be an ally for Lucifer. The magician immediately rose from the ground. He asked Atan to express his opinion fully and honestly. Folding his arms across his chest, Atan publicly suggested betrayal on the part of Yan and Tan. However, Stone did not agree with this opinion, believing that Tan could not betray humanity. Athan grinned slyly, insisting that friendship not blind the mage to the truth. After listening to Athan's arguments, some players began to agree with the opinion about Tan's betrayal. Athan went even further in his judgments, recalling how players not long ago suddenly clashed with each other for no apparent reason. Although he was reluctant, Stone still admitted that only Tan, as a person of the appropriate level, could have the power to control someone else's mind. Their discussions were interrupted by the Shogun. The Shogun reminded everyone of the disappearance of Min and Vita, then sternly asked if Atan had accused the girls of betrayal. Realizing that he was close to failure, Athan did not blame the girls, only stating that Tan had decided to extract the secrets of the secret kingdom of dragons from them. Afterwards, Atan began to think, considering it necessary to interrogate the girls, because his nephew never returned from the dungeon. Atan then continued his speech about Tan's abnormal behavior lately. He urged everyone to put aside their previous disputes and concentrate on finding Tan. But without expecting it, Athan received a punch in the cheek. As if from nowhere, Tan appeared behind Atan and gave him a warning slap. From the blow he received, Athan flew to the side, breaking a stone block. Following this, Stone's voice was heard ordering Tan to give an explanation for his behavior. Tan did not want to justify himself, and therefore sent all those who doubted the commander's loyalty straight to St. Vega. Almost immediately, Min and Vita appeared behind Tan and began to justify the military leader, since he had obviously fallen under someone else's influence again. Eventually, some players' suspicions began to focus on Yan's figure. Almost immediately, they themselves destroyed their assumptions, because the hero was at the insignificant 4th level of transformation. Regardless, the players had no choice but to head to the holy city and ask the high priestess for help. Meanwhile, Atan, who had come to his senses, once again swore that he would take cruel revenge on Tan. Some time passed, and the action was already taking place in the holy city, where the players came to an audience with Vega. Having agreed to help, Vega checked Tan for lies, finding no demonic influence in him. Afterwards, her attention turned to Min and Vit. Using lie detection magic, Vega asked the girls if they really weren't lying about what happened in the dungeon. The girls were silent for a long time, mentally pondering their answers and their hopeless situation in front of the priestess's power. Afterwards, they both started whining, which immediately gave themselves away. At the same time, Tan began to doubt Yan's personality more and more. But Tan's thoughts did not align with the actual testimony of people who knew Yan and spoke about him exclusively positively. A grave dilemma was imprinted in Tan's thoughts. He did not know whether he would be able to destroy the hero if his suspicions of his connections with the Abyss were confirmed. Then Vega's voice was heard, concluding that the girls' lie had been exposed and that they could secretly confess to the priestess. After discussing their common concerns, the girls eventually agreed to Vega's proposal. Afterwards, the priestess led the girls behind her. Before leaving for the confessional, the girls noticed how strangely Athan was behaving, clearly wanting to join them. 10 minutes have passed since then. Accompanied by the priestess, the girls left the confessional. Suddenly, Vega pointed a spear towards Athan, wanting to know if he really was planning to kill the other players in the dungeon. Athan raised his hands and tried to come up with something quick to justify himself. Vega spoke again, demanding an honest answer from Athan, being ready to decide the fate of the player or bring charges against Ian himself. Immediately after this, the voices of other players were heard, who believed in John's innocence, but considered Athan himself a vile scoundrel. Unable to justify himself in any way, Athan growled in disappointment. He then fell to his knees before Vega, who handed Athan's fate into Tan's hands. Instantly, the burning figure of Tan appeared above Atan. Trying to save himself, Athan began to babble about Ian's shady personality, accusing him of killing the elves. As soon as Atan touched on the topic of guilt, not only of himself, but also of the girls, of Tan himself and the Celestial City, he received a blow to the solar plexus. The blow proved fatal, causing the statue to immediately get to work. By firing a beam of light, the statue resurrected Athan in the city square. Immediately, Tan flew into Atan, who had just begun to breathe. A blow was struck, followed by a withering fire attack. Almost immediately, Atan was resurrected, but this time, instead of rebirth, Tan sent him to prison. Athan wanted to take revenge by attacking from behind, but the guards who arrived in time did not allow this. With no more trump cards, Atan decided to go for broke and secretly contact his brother. Through the system, Athan left a message where he told about his failures, asked to tell the elves everything, and also to encourage the country of Shiva to join the faction of demons. With a bit of irony, Ian secretly observed this whole story through the soul mark. Later, Jan continued his observations of the unfortunate Atan, who now spent hours and days behind bars. The hero was not averse to accepting an entire state into the demon faction, but as for Athan's fate, Jan believed that he should be punished. Next, Jan remembered the kingdom of the elves, whose inhabitants caused the hero a strong disgust, and only Lilith was not like them. Already imagining himself as a new divine figure after the completion of the grand plan, Jan promised that he would put the arrogant elves in their place. Later, Ian reached the statue of demons, where now nothing and no one could interfere with the hero in increasing levels. Meanwhile, other demons flocked to the statue, continuing the endless construction work. At that very moment, Livia's voice was heard, speaking not very flatteringly about Jan. The hero walked past the demon, instructing her not to waste time talking. The demon of envy began to sweat from such a tone and pressure from January. Lowering her voice, Livia reluctantly agreed with Ian. Finally reaching the statue, the system opened up a series of tasks for Ian to complete in order to achieve further transformation. Seeing the familiar processes, Jan smiled, now hoping to create similar VIP conditions in the abyss. Afterwards, Ian began to comprehend the process of pumping demons through the statue. According to his plan, a trained army with a high degree of transformation will defeat the Red Moon time after time and extract red crystals. Further, in the role of the Lord, Jan will simply appropriate these crystals for himself. In this way, Jan was going to solve both the problems of wealth and obtaining charges for the cheating Crimson Blade. Then, Jan studied the tasks at the statue, finding them quite unusual, because from now on, the hero was required to destroy not only monsters, but even players whose level was higher. But first, the hero decided to take a walk through the abyss, and thus complete the first task. Meanwhile, the action moved to the state of Shiva. The player there, pacing back and forth, couldn't wait for the news. The player hoped that his relative was already carrying out an important task, thereby increasing the overall power of the country of Shiva. While he was thinking these thoughts, a signal from the system sounded, and the player decided that his relatives had made themselves known. The smile instantly disappeared from his face as he called up the system panel. Upon learning of the death of his son Vishnu, a shudder ran through the player and he began to stagger. His body was covered in beads of sweat from nervousness, as the player tried to gather his thoughts and make some kind of strong-willed decision. Considering Vishnu's sacrifice, capturing his brother, the player had no choice but to turn to the demon faction. Realizing that a war was coming between the countries, the player gritted his teeth and made his choice. Afterwards, the action moved to the Holy City. There, Vega informed everyone about Athan's arrest, and began discussing the new agenda, Ian himself. Stone responded, still not particularly believing in the hero's ability to kill 2 elven princes of the 7th level of transformation at once. The magician shook his head a couple of times. He couldn't help but believe the girl's confessions, but he still had strong doubts. Vita spoke next, recalling the strange object that Jan had used against one of the princes, and had thus immobilized the elf. One of the players noted that the girl's words were reminiscent of the capture effect, which, however, was not available to hunters of such a low level. Stone again questioned the assumptions, calling such an item too high a player-level requirement. The magician was interrupted by Tan, who sincerely considered the hero's actions in the dungeon to be legitimate methods of self-defense. The Shogun entered their conversation, doubting Jan's guilt, but not ruling out legitimate requests for the hero's arrest from the elves. Subsequently, the players' opinions about Jan's guilt in the fight with the elves were divided among those discussing the matter. Suddenly, the door to the temple swung open, calling Vega, and one of the servants ran inside. As quickly as possible, she whispered something into the priestess's ear. Following this, Vega slammed her spear onto the floor, informing everyone present that the meeting was adjourned. Vega